Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Broccoli Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Villain Deku Was Rescued by All Might. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. There was a file Detective Tsukachi was familiar with. It wasn't one he studied, or even looked through often, but he knew of it. Everyone in the precinct did. It had existed for longer than he'd been a detective, although not by much. The title was simply Little Liar. Tsukachi wasn't fond of the name, felt the connotations were too strong, especially considering how it started. Because, horrifyingly, the first document in the file was an anonymous phone call from a woman saying she'd overheard her neighbor selling his son. The boy, she'd guessed, had been little more than 3 or 4. He was quirkless, she knew that much. Tsukachi wondered how they'd known at such a young age. But those were the facts. The neighbor had then moved out 2 days later and disappeared, never to be seen or heard of again. Whatever name he'd used to rent the apartment, it had been fake and no name had ever been put to call. 3 years later was the next document, and it was little more than a guess that the cases were connected. All it was a boy, possibly 6, who had come into a doctor's surgery hysterical about his father being ill. Dr. BNHA, just finishing her shift, had scooped him up and assured her colleagues she'd sorted out. She'd then disappeared for 3 days, returning malnourished and revealing she'd been tricked, held at gunpoint until she'd agreed to treat what she could only describe as a villain. But even then, all she'd ever asked about was the boy. Was he okay? Had they found him? They hadn't. 2 years later, a convenience store owner had been locked in his own bathroom after a boy had allegedly been struggling with the lock. Once he'd gone to help, he'd been pushed inside and barricaded in. He'd escaped hours later to find his store robbed and all the security tapes wiped clean. And so the profile of Little Liar was created, a seemingly quirkless boy who worked alongside villains as an accomplice. Willingly or unwillingly, it didn't matter. The point was, he still did it. He still waltzed into places, played the innocent child card, and disappeared again every time. Always around Tokyo but never in the same ward. Sometimes Tsukachi thought about it. Sometimes he forgot about him completely. But one day, he'd like to solve the case. One day, he'd like to meet him. What are you? Hero. Smack. I asked you what you are. I'm gonna be a hero. The resounding thud was overlapped with a cry of pain and the ominous crunch of bones breaking. We'll do this over and over until you give us the right answer. You are a villain. That's not what Smack. You're lucky we're patient. The hands left his body, dropping him to the floor. He gasped for breath as he struggled to his knees, watching those feet walk away. Give him 1 meal a day and a week in solitary. His eyes widened as panic crept in. No, please. That hand was back, yanking him up by the neck. Well then, maybe next time you'll choose the right side to be on. Deku. In the end, it all blurred together. Years and years of torture and abuse. Useless because he had no quirk, but useful for the very same reason. No one would suspect a quirkless boy. Days filled with endless training. Knives and guns being thrust upon him and being taught to use them over and over again. Getting punished every time he refused to hurt someone. A slap, a punch, a broken bone, a stab wound. The weeks spent in solitary, alone with nothing but absolute darkness. Nothing but darkness and the memory of a clip he had seen on the television once, years ago. It's all right now. Why? Because I am here. The ruckus downstairs was louder than normal. Deku would know. He'd been with the Horsemen, as they called themselves, for over 10 years now. He knew everything about them. And this wasn't the usual police scatter. Ruckus. He tore his eyes away from the window. The only thing he had to do in this jail cell they called a room. If he knew what was going on, he could better prepare for whatever nightmare would undoubtedly be thrust upon him. Pressing his ear to the door, Deku closed his eyes, taking a deep breath before listening as hard as he could. The 4 voices he'd come to dread all filtered together. Swearing and threats snapped at each, but Deku managed to piece together a picture, if a blurry one at that. A new hero was rumored to be in town and, if true, it could spell their demise. Deku frowned there. He'd seen the rise and fall of many heroes and not once had any of them caused a stir. No, his captors knew as well as he did that most heroes fell into obscurity within a few years, and even if they didn't, the Horsemen were never in any danger. But for them to be, or their suppliers to be, no, that was something new. There came the sound of a door slamming and then silence. Silence wasn't so odd except that it was. Yes, they'd conditioned him, trained him. Deku shuddered there, but he still wasn't trusted. He'd never been left alone. There had always been someone, even if they'd been drunk out of their mind or passed out on a couch, left behind. Deku was never left on his own. His frown deepened, listening harder. Minutes ticked past. First 3, then 4, 5, and eventually 10, and still no noise. No footsteps, no creaking of a chair, no distant hum of a television. Abandoning the door, Deku flung himself back at his bed, clambering up to the window. It was barred, but he could see out, and a cursory glance showed him that no, there was no one standing guard outside. No Seikayo, no Ketsubu, no Kusen, no Shaori. No one. Deku froze. Could this be? Surely, after 10 years, they wouldn't have made this mistake. They wouldn't have been so blind, so stupid. A voice then traitorously nudged at the back of his skull. But what if they had? What if this was his one and only chance to escape and he didn't because he what? Didn't take that chance. Wasn't brave enough. What did he have to lose? Deku exhaled loudly, hands drumming against his thighs. He could do this. He could. He'd envisioned it many times. He could escape. It would be easy. He had the theory down. He just he had to be brave. Brave like All Might was in that video he'd seen all those years ago. All Deku had to hold on to for years was the belief that he could one day be a hero like All Might. Maybe this was his first step. If he did this, if he escaped now, this could be his way of saying I am here. Okay, Deku breathed, pushing himself up. His feet slipped into shoes that were more threadbare than anything and were 2 sizes too small, but it didn't matter. The door to his room was locked. It always was. But Deku had been taught lock-picking from a young age. It was one of the first things he'd been taught. The villains hadn't cared that he'd known how to escape. Not when they could capture him within seconds and he was powerless against their quirks. But if they weren't here, that did it, the final piece sliding into place. Within a minute, Deku had worked the lock open, slamming the door behind him and locking it again for good measure. The main room downstairs, the one connected to the front door, had cameras, so that was out. The windows were barred in most rooms, but if Deku remembered correctly, and he did, the ones in the bathroom weren't. Why would they be? No one could escape through such a small window. Well, no adult to be precise. An underweight, short teenager, that was another thing entirely. Hopping up onto the bathroom sink, Deku squeezed himself out the window. It was tight, but he made it. He only had seconds to assess the situation, spotting a patch of dirt to his right and aiming for it, rolling as he hit the ground. His shoulder jarred on impact and his broken ribs screamed, but he couldn't focus on it. Not now, not when he was so close. Dashing from one shadow to another and then one more, Deku found himself the closest he'd ever been to freedom. If he could just scale this wall, he'd be free. Again, his training proved to be useful. It took him less than 30 seconds to reach the top, fingertips raw but worth it. Flinging himself over, Deku took one long, last look at the rundown apartment block he'd lived in for most of his life. And with that, he ran. He ran and he ran and he never looked back. Deku didn't know how long he ran. He zigzagged down street after street, through alleyways and across parks. Even then, he'd had to stay in less populated areas for the most part. After all, he didn't exactly blend in. Not with his ill-fitting clothes, stained with dirt and blood. His hair was unkempt and unwashed, his skin not much better. Already a few women had pulled their children away from him, yanking them away as though he was contagious. He wondered if any of them had called the police. He hoped not. As much as Deku wanted to deny it, he knew what he was. In the eyes of the law, he was very much a villain. Eventually his lungs gave out. Deku slumping down in an underpass, chest heaving and side burning with a stitch. Surely he could stay here for just a minute, just until he caught his breath. And then he would. Deku's breath caught. Shit, he didn't know where he could go. He'd never thought so far ahead as to, well, look here, a convenient hiding place. Deku knew danger, was well acquainted with it. And this voice, this was danger. Launching to the side, Deku yelped as an arm of what appeared to be sludge slammed down exactly where he'd be standing. His hands fumbled for the back of his pants, swearing sharply because, he wasn't on an assignment, he didn't have a weapon. The one time he actually wanted one. Oh, what's this? The slime monster asked, Deku backing up further. You look like you're missing something. Did you leave your quirk at home? Deku ground his teeth together. I don't have one, and even if I did, I wouldn't let someone like you use it. Let me, the villain crowed, eyes narrowing. I'd like to see you try and stop me. There came the attack again. Only this time Deku was looking for it. It was easier this time to dodge, throwing himself left and rolling across the ground, scrambling up as fast as he could. He couldn't win this fight. Not on his own, but he could keep it contained until the heroes arrived. They did actually do that, right? Before he could ponder it further, Deku was thrown off balance, a slimy hand wrapping around his arm the same time one smothered his ankle. Shit, he'd been careless. With one foot planted he could barely move, heart pounding as that sludge crept higher, slowly coming to suffocate him. It couldn't end like this, not so soon after he'd escaped. It's all right now, came a voice, booming from the end of the underpass. Deku didn't know what to make of it and he hoped to gods it was a hero, but nevertheless he steeled himself, hands balling into fists, and ready to fight the second he was freed, if he was. It turned out, he didn't even need to worry. Before he could fight, before he could help, the sludge villain was, quite literally, blown apart. The force of the wind knocked Deku over, the boy throwing himself to the ground so as to be out of the ground. Hey, survival tactics never wore off. He stayed there, motionless, until a hand came and rested on his back. He braced himself, but the touch simply remained, gentle, firm. "It's all right now, boy." "Why?" "Because I'm here." Deku's head snapped up, all but flinging himself onto his back. His eyes widened, words catching in his throat. He looked older than when he'd last seen him, but Deku recognized him. How could he not? The figure that had been all he'd had, the figure he'd held onto for all those years. ALMIGHT. The hero gave him a salute. "Yo, now, let me deal with this guy." "You catch your breath." Deku could only nod dumbly, watching the hero as he carefully, Deku didn't know, actually, collected the villain into 2 bottles. It was an odd situation, to be honest. It was only when All Might slipped the 2 bottles into his trouser pockets and began to stretch his legs that Deku realized what he was about to do. "Wait," he called, flying to his feet and latching onto All Might's hand. Before you go, I have something I need to ask." All Might's hand came down on his head, ruffling his hair. Why not ask someone else?" Deku frowned. "There's no one else I can." He trailed off as All Might took that opportunity to shoot off into the sky. Years of quick reflexes made it easy to grab hold of his belt, Deku tightening his grip as the ground disappeared around them. Hey, let go." All Might yelled upon realizing he was there. "We're in the air," Deku deadpanned. All Might turned sheepish there but deposited them onto the nearest rooftop. Deku barely stumbled as he hit the ground, already rounding on the hero that was, in turn, already beginning to scold him. That was incredibly foolish, not to mention dangerous. "If I hadn't of." One question. It came out more as a cry than anything, but it made All Might pause. His expression turned sour, but he gruffly nodded, turning away to cough into his hand. He made a vague gesture, a sign Deku was to continue. Deku toed the floor before gathering his resolve. This was likely going to be his only chance. Can someone like me, someone without a quirk, someone useless can they become a hero? The answer hung in the air for a long time. Too long, Deku's heart already sinking. He had known the answer, deep down he had, but he'd held on to the barest hope that maybe he was wrong, that maybe he could do good. But if All Might didn't think so, then then what? What could he do? Go back, plead for forgiveness, and hope he'd be welcomed back, finally initiated as the villain his captors had always wanted. His internal monologue was cut off by an odd hissing sound, Deku's head cocking to the side at the plume of smoke coming from where All Might had once been. In his place, there stood an impossibly thin, frail man. "Who are you?" "I'm ALMIGHT." All Might couldn't even finish the declaration before he was hacking into his hand, blood seeping through his fingers. And all Deku could think was that this was the symbol of peace. This was the best the heroes had to offer. This couldn't save him. It was becoming apparent nothing ever would. Toshinori had been midway through his lecture on how dangerous it was to be a hero, on how one needed a quirk, so ready to show off his scar as a way to frighten the boy, show him the harsh realities of life when he heard an odd sound. Looking over, Toshinori blinked in confusion when he saw the very boy who'd caused this situation sob loudly, hands clutching at his chest. Toshinori's mouth snapped shut. Yes, he'd been a little firm, but he hadn't been so very harsh, had he? And yet this boy, he looked as though Toshinori had crushed the very world right in front of him. Cautiously he stepped forward, crouching down and taking the young man's shoulders in his hands. "Son, why are you crying?" He got a sniff in return. You're All Might. And if if All Might looks like like this, then you can't save me." Toshinori's blood suddenly ran cold, hands tightening. "My boy, save you from what?" He only sobbed harder. From them. It wasn't an answer, but it was also too much of one. It was enough to make Toshinori lean back and finally take in the boy properly for once. What he saw made his eyes widen, face losing color. This boy, this young boy, was pocked with scars, had muscle tone that didn't match his malnutrition-looking skin, had eyes that Toshinori had only seen on heroes that had seen too much. His skin was bruised and scraped, his clothes didn't fit, even the way he held himself indicated his ribs were injured. Who did this to you?" Toshinori whispered in horror. He was met with equally wide eyes, the boy stumbling back. "No, it's okay. I don't." All Might can't. "I can." Toshinori cut in severely, the teenager freezing in his arms. "I save everyone I can, and you, young man, are right in front of me." "You're all right." "Why?" "Because I'm here." Something there must have convinced him, because the next thing Toshinori knew, he had an armful of crying teenager. He'd never hugged back quicker in his life. Deku had always been told he cried too much, had been constantly punished for it, but this time he felt it was actually allowed. He was crying, and not only was he allowed to seek comfort, it was given back. Deku had never experienced a hug before, but if this is what they felt like, all warmth and safety, he desperately wanted more. All Might held him until his tears ran out, hands never stopping their mindless rubbing of his back. "Thank you," he managed to choke out, All Might squeezing him tighter. "Of course, I also realize I never asked your name." Oh, Deku said, pulling away and scrubbing at his eyes. It's Deku. All Might frowned. That doesn't sound like much of a name. Deku panicked. But I don't have any other. Deku, where are your parents? If anything, the silence was even louder than before. Deku didn't know how to answer, just making himself smaller until he was practically curling in on himself. He didn't want to answer that because how could he? He didn't know his parents. He'd never heard boo about his mother, and his father had sold him to villains because he was quirkless, useless, and yes, he'd heard the story many a time. He hadn't even been sold for a lot of money, barely even 2 months' worth of rent. Deku, his name was practically a sigh. Can I take it your parents aren't around? Deku bowed his head. I'm sorry, my young man, you have nothing to be sorry for. All Might murmured, taking one of his arms and tracing over the scars tentatively. A villain. Maybe he hadn't meant it that way, but Deku jerked back, snatching his hand away. I'm not, he cried, knocking All Might away when he wanted to grab him. I'm not. I'm a hero. I'm not a villain, I'm not. Deku, that's no. Deku clapped his hands over his ears, refusing to listen and only removing them when he heard an explosion go off in the distance. All Might's line of sight was identical to his, but it was Deku who noticed the missing bottles from the hero's pocket. He didn't even think before he was launching himself over the building's edge and onto the fire escape. Deku, wait. The words may as well have fallen on deaf ears. Deku was already jumping from railing to railing, landing on the ground harder than his fractured ribs would have liked, but there was nothing for it. He couldn't back down now, couldn't run away, because this was his fault. If these explosions were because of the sludge villain, then this was entirely his fault, and as such, he had to fix it. He wasn't a villain just yet. Skidding around a corner, Deku came face to face with the very sight he'd been dreading. As he'd predicted, the sludge villain was here. And worst of all, it had someone. Deku bolted for the front of the gathered crowd, tugging on the coat of the hero closest. It is someone. You have to help. We know that, kid, came the tight reply. But against that quirk, we just have to wait. But you're a hero. Kid, back. Deku scowled but did as asked. Maybe they were right. Maybe against this quirk they couldn't ... But then Deku saw it clear as day. The boy caught by the sludge villain, and he was asking for help. The next second he was running, feet moving before he even knew it. There were shouts from behind him, fear from the crowd and warnings from the heroes, but Deku ignored them all. A mangled pipe on the ground, debris from one of the destroyed buildings, was scooped up. Deku could use it, he could use anything. His aim was true, swinging the pipe like a baseball bat, squarely hitting the villain in the eye. It reeled back, dropping its hold and allowing the other boy to escape. What the fuck was that? Came the snarl, Deku's nose scrunching up. It doesn't matter. Use your quirk and send him flying. I was already gonna do that, was the answer he got, but neither of them got the chance. Never got the chance because, just like before, All Might came through. Deku recognized the sound of the wind pressure, yanking the other teenager down with him just as the shockwave blasted over their heads. Silence fell, and then rain. The crowd behind them started to cheer, celebrating All Might's victory. Deku took the opportunity to run. Tucked away at the base of a jungle gym, Deku yelped and jumped a good foot when a hand landed on his arm. He must have dozed off without realizing. His feet scuffed against the ground as he tried to free himself, only stopping when the owner of the hand started to talk. You're a hard one to track down, young Deku. Deku whipped around, disbelieving. All Might. He was met with a wide grin, All Might managing to coax him out. The moon was high in the sky behind him, Deku blinking against the darkness. All Might smiled, ruffling his hair. I meant to catch you after that showdown, but you vanished. You're very quick when you want to be. I have to be, Deku corrected before slapping a hand over his mouth. To his credit, All Might didn't so much as blink. No, instead he crouched down, locking their gazes together. I realize now, Deku, that I upset you earlier with my words. I never meant to imply that you were a villain, only that villains had done terrible things to you. He thumbed a particularly deep nick in Deku's ear. I also noticed that today, you were the one that acted most like a hero. When everyone else sat back and waited, it was you and you alone that responded to the cry of help. I think, All Might said, very slowly and very clearly, that you can become a hero. Deku's bottom lip wobbled, eyes traitorously starting to water. All Might smiled sadly, cupping his face and wiping his tears away. Now, if you'll let me, can I ask you to do something for me? Deku frowned. For All Might. All Might nodded. Yes, what ... What do I have to do? Well, young Deku, you'd have to come to my house, have dinner, and, I hope, have a good night's sleep somewhere that isn't a park. I think that's the least I can do for today's hero, don't you think? Deku hesitated, hands held close to his chest. He didn't. He wanted to go, but could he? Deku, with me you'll be safe. I won't ever let them find you. Not again. Deku swallowed thickly before tentatively reaching out, sliding his hand into All Might's. Okay, The truth was, Toshinori didn't know what to do with Deku once he got him into his apartment. Deku had been nothing but a shadow the whole way over, and, more than once, Toshinori swore he'd disappeared, only to turn around and find him right behind him. He moved silently, unnervingly so. Toshinori shuddered as he thought about whatever had been done to this boy to make him such a way. Pushing open the door, Toshinori swept an arm out, pasting a smile on his face. "This is where I live," Deku faltered on the doorstep. I should gee. He was bolting before he'd even finished, but Toshinori had easily seen the move coming. He'd swapped to his muscle form and set Deku on the threshold before he could even blink. He then crouched down, taking those slim shoulders in his hands again. "Young man, I can't force you to stay, but please realize, I would like you to stay." Deku swallowed thickly. He didn't reply but did cautiously toe off his shoes. "Do you live alone?" "I do," Toshinori said, unsurprised when that made Deku a little more confident. Taking his own shoes off, Toshinori let Deku have free rein of the apartment. He moved like a timid cat, jumping back from each door as he pushed it open, fearful of what may lay on the other side. Toshinori sat himself on the couch with a book, content to read until Deku had finished his investigation. Even so, he watched the boy closely, heartbreaking with every minute that went by. No child should be so scared, so wary, so broken. Eventually, though, Deku came and stood awkwardly across from him. Toshinori looked up at him with a smile. "Would you like to join me, young Deku, or would you prefer a shower?" Deku chewed on his bottom lip before moving like lightning, snatching his phone up and backing away quickly. "I'll shower, but you can't call the police," Toshinori spluttered. I want your laptop too." Deku's voice was sharp and Toshinori could suddenly see the villains who he didn't know actually captured him, beaten him. "You have one," Deku said, clearly seeing his pause as a denial attempt. "I saw your charger." Toshinori would object, except he completely understood. At this point, Deku had no reason to trust him. They were almost opposite sides of the playing field. Toshinori didn't know if he'd be so confident around villains either, so he smiled instead, getting to his feet and rummaging through his satchel. "Here," he said, holding the device out. "Take it. I'll make dinner while you shower. Is there anything you don't like?" Deku shook his head, slipping down the hall but leaving the bathroom door open a crack. The purpose was obvious, to hear Toshinori better. Toshinori sighed but turned to his refrigerator. Small steps, that's all this was going to be. Deku didn't know what to think of his situation. Really, he didn't. His whole world had changed so much in the span of 12 hours. He'd gone from being a captive of villains to now apparently showering in the home of the #1 hero, someone he had never even so much as dreamed about meeting. There was also the promise of a warm shower, a cooked meal, and a bed that wasn't a mattress on the floor. Turning the temperature up to a respectable level, Deku shed his clothes and stepped under the spray. It felt heavenly on his skin, washing away days of grime and soothing aching muscles. There were a few toiletries that didn't belong to him and Deku was hesitant to use them, though he did finally concede and use the body wash. Maybe All Might would frown at him using his hair products, but at the very least he probably wanted Deku to be properly clean if he was going to be, sitting on his furniture. Probably because he had an ear constantly out did Deku hear the footsteps headed his way. He tensed, hands balling into fists. There only came a knock at the door though, and no attempt to push it open despite it not be closed, let alone locked. Toshinori smiled when he handed them over, ruffling Deku's hair. "You look much better already," he declared with a grin, indicating for him to sit before passing over a bowl. "I thought maybe it would be best to start small and simple if you're not used to big meals." I'm not," Deku admitted, thankful for the plain bowl of rice in front of him. Toshinori nodded, coming and sitting opposite him. With a hand, he flipped on a device next to him and music filled the apartment. "I hope you don't mind," Toshinori said as Deku looked around curiously. "I simply find eating in silence awkward. And I don't usually have guests." Deku nodded in understanding, feet absently swinging under the table. "I guess, being a hero, it's probably dangerous to have a family, right?" Toshinori looked surprised at being addressed, but there was a warmth in his eyes. "It is, I suppose, but I simply haven't met anyone and I'm not interested, if I'm honest." Deku mulled that over. That makes sense. Endeavor has children. Toshinori's eyebrows shot up. "How do you know that?" He shrugged. "I heard it on TV." Toshinori nodded in agreement, the rest of their meal passing in silence. After doing the dishes, Toshinori admitted he had paperwork to do in relation to his hero work, passing Deku the remote to his television. Watch whatever you'd like, he was told, and Deku just didn't know what to do with that. He cautiously flipped the TV on, perching on the arm of the chair and watching whatever it was that came on first. This can't be interesting, Toshinori said after a while. Deku jumped, face burning. Toshinori frowned, leaving the table to come and stand in front of him. My boy, is it possible you've never been given the choice before? Deku only flushed harder, hiding in his shirt. Toshinori's smile faltered, head shaking. My poor boy, he whispered, sliding the remote back into his hand and guiding him through the channels. He stopped when Deku perked up, stepping away with a smile when he was entranced in a comedy game show based around heroes. Deku quickly turned around though. Isn't this it's noisy. Toshinori laughed. I'm used to some noise. Watch it. When it's done, let me know if you liked it. Deku worried his bottom lip but reluctantly gave in. That isn't to say he watched much of the show. No, he spent most of his time surreptitiously watching Toshinori and making sure he wasn't about to make any sudden moves. The man had already promised him several times he wasn't emailing the police, and he hadn't lied about that. No, Deku could see his screen quite clearly reflected in the balcony window. The hours ticked by and by until it was nearly midnight. Eventually Toshinori caved, powering down his laptop and dropping his head into his hands wearily. You tired? Deku asked. Toshinori raised his head. You're not. Deku shrugged. Maybe. I don't know. Toshinori just dropped his head back into his hands. You should know these things, he sighed. What did they do to you? Deku winced. I don't want to talk about it. I didn't think you did, Toshinori replied, shaking his phone. I know you don't trust me, young man, but I need this on me. There may be an emergency in the night. He frowned but eventually nodded, just once. With that, he slipped to his own room, again, leaving the door open that little crack. Deku flopped onto the bed, eyes roaming the ceiling. It wasn't long until silence filled the apartment. It felt nice, it felt safe. Toshinori's alarm went off at the usual time the next morning. It was, perhaps, earlier than most people set their alarms, but with his condition, it wasn't like he slept much anyway. The pain was near constant at this point, and it forever jolted him out of sleep. The sun was barely creeping over the horizon as Toshinori pushed himself up, a hand pressing into his burning side. The pain meds on his bedside table were quickly swiped up, Toshinori popping two with ease before padding out into the main room. It was only when he saw the folded clothes on the chair that Toshinori even remembered Deku was there at all. He damn near sprinted to the boy's room, flinging the door open. He came up short at the sight of Deku sitting on the edge of the bed. He was staring at his hands and, from the looks of it, he'd been there all night. Hell, the bedroom light was still on. Deku, Toshinori asked quietly. Deku blinked up at him. Oh, is it morning? Toshinori came and crouched down, clasping his hands. Deku, did you even sleep at all? The way he flinched said enough. Did you? Was something wrong? Did I do something to make you feel unsafe? Deku quickly shook his head, jerking his hands back only to furtively twist them together. I thought if I slept, maybe this would all be a dream. And I would. He didn't need to say it, Toshinori crushing him in his arms. Deku stiffened again, as he had to the day before. But Toshinori knew why. Knew it was because even something as simple as hugging was foreign to him. This isn't a dream, he promised. I know, Deku whispered, but that was all. They remained at a stalemate until Toshinori suddenly had an idea. He ducked back into the bedroom to find his phone, coming and setting it on Deku's bedside. Deku watched him quizzically as he flipped to Tunify, finding the very jazz playlist he'd been playing the night before. Setting the volume to a bearable level, Toshinori gave Deku a grin. There, now you can sleep, and if you hear this music, you'll know you're here with me. Deku looked at him in something akin to wonder before nodding. Can I try? Of course. With that, Toshinori flipped off the lights and left. When he returned half an hour later, Deku was, thankfully, asleep. It wasn't deep and it didn't look peaceful, but it was something. Something, Toshinori thought, was more than enough. He'd made a mistake. Toshinori realized that the second he heard his front door opening. He'd left his phone with Deku. He'd forgotten to message his housekeeper, and he hadn't spoken to Deku about her, but it all became clear the second Midoriya and Co called out. I'm here. There was a flash from the bedroom, and Toshinori had already swapped to All Might, shooting forward and snapping his arms around Deku. And Co reeled back, Toshinori sending her an apologetic look even as he tried to wrestle Deku under control. Deku, who, he suddenly realized, had a pen in his hand and was holding it suspiciously like a knife. Stand down, he murmured, repeating the phrase when he heard Deku's jaw grind. That's enough, she won't hurt you. You said you wouldn't call anyone, Deku snarled. I didn't, Toshinori said firmly. Stop, and I'll explain. Tell me who she is, Deku countered. Make her leave. She's not leaving, Toshinori said. My house, my rules. Now come, sit. There was a long moment where it looked as though Deku wasn't going to budge before he eventually backed down. He slapped the pen into Toshinori's outstretched hand and retreated back to his usual perch of the arm of the chair. Toshinori took the sofa next to him, inviting Inko to sit by his side. She was unnerved by the hawk eyes watching her, and Toshinori didn't blame her at all. She also wasn't backing down, which was just like Inko. Deku, this is Midoriya. Inko, she's my housekeeper, Toshinori started. Inko, this is Deku. We met yesterday and he's staying here a while. Inko nodded, Deku frowning and folding his arms. What's a housekeeper? I look after the house, Inko explained, tone soft enough to throw Deku. I do things like cleaning, grocery shopping, washing. Sounds like a slave. Toshinori's jaw dropped while Inko merely smiled. I suppose in a way it does, but it's actually a common job. Plus, I get paid and can leave whenever I want. That seemed to pacify Deku somewhat. Toshinori took that moment to turn to Inko, taking one of her hands gently. I'm sorry for not messaging you earlier about Deku being here. I hope his presence doesn't upset you. Inko swatted him lightly. Of course not. What happened with Hikaru? That was a long time ago, Toshinori. This is hardly the first time I've seen a child since then. It was All Might's turn to cough in embarrassment, Deku just looking between them in confusion. Inko saw his look, waving a hand dismissively. I had a son, he would be your age now, I think. He died when he was very young. Oh. Deku shifted awkwardly in his place. I'm sorry. The response was a good one. In Toshinori's opinion, it was part of the reason he'd gone to such lengths to find him the night before. Yes, Deku was hurt, but there was still goodness and kindness just below the surface. Thank you, but it wasn't your fault, Inko said politely. Now, what about your parents? They must miss you. Did you get lost? Deku's face went perfectly blank and Inko paled before Toshinori could apologize for her. She stammered out an apology that only made both her and Deku look more uncomfortable. Inko then made a sound of realization. So that's why you're with Toshinori. She looked to the pen Toshinori had confiscated off him. I take it the people, whoever it was that took you in after your parents. I'm guessing they weren't nice. Deku didn't answer that. When Inko looked to him, Toshinori tried his best to smile, though it fell rather flat. Deku watched them silently for the longest time before finally hunkering down, voice barely a whisper. She can stay. Toshinori went to argue that it wasn't up to him, but Inko nudged him, going to Deku's side and placing a hand on his knee. Thank you, Deku. If you need anything, just ask. All right. Deku didn't answer, but he didn't knock her away, and Inko took that as victory enough. Toshinori, she called as she started gathering cleaning supplies from under the sink. If he's staying, he'll need clothes. Toshinori spluttered indignantly while Deku's head cocked to the side. Since staying, green eyes flew his way and Toshinori shrugged. If you well, if you'd like. Until you get settled. Get settled where? Deku asked, Toshinori able to see those walls rising again. Where are you going to take me? Nowhere, he hastily assured. Let me ask you this, he said, changing tactics. Would you live here, with me, from now on? Deku hesitated. Then that's what I mean. Until we've reached an arrangement, we'll play things by ear. Okay, Deku said slowly, holding out a hand and waiting for Toshinori to shake it. But I'm not going shopping. Toshinori chuckled. Yes, you are, because you're not wearing any more of my clothes. Deku looked cornered and Toshinori would admit it almost looked funny. Toshinori, however, didn't get his way. Not at first, at least. For the first few days Deku was too frightened to step outside and he honestly didn't blame him. He'd thought Deku would hate going from one prison to another, but somehow being confined gave him a sense of comfort. Toshinori was, with Inko's help, eventually able to coax Deku outside. There was a small shopping street not too far away, and Toshinori had finally weaseled Deku to come with him. Deku, it soon became apparent, had never been shopping or been in charge of making any of his own decisions. He'd been in awe when Toshinori had told him he could pick whatever he wanted from a clothing store, only becoming more shocked when he'd picked out a grand total of 3 things and was told to go back and choose more. Together they'd built a wardrobe. Toshinori soon discovering that Deku preferred long sleeves and pants, as well as anything soft. He also had an affinity for stripes and the color yellow. They'd even moved on to finding things to decorate the room Deku had been using as his. Simple things like duvet covers, knickknacks, cushions, wall posters. Toshinori had been very amused when Deku had tried to hide the fact that he was eyeing off All Might action figures, and maybe Toshinori had snuck 1 or 2 for his room, as well as an All Might hoodie. Last but not least, Toshinori had picked Deku up a phone. He truly needed one, especially if he was going to start going outside. Plus, Toshinori couldn't really give his up every night so Deku could listen to his music. Yes, he was grateful the strategy still worked, but he didn't like how every call he got for All Might went through there and constantly woke the teenager up. He needed more sleep than that. Of course, as they were putting up the last touches to Deku's room, Toshinori said the thing they both knew was coming but had been ignoring. Deku, I need to tell the police about you. Deku shied violently but didn't lash out, an improvement to say the least. Will they take me away? I'm not sure, Toshinori admitted, very much ignoring the pleading face from his left as he tacked up another poster. Maybe, if they find your family. Deku stiffened. They don't. He doesn't want me. You know this. I do. Toshinori grimaced. That makes things harder. But I have someone I trust, someone close to me. Could they, perhaps, meet you? Could they come here? Deku asked, relaxing a little when Toshinori nodded. Okay, but tell me first. I will, Toshinori said, in no hurry to repeat that particular disaster again. They made arrangements for the next day. Tsukachi scheduled to come just before lunch. Deku, to his credit, was doing his best to stay calm by following Inko around and asking her questions about anything he could think of. Toshinori was relieved they got on so well. Inko had the patience of a saint, and her soft tone and lack of anger seemed to rub Deku just the right way. He was happy in her company and had taken to her almost as well as he had to Toshinori. In another life, they could have passed as family. Hearing a knock at the door, Deku jolted up from where he was leaning over the couch, fingers curling in a way Toshinori had learnt meant he was itching for a weapon. He sent the boy a severe look, and while he stilled, he didn't look any more happy. Swinging the door open, Toshinori groaned. Tsukachi, I told you to come alone. The detective raised an eyebrow. You also said you had a malnutrition child. Toshinori's eyes shifted to Chiyo. Sorry, but Deku won't want you here. She harumphed. Yes, but we can't always get what we want. Move aside, dear. Toshinori tried to stop her. Really, he did. But she bustled past him in a way one wouldn't expect of an elderly woman. As he'd predicted, Deku hadn't reacted well at all and had shifted over to where the knife drawer was, body lowered into an attacking stance. It didn't take an expert to know that one wrong move would have him throwing a knife or two across the room. You can put those down. I don't want to hurt you, Chiyo said, tapping the sofa with her walking stick. I'm a hero too, just like Toshinori here. I'm also a doctor, which I think you need. Deku frowned, making no move to come any closer. I don't need a doctor. Chiyo merely rolled her eyes. And are you one? No? Then here please. Deku looked at Toshinori, who made a helpless gesture. Sorry about her. This is Recovery Girl, a renowned hero, and Detective Tsukachi. I told you about him. Deku nodded, ever so slowly rounding the counter. I'm Deku. Chiyo waved him over. Then come, let me look you over, young man. You look far too thin. Just what have you been feeding him, Toshinori? Toshinori waved his arms frantically. It wasn't my fault. He didn't get to say any more, instead just quietly observing as Deku approached Chiyo like one might a venomous snake. She seemed to catch on fairly quickly, being sure to give him space and always asking before touching him. She took measurements, blood samples, tested his reflexes, eyes, ears. Deku looked more and more uncomfortable, relief palpable when he was dismissed. And? Toshinori asked, drawing Deku under his arm and tucking him in close. It was a gesture Deku had grown used to and allowed him to do without too much fuss. He's very underweight, Chiyo said, lips pursed. I'll send you and your housekeeper a menu I'd like you to follow for him. His ribs seem to be recently healed, so keep him off rigorous exercise for a while. I'd also hazard he's got some juvenile arthritis. It looks like a few bones have broken and never set properly. Deku didn't seem surprised, though Toshinori was. He pulled Deku in that little bit tighter. But he's all right. Toshinori, the boy's fine, Chiyo said, rolling her eyes. A bit of wear and tear, but he'll be right as rain with some TLC, something I know he won't miss out on here. At that moment her pager went off, Chiyo tutting at whatever appeared on it. Now you'll have to excuse me, but I want updates. And if any of his blood work comes back abnormal, you'll be the first to know. Thank you, Toshinori said, bowing deeply. He sent Deku a smile. There, she wasn't so bad, was she? Deku huffed. She didn't poke you with needles. No, but she has, Toshinori laughed, though he winced at some of the memories. But Chiyo is also one of the reasons I'm as healthy as I am today. That isn't comforting, Tsukachi pointed out, Deku doing his very best not to laugh. Toshinori looked hurt but didn't deny the statement. He held his hand out, Deku hesitantly shaking it. I want to make it absolutely clear, Deku, that it isn't my intention to take you away from Toshinori. I only want to ask you some questions, is that okay? Deku shifted his weight nervously but nodded. Toshinori sat them all at the dining table, going to make tea only to find Inko had already done it. She made to leave, but Deku made a half-hearted attempt to pull her up. It was enough though, Inko turning. Would you like me to sit in? Deku nodded, and so they began. It began simple enough. His name, Deku. He didn't know of any other name he'd had. Age, he wasn't sure. Parents' names, again, a blank. Where were his parents? He didn't know. Where had he been living? Shiba Ward, with 4 villains who were all he'd known. When Tsukachi asked, Deku didn't even hesitate to pass their names over, as well as everything he knew about their quirks. He gave the address as best he could from memory, and Tsukachi said he'd have men on it as soon as possible. Tsukachi then handed over a file, Deku flicking it open and peering at it quizzically. Toshinori read over his shoulder, frowning at the case notes. Is there any chance, Tsukachi said, tapping the top of the page, that this boy is you? Deku jumped, scouring the page harder before pushing it away. No, he said, folding his arms tightly and very much looking away. You didn't even read it all, Toshinori chided gently, turning to the next page and skimming over it. He realized why Deku had answered the way he had though, laying a hand on the boy's shoulder. Detective Tsukachi isn't trying to pin these crimes on you. Tsukachi's mouth dropped for a second before recovering, quickly shaking his head. No, of course not. I'm sorry if it came across that way. I simply wanted to close an ongoing investigation. Deku, my boy, Toshinori hedged, please look again. Deku's head bowed in shame. I can't. I don't know what it says. There was a beat before Inko gasped, rounding the table and pulling Deku in. Those ... men. They never taught you to read or write, did they? Deku didn't answer, but he didn't have to. Both Toshinori and Tsukachi doubted literature was something they had the time to sit down and go through with Deku. I know some, Deku offered, running a finger over a few kanji. Enter, Monday. This here is police station. You know only what you needed to, Tsukachi surmised. We can come back to this later, but my team can link most of these cases together. The only thing we're missing is a starting point, and if you can give us that, it would be an immense help. Deku's eyes widened. I don't. I've never helped anyone. Nonsense, Toshinori said. You helped that young man the other day with the sludge villain. I have to warn you, Tsukachi said firmly. The starting question is, it's a loaded one. I don't want to upset you. Inko looked hesitant, hands tightening on Deku's shoulder. Deku scrunched his nose up but shrugged. My father sold me when he found out I was quirkless. After that ... not a lot of things upset me. Inko's hands flew to her mouth in horror while Toshinori choked on his inhale, hastily pounding his chest. Tsukachi smiled grimly. That's actually what I was going to ask, and you've answered it already. Then yes, you are the boy in this file. Is his father in there? Toshinori demanded. It doesn't matter. Deku cut in before Tsukachi could scold him. He hasn't looked for me since, so it doesn't matter. I don't want him. And he ... well, he doesn't want me, does he? Oh, Deku, Inko murmured, running her fingers through his hair. Deku, for his part, all but ignored her. Focus on Toshinori and Tsukachi instead. I'll have him placed in your custody, Tsukachi was saying. At the end of the month, I'd like a decision. You either adopt him or we find someone who will. He can't stay off the system forever. He needs a family, a date of birth, a quirk registration. Think it over and talk it over with him. This would be a lot of work, Toshinori. Toshinori's shoulders set. I told him I'd keep him safe. I won't go back on that, Naomasa. Detective Tsukachi smiled. No, I don't think you would. He bowed at all of them. Keep me informed, and I'm sure I'll see you in the field sooner rather than later, Toshinori. I will, you have my word. Dinner was a quiet affair, Inko joining them once more. As All Might's housekeeper, she hadn't joined him for dinner. But with Deku now, she'd become more of a presence. It eased the awkward air both Toshinori and Deku had, and it taught Deku vital social skills. The quicker he could get comfortable around people, the better. Even now they were discussing Deku visiting the konbini across the road on his own soon enough, acclimatizing him to the world and teaching him necessary, basic life skills. However, halfway through dinner, Inko placed her chopsticks down. I need to speak with both of you. The boys froze, Deku tensing while Toshinori started sweating. Is there ... have we? She turned to Deku. I know everything is so new to you and your world has changed so fast, but tell me, Deku, when you were with those ... villains ... when you thought of escaping, what was it you'd do? What would you become when free? A hero. Deku didn't even stop to think on it. It's what I always wanted to be. Wanted. Inko pressed. Want. Deku tried, frowning. I still want to help people, save people, like All Might did, and is doing, for me. Inko nodded, satisfied, before turning to Toshinori. And how do people become heroes? Well, there's usually a characteristic they show inside, he answered. And of course, attending a hero school. All the pros start there. If that's the case, Inko said, I don't want to overstep my grounds here, Toshinori, but I'd like to go from 2 full days and 3 half days to 5 full days. I'd like to teach Deku. Homeschooling, Toshinori said, rubbing his chin in thought. I will admit, it crossed my mind too. Would you be interested, Deku? Deku shook his head only to then pause. I mean, school is. I don't. But I would like to read. Toshinori laid a hand on his shoulder. Don't worry about school. For now, focus on settling in here. You have nearly a year to make a decision regarding school. They'd pegged him for 14, as it were. And if you decide it isn't for you, I can always arrange a private teacher or continue to keep Inko on. I don't think I could handle high school, Inko admitted. But we can certainly cover the basics, can't we, Deku? Deku was silent for several moments before giving a firm nod. Yeah, let's try. It was over. Toshinori knew the choice had been made for him the second he'd heard Deku laugh. It had been as simple as Toshinori getting up one morning and telling Deku they were going to make pancakes for breakfast. The flour bag had then erupted in his face, and what had started as small giggles from Deku had turned into full-blown laughs. Toshinori had chuckled along with him, but that was the moment he'd known. If Deku said yes, he'd adopt him come month's end. Deku, who had thrown himself into this lessons and already knew the hiragana alphabet and was confident on most of his katakana. Deku, who still played jazz music to sleep through the night but had also started sleeping and past the crack of dawn. Deku, who now went as far as around the block and didn't flinch at every shadow. He could handle money, was starting to cook, fussed over Toshinori whenever he came home scruffed up from an altercation with a villain. Deku, who'd burst into tears when Inko had sat him down the end of one lesson and said, writing on the paper easily as she did so, Toshinori, and I thought, if you stayed, you would be safer if you took my name. And, if we took Deku and made it out of these kanji, it would be read as Izuku. Would you like that? To be Midoriya Izuku. He'd said yes, and Toshinori had signed the papers the next day. Name, Midoriya Izuku. Dop, 20xx divided by 7 divided by 15. Quirk, one for all. That last bit hadn't been discussed yet, but Toshinori knew it would come to pass. Not now, but soon. Toshinori, why are we here? Why? To make a difference, of course. Izuku frowned, taking in the beach before him. It was covered with litter and abandoned scrap metal as far as the eye could see. It had been nearly 3 months since Toshinori had first taken him in, and they'd become better friends each day. Now he'd been invited to join Toshinori on his morning training sessions, eyes scanning the horizon. The currents bring debris here, Toshinori said, clapping a hand on his shoulder. And so people decided to take advantage of that and leave messes of their own. Izuku's frown deepened. That doesn't make it right. Toshinori laughed, tucking Izuku close. Well said, my boy. He then nudged him in the ribs. You're all healed now and you're on track with recovery girl's weight gain. That means it's time to incorporate training. Training, Izuku repeated, backing away a step or two. But I don't. Izuku. Toshinori's voice was firm but not unkind, crouching down and taking his shoulders in his hands. I won't force you to do this, I need you to know that. I understand that you've had unwilling training at the hands of villains, but if you want to be a hero, I need to know where you stand and how I can help you. If you want to be able to help others, you need to first be able to protect yourself. Izuku shoved his hands deep in his pockets, scoffing. I can protect myself. Toshinori didn't doubt it. He softened, straightening the boy's jacket. I've seen that myself firsthand. But don't you want to be stronger? Be strong enough to protect more than just yourself. That hit Izuku's head snapping up. The next second he was nodding, shoulders set. Let's do it. Home hours later with aching bones. Toshinori frowned when Izuku made for the bookshelf, pulling out a children's book and starting to study it. Toshinori set a glass down for him before gently laying his hand over Izuku's. Izuku flushed, head ducking into his collar. My boy, that's enough, Toshinori murmured. This is your weekend. There's no school on weekends. But I have to, Izuku whispered, freeing his hand and running a finger over the page. I want. Toshinori, I can't even read this. Toshinori's heart dropped, sliding into the chair next to Izuku and flicking to the back of the book. Well, it is at a higher level than you. It's for 6 to 8-year-olds, Izuku snapped, arms folding petulantly. And I know it's a lot compared to where I started, but even if I wanted to go to school next year, I couldn't. Toshinori watched as Izuku held the book back out towards him, flipping to the second page. He has and this word I don't know, tusks, and, that word again, claws and something teeth in his something jaws. Terrible, Toshinori provided, drawing Izuku close as he swiped at his eyes in frustration. I know it's hard, Izuku, but you're getting there. You're doing so well, young man. And what's this about school? He asked. Last I heard, you weren't interested. I don't think I am, Izuku admitted, large eyes turning to Toshinori. But even if I wanted, I couldn't. And heroes go to school, don't they? Toshinori bowed his head. Well, yes, I suppose so. And I want to be a hero, Izuku countered, eyes hardening the way they always did when he was upset. Maybe I can't. I know I can't read, and I know I only know basic maths and sciences, but Toshinori, I want to be a hero. Would that be enough? It made Toshinori so sad to have to shoot him down, shaking his head. Unfortunately, the education system isn't built like that. So I have to be smart. Yes. The book was shoved back in his face. Then teach me. Toshinori faltered before laughing loud and clear. You're certainly clever enough with your words, Izuku. But all right then, he said, clapping Izuku on the shoulder. You'll study with me on Saturdays as well. But on Sundays you'll rest. Promise me. Izuku held out a hand, Toshinori shaking it. Promise. Izuku fell into a rhythm after that. It was so startling to be handed something as simple and, to some, as constraining as a routine, but Izuku loved it. He forged ahead with his lessons with Inko, studying relentlessly. He trained physically with Toshinori most mornings, slowly but surely chipping away at the mess that was Dagaba Beach. He outgrew one set of clothes, then the next, before settling in at what was apparently the average for his age, if not a little on the slim side. It probably didn't help that he screwed his nose up at anything sweet, so unused to the taste that they overpowered him more often than not. The best Toshinori had been able to do was red bean paste. Anything like ice creams or cakes or sweets, Izuku wouldn't have a bar of it. But now they were in the bustling Shibuya area, Toshinori always making sure that on Sundays Izuku had fun. So far they'd been to parks, arcades, movie theaters, sports games. He was slowly working Izuku up to Disneyland. Fun, in Toshinori's opinion, was just as important as learning. Hey Toshi, another new development. One Izuku barely seemed to notice and one that made Toshinori nearly blink back tears every time. Look, Izuku said, beaming as he proudly read out the message flashing across the billboard above. Toshinori ruffled his hair, Izuku squeaking, "Well done, my boy. I know there are some tricky characters in there." Izuku grinned, peering around him and taking in the general area. "So where are we going today?" "I'm not sure," Toshinori admitted. "I thought perhaps you could." "All Might." Toshinori's head snapped down, but Izuku was no longer looking at him. No, he was looking past him at the girl who had literally just been snapped up by villains, undoubtedly to be used as hostage. "I'll take them, you get her," Toshinori ordered, already running. Izuku was on his heels, ducking and weaving through the crowd like he'd been trained to do for years. He reached the commotion just as Toshinori, since powered up, landed the first blow. Izuku skidded under the blow, hand wrapping around the girl's wrist and pulling her to his chest. She would have barely been 4 or 5, maybe on one of her first solo outings. "You're all right," Izuku said, scooping her up and taking her a safe distance away. She was looking up at him with big eyes, body shaking with fear, and Izuku just didn't know what to do with that. He unceremoniously took off his hoodie and stuffed her in it, hoping it would work well enough as a makeshift blanket to keep shock away. "You're fine," he repeated, turning and watching All Might fight. It took less than 5 minutes, Izuku thought it would have. By then the police were starting to arrive, thanking All Might profusely, who waved them off with nothing more than a laugh. All Might then looked to him, and while he smiled, there was something in his eyes that Izuku didn't like. He wondered what it was. Izuku sunk down in his chair at the dinner table. He'd barely been eating as it was, but at Toshinori's tone of voice, he lost his appetite entirely. He didn't have to look up to know what this was going to be about. He did, however, look up when Toshinori sighed heavily. "Izuku, you're not in trouble." Izuku frowned. I did something wrong. I know that." And what did you do wrong?" Izuku blinked. "I don't. Well, I didn't think." "If you don't know," Toshinori cut in, "then you didn't do anything. Not purposefully, at least. And besides, this isn't about that." It was. But Toshinori wasn't going to say that. He wasn't going to say that while Izuku's heart was in the right place, and while he had all the kindness in the world, he was just so unused to people that he couldn't interact with them. Izuku's social skills were, to put it bluntly, abysmal. He couldn't initiate conversation, couldn't initiate contact, couldn't always read cues, and certainly didn't know anything about how to comfort people. Izuku couldn't replicate what he'd never seen, what he'd never been taught. "I was thinking," Toshinori said instead, "that perhaps it would do you good to get a pet. Something to teach you responsibility." He added quickly when Izuku paled. Izuku shook his head adamantly, and pushed his dinner away all at the same time. No, he didn't have a quirk, but he could use weapons, he could cause pain. He'd been taught to kill, and he hadn't started on people. He hadn't started with killing either. "Izuku." "No," he gasped out, hugging himself tightly. "I don't." "No, thank you Toshi, but no." Toshinori's lips pursed. He would have said more had not the front door been opened. Izuku perked up at the distraction, but also did what he always did. He slid behind the bookcase, knife in hand, ready should the intruder not identify themselves. "I'm here." Inko's voice soothed Izuku's nerves, and he shuffled back to the table, grumbling when Inko pressed a kiss to his temple. "You look well, Izuku." Izuku shrugged, intending to leave the table and only getting caught because Inko laid a hand on his arm. She then held out a box wrapped in brightly colored paper. Izuku blinked at it in confusion, subconsciously stepping back. He couldn't see what was inside, and he hadn't been expecting anything. He didn't know what it was. Had someone made it? Had someone found him? And "Izuku, it's a present," Toshinori said softly. "Thank Inko and open it." "Oh," he said, ears burning in embarrassment. His nose also scrunched up at the pitying look Inko was giving him. Carefully peeling back the tape, Izuku studied the red shoes inside the box in wonder. "You need more than one pair," Inko told him decisively. "But I don't want to see these on that beach Toshinori drags you to." Izuku frowned. "But I want to wear them everywhere. I like them." Inko's eyes began to water as Toshinori chuckled. "Then thank her and Inko. I think you're going to have to let Izuku do what he wants. Don't you always?" She chided teasingly before kissing Izuku's forehead again. "And you're welcome. Enjoy them, Izuku." Izuku nodded solemnly and took the shoes to the entryway, setting them down neatly before excusing him and hiding out in his room. Toshinori dropped his head into his hands. Social skills. Now, in a situation that seemed to keep repeating itself, Toshinori started another conversation some weeks later exactly the same way. Izuku. It was a little firmer than normal, but not out of malice, more because he needed Izuku's absolute attention, and with his pen scurrying so quickly across the page, Toshinori didn't know if he'd get it otherwise. But he did, Izuku's head snapping up and eyes wide. Toshinori just smiled, setting his satchel down on the table. I'm headed up to UA today, my boy. Would you like to come see a hero school for yourself? Izuku's mouth dropped open. But am I allowed? I asked you, didn't I? Toshinori challenged, wagging a finger. I wouldn't have asked if you weren't allowed. Izuku mulled that over before hesitantly looking at the school work he and Inko were working through. Without a word, Inko closed his maths book. Izuku, this can be done later. If you're going with Toshinori, I think he's going now. Izuku chewed on his bottom lip uncertainly, Toshinori coaxing his chin up with a finger. Everyone will be in class while we're there. No one will talk to you, not even my boss if you don't want him to. That made Izuku perk up more than anything, barely waving a goodbye to Inko before scurrying to the door and stuffing his feet into the sneakers Inko had bought him months ago. But you're a hero, Izuku said as they made their way towards the station. Isn't that? I thought that was your job. You don't work at UA, do you? Toshinori tapped the side of his nose knowingly. Well, maybe we should see about that, right, Izuku? Izuku's head cocked to the side, but he followed Toshinori onto the train without protest. The journey over was silent, Toshinori tapping away at his phone mindlessly while Izuku stood ramrod straight, eyes never still for more than a second. After years of having to constantly watch his back, Toshinori didn't blame him in the slightest. Nudging Izuku at their stop, Toshinori bit back a chuckle when Izuku waited for the crowd to clear before hoisting himself onto the fence closest, balancing as they walked. Careful, Toshinori warned. If they ask, I'll hop down, Izuku assured, which wasn't entirely how Toshinori had meant it but was also a good point. So, he said, jumping a small alley to the next yard, are you working at UA Toshi? Are you not going to be a hero anymore? Izuku, my boy, I'll always be a hero, Toshinori said severely. I'll do so until I'm physically incapable of not doing so. Then why go to UA? It's rather a long story, Toshinori admitted, going to end it there before shaking his head. Izuku was hardly a tattletale. I have this quirk, you see. It's different. All quirks are different, Izuku said matter-of-factly, arms windmilling as he nearly lost his balance. Not like this. This is ... my quirk, Izuku. It can be passed on. And I, in turn, inherited it. That made Izuku pull up, eyes wide and crouching down. So you ... All Might didn't have a quirk. That's right, Toshinori said. It was given to me when I was scarcely older than you. And soon it will be time for me to pass it on. UA is a way to. Well, I'm getting old anyway, Toshinori laughed ruefully. This is a way to step back and also find a successor. That was the original plan anyway. It's a good plan, Izuku told him, resuming their walk when Toshinori jerked a thumb up the street. Why change it? Toshinori glanced up at him surreptitiously. Maybe I already found a successor. Izuku, bless him, beamed. That's great, Toshi. I haven't asked them, he warned, Izuku scoffing. All Might is crazy strong. He's a simple. That power lets you save people. If someone doesn't want the power to save people, they shouldn't be a hero anyway. He ended firmly. Toshinori tossed his head back and laughed. Toshi, don't laugh. Izuku pouted. I'm being serious. Toshinori whisked him down, Izuku squeaking until he was set on the ground. Toshinori hugged him tightly. I know you are. Just remember those words in case you need to quote them again. I will, Izuku vowed, holding on just that little bit longer. UA was nothing like Izuku had ever seen. Not that he had seen a lot, but UA was something else again. It had gleaming windows and looming towers, grounds filled with rolling fields and even what looked like a lake. Izuku had passed several schools in his time and none of them came close to this. Most were lucky to have a baseball field or a jungle gym, and there was never any grass, only concrete. Did you know, Toshinori said as they took the stairs to the principal's office, that I myself came here in my youth? Izuku didn't, but he smiled anyway. Maybe I should have guessed. I heard it's the best hero school and you're the best hero. Makes sense, doesn't it? Toshinori bent down to meet his gaze, smile warm. You're too much for me, young man. Izuku frowned in confusion, but Toshinori didn't explain himself. No, he led them down the hall until they reached the principal's office. Izuku would admit, whatever he had been expecting inside, it wasn't a sentient, talking mouse. If it was a mouse, that was. And whatever it was, its name was Nedzu and it was a he. Izuku could work with that. Nedzu nodded once in his direction before addressing Toshinori and Toshinori alone. That Izuku could more than work with. Of course, we'd make some allowances to your schedule, Nedzu was saying as they walked through the halls, but you also have to understand that you'd also be needed here. Of course, Toshinori echoed. Izuku barely paying attention as he peered in one of the doors, watching several students snicker to each other before hastily writing something down from the board. Izuku, he snapped up, going to run down the hall only for Nezu to shake his head. Why don't we continue our conversation here? Izuku is more than welcome to sit in on the class if he'd like. Izuku adamantly shook his head, backing up several steps. What if you sat outside and listened in? Toshinori offered. That had Izuku pausing. He then cautiously nodded, looking to Nezu. Nezu just gave him an ever so tiny thumbs up. Izuku was content with that, approaching the room once more and eventually plopping himself to the right of the door, eyes closed as he listened. There was the teacher, passing on little notes and hints, the students murmuring together as they seemingly worked in groups. There was laughter and good-natured whining. People worked together to reach solutions, and all in all, it almost sounded fun. Homeschooled at the moment. So you've said but I meant, so much as seen a school. Been inside one. Oh. Izuku shrunk down, knowing he was being talked about. There were a lot of things he couldn't help. He did his best, okay. Yes, he'd never been to school, and yes, he was maybe only at the reading comprehension level of a third grader, but he was doing his best. He couldn't try any harder than he. If his attendance here were to be compulsory, I'm sure we could secure a place. General studies would suit, don't you think? Yes, sir. Izuku was in the same boat, bolting up and slipping to Toshinori's side. He fisted a hand in the back of Toshinori's shirt before bowing at Nezu. Thank you, but I. A hand settled atop his head. I won't put Izuku in an uncomfortable position. He won't be made to go anywhere. As touching as it was, Izuku didn't think that the point, rallying himself. And if I did come here, I want to make it in like everyone else. He looked up at Toshinori. You said UA had entrance exams, didn't you? It wouldn't be fair for me to just. We have students who enter on recommendation. Nezu cut in smoothly, but that's a subject we can discuss later. Probably at length. Izuku nodded in thanks, a little relieved when they were turned back to Nezu's office. It effectively cut him off from the rest of the world, and Izuku was allowed to play with his phone while Toshinori and Nezu covered finer details of Toshinori's job description. Izuku tuned them out, pulling up the internet and searching for details on entry into UA. He paled 2 articles in. To get in was near impossible. The bar set ridiculously high as the failure rate. That being said, it wasn't impossible. The large campus around him proved that. Izuku frowned, looking at the numbers once more. Maybe, if he tried. Toshinori watched Izuku swing his legs back and forth absently on the train. They'd already made a pit stop for dinner. And there was one more place Toshinori wanted to go before they headed home. It was also the place he was most apprehensive about taking Izuku, but he felt Izuku needed to take this step, even if it was more of a pull rather than a push. Izuku followed him as dutifully as always, never questioning, and it made Toshinori's heart ache because how had he come from trusting no one to trusting him so wholly? Rapping on the back door of the building in question, Toshinori bent over slightly, enough to take Izuku's shoulders into his hands. My boy, what we're about to do. I think you might be upset with me, but please, at the very least, hear me out until the end. Izuku frowned, jerking back in his hold but not enough to break free. Toshi, it's nothing that will hurt you, he assured, but even then, Toshinori couldn't be sure. After all, he didn't know Izuku's reasons for saying no. Eventually, though, he got the barest of nods just as the door opened. On the other side stood Teichai, smiling widely and waving them in. Izuku hesitated on the doorstep, Toshinori going to explain, but Teichai just sailed over the top of him. Hi, I'm Teichai, he said, holding out a hand. I know we haven't met, but can I just say, I love your jumper. You look so warm in there. Izuku flushed, shying behind Toshinori. He did manage a weak high though. Teichai just grinned at Toshinori, leading through what was obviously a staff room before grabbing the keys to another door. Before he could open it though, Izuku was rearing back and Toshinori felt his stomach drop. Izuku, no, he cried, backing up 2 more steps. I said no to this, but if you just, why don't you just listen? Izuku, that's, oi. The shout was accompanied by 2 loud claps, Teichai fisting his hands on his hips. Now people, come on. None of us are 5. Once more he ignored Toshinori, coming to crouch in front of Izuku. Hey, Izuku, was it? Can I just show you why Toshinori brought you here? To be honest, I needed some help. Izuku chewed his bottom lip. Help was always the magic word with him. Help? How? Teichai held up a finger, ducking into the room Izuku had been so against and coming back with a bundle in his arms. Izuku paled, but Teichai moved no closer, just looking down at the blanket in his arms. Toshinori told me you'd been through some stuff. He didn't tell me what, but this guy, he's been through some stuff too. And because of that, no one wants him. Izuku frowned, leaning forward ever so slightly. His gaze dropped to the food bowls, the food bags, everything that had given Toshinori's plan away. He's a cat, Izuku deadpanned. People love them. Teichai's smile turned sad. I wish they did. This guy ... he wasn't doing well when I found him. And even though he's better now, I'm finding it hard to find a good home for him. After all, no one wants a three-legged, deaf cat. That's not his fault. Izuku snapped before flushing. Teichai chuckled. No, it isn't. Maybe you could teach him that. Izuku looked to Toshinori, who offered what he hoped was a reassuring thumbs up. Izuku didn't look impressed but finally stepped forward, pushing back the blanket, fingers stopping just above the cat's ears. He's nice. You can pat him, he won't mind. I mind, Izuku whispered, hands coming back to clench at his chest. I'm not nice to animals. Toshinori frowned severely, hand heavy when it curled over Izuku's shoulder. Are you telling me, Izuku, that you want to harm this cat? No, Izuku cried, eyes wide. I wouldn't. Toshi. The wine made him grin. He then sobered, patting the cat himself. We all have circumstances we wish hadn't happened, things we want to undo. But Izuku, it isn't about the ones you lose, it's about the ones you save as well. Do you think, perhaps, we could save this cat? Could we make sure no one hurts him again and that he's loved? Izuku swallowed thickly, the similarities between them making his resolve falter. He eventually nodded, extending his arms. Teichai, with infinite care, passed the stray over, Izuku locking up for a good several minutes before finally relaxing. I know you can't hear me, Izuku murmured, but I'm going to look after you from now on, okay? You're all right now, because we're here. It was Toshinori's turn to tear up, drawing Izuku into his side. You'll do great, son. Izuku attempted a smile before turning to Teichai. What's his name? Teichai shrugged. Well, he doesn't have one as of yet. I just call him Puss, but you can call him whatever you want. That only seemed to confuse Izuku further, carefully adjusting his hold on the cat and honest-to-God googling top cat names. Toshinori curled his hand over the top of Izuku's phone. Call him something you like, my boy. Something I like. Oh, then, Red Bean. Toshinori spluttered while Teichai burst out laughing. Kid, I love it. Toshinori couldn't deny it. He did too. Izuku reached out, gently patting the quilt on his bed. Red Bean's head lifted in response, trilling at the sight of him. Izuku would admit, he'd been borderline terrified of the cat for nearly the whole first 2 weeks he'd had him, but now Izuku would most likely die for this animal. He patted his lap, Red Bean eyeing him up speculatively before hopping over. Izuku bumped their noses together, chin settling atop Red Bean's head. See this? He said, tapping his marker on his paper. It's a hero costume. It isn't very good, but it is one. Red Bean just needed his lap, Izuku giggling. Okay, it's not terrible. What's not? Toshi, Izuku squeaked, hands slamming down on the paper for a reason he himself didn't know. Toshinori paused behind him, holding up a hand when Izuku went to speak. It's all right, son. I should have knocked. Izuku frowned. The door was open. His eyes then dropped to his page. It isn't. You can look, if you want. If you don't want me to, it's fine, Toshinori assured, just ruffling his hair before crouching down to pat Red Bean. And just like that, Izuku didn't know what to do. He didn't mind Toshinori looking, Young Izuku, say what you're thinking. Toshinori coached and right. They were working on social skills and understanding emotion. I want to show you, Izuku said confidently, because he knew that. But I don't want you to laugh. Toshinori blinked before nodding solemnly, shifting so he could sit on the bed. Then I won't laugh. Izuku believed him. Once upon a time, Izuku didn't think he'd take anyone at their word, let alone someone he'd known only 6 months. But here he was, wholly trusting Toshinori and not having a shred of doubt in his mind. It made his heart ... do things. Maybe swell, maybe that was the word. He liked it, for the most part. A smile crept over his face, though it changed to something more nervous when he handed over the paper. Toshinori accepted it with near reverence, eyes tracing every detail. This is wonderful, Izuku, he murmured. It's not, Izuku replied, taking it back and very much ignoring Toshinori's frown. But I'm glad you like it. What do you need it for? Izuku hastily looked away, tugging Red Bean to his chest and burrowing into his fur. I don't. And need it, that is. It's just, I don't. You do, Toshinori corrected gently, in some shape or form. That's why you drew it. Maybe I just wanted to. And fun is a need too, remember. Izuku smiled the tiniest bit at that, squealing when Toshinori poked him in the ribs. Red Bean mewled in irritation, jumping back onto the bed as Izuku flailed about. His laughter was soon joined by Toshinori's. The two of them fighting until Izuku called enough and his carer immediately stood down. Slipping the drawing into a folder, Izuku padded out to the kitchen, making a start on dinner. Do you want help? Toshinori asked gently, Izuku shaking his head and getting to work. Stay though, he requested, rummaging through the pantry and pulling things out. There's something I want to ask. Of course, Toshinori said, sliding onto the stool opposite. There's 3 months till entrance exams. Izuku said, changing tact. I know that I'm below average. Don't try and tell me otherwise. But if I wanted to, could I try and apply for school? There was a long beat of silence before a hand curled around his wrist. Izuku, you can do anything you want. Izuku, this is a big step, and if you've thought it through and are sure you want to take it, I'll support you every step of the way. Izuku swallowed thickly. I have thought about it. A lot. And you want to? I do, he said, flipping the fry pan on and dropping the meat in. I'm scared, but I want to. Toshinori's fingers drummed on the countertop there. But if you're scared, you are though, aren't you? Izuku pressed. You told me, when you do hero work sometimes, All Might gets scared, but he smiles anyway. I can do that, can't I? That's very true, Toshinori said after a moment. Plus, as you've often told me, you yourself want to be a hero. And every hero needs to know fear and know how to overcome it. Izuku perked up. Then I can apply. Toshinori's answer had to wait as Red Bean hobbled into the room, drawn by the scent of food. Izuku grinned, scratching the cat under the chin before dishing up his food. He then made a plate for him and Toshinori, handing one over. His hand was caught before he could let the plate go, his head being coaxed up. You can, but before you do, we need to have a talk. Tomorrow, at the beach. Would that suit, Izuku my boy? That ... didn't bode well, and Izuku wasn't a fan of talks, but yeah. After 9 months, Dagaba Beach looked much improved from when he and Izuku had started cleaning it. Nearly the entire beach was spotless, free of debris and waste. It was worth it, not just to see the strength and confidence Izuku was slowly gaining, but to see his joy as more and more sand opened up. He'd made his first sandcastle here. He'd had his first swim in the ocean here. He'd finally experienced the hell that was having his food stolen by a seagull on this beach. Helping Izuku with the last fridge, Toshinori left out a whoosh of air as they lifted it onto the back of the pickup he'd rented. Toshi, Izuku breathed, eyes locked on the coast. It's ... it's beautiful again. We fixed it. That's an important lesson, Toshinori said, pinching Izuku's cheek and chuckling when all he did was curl in closer. Things that are broken can almost always be fixed if people put in enough time and effort. Toshinori, stop, Izuku complained, pulling away and tucking his hands into the pockets of his hoodie. I don't. Some things can't be fixed. And maybe they shouldn't be. Oh, he challenged. Izuku's jaw clenched. Good. He was gaining the confidence he'd had before he trusted Toshinori again. Red Bean is broken, but he makes it work. And it's what's broken about him that makes him who he is. There's a difference between broken and defeated. Izuku's eyes flashed as they took in his frame. You're broken too. As much as it pained him to admit it, Izuku was right. He wouldn't get his lung back. His body wouldn't be what it once was. But he could still be All Might. Maybe Izuku was right. He said as much. A good point, son. You know, Izuku, I once read a comic many years ago that said, why do we fall? And do you know what the answer was? Izuku's brow pinched in thought. So we can be careful not to do it again. Toshinori shook his head. So that we can learn to pick ourselves back up. That sounds like a hero to me. It sounds like All Might, Izuku agreed, grinning. And you, Toshinori pressed. You'll be a hero too, won't you? Even without a quirk. I'd like to be. And even more so if you had a quirk. But I don't. But if you did. Izuku threw his hands in the air. But I don't have one. Toshinori caught his hands just as easily. And I told you I'd chosen a successor. The minutes seemed to tick by before Izuku realized what he meant. And just like that, all the color drained from his face. He backed away several steps, skin ashen. He was already shaking his head furiously. Hands balled into fists and eyes pricking traitorously. Don't, he begged, voice cracking so painfully. Don't say that. Toshinori crouched down, reaching out a hand only for it to be smacked away. Izuku, I'm a villain. You know that. You knew what I was the second you met me, and I can't. Izuku, breathe. Izuku did, but only for a second before he rounded on Toshinori again. He looked so betrayed, and Toshinori couldn't help but feel frustrated. It led him to do something he'd never done with Izuku before. Be firm. That's enough. The boy froze, eyes wide. Toshinori gripped his shoulders tightly, all but crushing them. Now you listen to me, Midoriya Izuku. You deserve to be a hero. You should be. Your conviction is stronger than most pro-heroes I've encountered. You've been through so much as a child, and yet you still stand here and want to help to people. You never let bitterness or hatred consume you. You're everything people want in a hero. You want to save people, don't you? Izuku hesitated, Toshinori giving him a shake. Don't you? I do. Then listen to your own words and accept what I'm offering you. If someone doesn't want the power to save people, they shouldn't be a hero anyway, didn't you say? Izuku's bottom lip trembled. But not me, He then hung his head, laughing wetly. I can't say broken, can I? I said it was okay to be. Toshinori sighed, slowly bringing Izuku into his arms and hugging him. I can't force you to take this power, my boy. I never could and I never would. But if you want it, if you want one for all, I'm willing to give it to you so you too can be a hero. You were made to be a hero, Izuku. There was no stopping the tears then. Izuku sobbing in his shoulder. Toshinori only held him tighter, smoothing his hair back with a hand and keeping the ministrations up until Izuku's sobs turned into nothing more than weak hiccups. "You're special, my boy. Always have been," he murmured, wiping the tears away with the hem of his sleeve. "And, as horrible as it sounds, I think that's why the villains kept you so long as well. They could see that special spark in you ... and wanted to snuff it out. Only you never let them. You're a strong man, young Izuku." "I don't ever feel strong," Izuku admitted, hands clenching in his shirt. "And I hate that those men made you feel that way," Toshinori replied. "But we're working on that. You're already so much better. You've improved so much, you just can't see it. But I can. Inko can. It's that improvement that has me offering you this power, Izuku." Izuku chewed on his bottom lip, pulling away but not stepping out of Toshinori's arms. He wiped his face messily with his hands. "But I don't deserve it, I think," Toshinori said carefully. "You have a very skewed view of what you do and don't deserve. What you deserve, my boy, is to be happy and reach your full potential." Small fingers curled around his, shaking as they were. This isn't pity, promise me that." Toshinori scowled. "Izuku, I would never." For a moment he thought he'd been too severe, but no, all he got was a nod. A test then. And he'd passed. ... Okay. Izuku's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, please. Izuku, you can think on this. You don't need to. Please." Toshinori laughed as Izuku bowed. Truly, this was the strangest boy he'd ever met. He was also the best one. He then plucked a hair from his head, holding it out. "Eat this. ... And oh, damn it." It may have taken the better part of an hour, but Toshinori had finally convinced Izuku to eat the hair and thus transfer his power over. He didn't blame the boy, not really. He'd had a similar reaction when his teacher had asked the same of him. But Izuku had eventually come around when presented with the knowledge that he had to ingest some part of Toshinori's DNA, and he knew the easiest option was being handed to him. So he'd accepted. Toshinori had never felt so conflicted, relieved, because he had passed the mantle on, ashamed, because he should never have had to force this power onto another, and proud, because Izuku had earned this honor more than anyone. Was it an honor, though, or more of a burden? Toshinori didn't want to answer that. He'd laid the law down firmly. That Izuku couldn't use one for all without him present. That they would start small and slowly work their way up. That Izuku should never, under any circumstances, use the quirk at full force. Toshinori wasn't always entirely sure how Izuku's brain worked, but he was confident enough that if one for all ended up shattering all of Izuku's limbs or blowing an arm off, that trust would be just as broken. He'd promised to never hurt this boy, and he wouldn't. His quirk was a part of that promise. Despite the late midnight hour and the fact that he should have been sleeping rather than drowning in his thoughts, Toshinori became very aware of a presence in his room. There was no sound, no flicker of light, but there was a presence nonetheless. That made it rather obvious who it was. "Izuku," he called. The boy sucked in a breath, and even without looking, Toshinori knew he'd frozen. He sat up slowly, waving him over. Izuku hesitated, arms hugging his chest tightly. Toshinori frowned. "Izuku, come here," he said gently. "Is there something on your mind?" There obviously was, or Izuku would be asleep right now. In fact, Toshinori could still hear the jazz music from his room, indicating that Izuku had at least been trying to sleep. He didn't move though, just stood at the foot of his bed and chewed his lip indecisively. Toshinori waited patiently, knowing that rushing him would only make things worse. Finally, Izuku shifted those last few feet, shoulders hunching over tightly. "What?" He petered off before finding his voice once more, though his eyes dropped down. "What's a dad?" Toshinori's mind crashed to a halt. He stared at Izuku incredulously, though he madly waved a hand when Izuku started stammering an apology and backing away. "Don't. You just surprised me, that's all. Come, sit." Izuku did so, however reluctantly. His feet swung awkwardly and Toshinori coaxed him on, hand resting on Izuku's shoulder. "You know what a dad is, I know that. So what are you asking?" Izuku shrugged. "I don't. Are a dad and a father different?" He finally settled on. Oh, that made sense. Now he understood. "Very much so," Toshinori said, his own hands coming to knit together. "I think a father is someone you are connected to biologically, willingly or not. Many people can be fathers. It's harder to be a dad. But that's not to say you can't be both. We should aim to be both." Izuku frowned. "Does that ... you can pick a dad then? Like ... if you don't like your father, or?" "It's a little more complicated than that, but yes, you can. Sometimes you pick or sometimes you get adopted." "Adopted," Izuku repeated, head cocking to the side. I saw that on TV. It's a fake family, right?" Toshinori tapped him on the nose rather harshly. Izuku reeling. "Found, Izuku. It's a found family. Families are made by bonds, not blood. And there's nothing fake about bonds." Izuku went oddly silent there, sitting for the longest time before starting to slide off the bed. Toshinori stopped him with a hand, gently asking him to stay. They sat there for who knows how long, silent except for the jazz music coming from Izuku's room, and, for once, it was Izuku who broke first. Are you ... Are you my dad? Toshinori's heart shattered at the sobs that accompanied that question, and he was bundling Izuku into his lap without thought. He all but crushed the boy in his arms, forehead resting atop his head. Izuku, my boy, I've considered you mine for nearly 6 months. But I was always afraid you wouldn't want me, or wouldn't want a father after what yours did to you. But you wouldn't be, Izuku croaked. You wouldn't be my father. You'd be my dad. That was the moment Toshinori lost it too. How could he keep his composure when faced with something as powerful as that? It would be my honor then, Izuku. It was coming ever closer to entrance exam season. Izuku had studied so much to the point that both Toshinori and Inko had to pull him back and make him stop, having lectures on how stress was bad and how he needed to step away sometimes, that the world wouldn't end if he didn't. Izuku hadn't really believed them until he'd stressed to the point of becoming ill, and then, finally, he'd paid them some mind, sheepishly apologizing for days on end. Toshinori was just as busy. His time was constantly being split between hero work and meetings with Nedzu ... as well as making sure his basic survival needs were being met and that Izuku wasn't left alone 7 nights a week. It was funny how much Toshinori didn't realize he'd been neglecting his physical needs until he had to make sure Izuku was meeting his. And the boy never did that alone. He didn't like to eat alone, wouldn't sleep unless Toshinori did. Izuku was great for his health, it seemed, as he was for Izuku's. Even now he was having one such meeting with Nedzu, though this was more for Izuku's sake. It was a Sunday and the school was out, only the 3 of them there. Nedzu was giving Izuku a tour, trying to make UAS grounds as less daunting as possible. Toshinori was hanging back, letting the principal and Izuku chat away. Izuku was far more confident than the last time he'd been here, actually asking questions and showing an ounce of curiosity. He peeked in classrooms, flicked through curriculum folders, studied maps of the campus. So, young Midoriya, Nedzu was saying, why do you think it's important that people's quirks are officially recorded? Izuku pondered that a moment before presenting an answer Toshinori was rather proud of. He said as much, ruffling Izuku's hair as he did so. Izuku giggled, letting himself be drawn in for a side hug. Nedzu was also smiling, though he pulled them up and gave Izuku his full attention. Now, would you be able to write that? Izuku's brow furrowed, but he nodded. How about read the question? I could probably make it out. And would you be able to read your answer if the question asked you to analyze it? Izuku's head dropped. No. I'm sorry. Nedzu shook his head. I didn't ask you to be sorry. I simply needed to know. You're not the only student coming through that's at a disadvantage. Unfortunately, we can't make our school exams wholly inclusive, so we need to know where to provide assistance. We have blind students, dyslexic students, students with attention problems. If we can cater to them, we can cater to you. Izuku shyly managed to thank you before slipping his hand into Toshinori's. Can we go home now, Dad? Toshinori hastily coughed into his hand, vainly trying to hide his blush. He very much avoided Nedzu's gaze as he asked, is there anything else you need Izuku for? The principal shook his head. Izuku's answered all of my questions, and unless he has any questions he'd like answered, he's free to go. Izuku similarly shook his head, bowing and letting himself be shown out. He babbled on about UA excitedly all the way home, smiling when Inko drew him into a hug as he crossed the threshold. Hi Inko, Dad took me to UA. I thought he might have, Inko said, tucking a wayward curl behind his ear. And, how was it? It was a lot, Izuku admitted, shoulders hunching over only until he saw Red Bean sunning himself in the lounge. Then Izuku was off, Red Bean's head popping up at the vibrations his steps made. Izuku was rewarded with a loud meow and a bundle of fluff in his lap soon enough. Still, Toshinori said, coming over and laying a hand on Izuku's shoulder. I think you can handle it. Izuku hesitated before nodding. I'd like to. And if I don't get in then ... Well, there's Roppongi High. Toshinori's hand froze. Pardon? Izuku turned at the odd tone. What? When did we ever discuss Roppongi High? It's the closest school to here, Izuku said slowly, like it was obvious. And if I don't make the hero course at UA, I said I'd try other schools. He shook his head. I don't want any other hero school than UA ... They're all really far away, so I thought. Izuku, it's UA or nothing. Izuku's jaw dropped, hands clenching into fists. What? No. Toshinori silenced him with a gesture. You said you would try for the hero course on your own, but if you don't make that, Nedzu has a place for you in general studies. No, I said I'd do it on my own. Izuku argued. And you will, Toshinori said firmly. But if that fails, this is your backup. But I don't want to go to UA unless I get in the right way. Izuku, that's enough. You don't get a choice here. Maybe he'd phrased it wrong. Maybe Izuku was that little bit more on edge than usual. But all Toshinori knew was the next second Izuku was rounding on him, one for all activated as he lashed out. Swapping into his muscle form was nothing more than instinct. catching the punch and forcing Izuku to his knees. Midoriya Izuku. The whole apartment seemed to shake under his booming voice. Izuku cowering and red beans back arching. Toshinori didn't get another word in though before Inko was between them, somehow both nervous and firm. Both of you, enough. That's not how we talk in this house. Toshinori powered down at the same time Izuku drew his knees up, burying his face in them. Izuku had shattered 2 fingers on his right hand, bruising all the way down to his wrist, and Toshinori would feel sympathy later, but for now, Izuku. His voice was stern but quiet, coaxing the boy's head up with a hand. I understand you were angry, but you must never use your quirk like that again. We never lash out in anger, do you understand? Yes, Dad, Izuku whispered, eyes wet with unshed tears. Sorry. Toshinori nodded, glancing at Inko, who took that as her cue. She sat them both down before situating herself between them. No fighting, she ordered calmly. Now Izuku, go first. I don't want pity, Izuku mumbled, refusing to look at any of them. And I know I should be grateful to go to UA, but I want to make my own choices. This would be the first time I've been allowed to make a decision of my own. I thought, because Roppongi was close it would ... that it would be safe for me to go there. He went to apologize again, but Inko cut him off, turning to Toshinori. You're right, Toshinori said heavily. But Izuku, I wanted you to go UA so that you would be safe. When I first found you, I promised I'd never let those villains hurt you again. If you're somewhere I'm not, how can I make sure of that? Izuku sunk down lower. I thought Tsukachi had caught them. Toshinori shook his head sadly. They left long before the police got there. I imagine they left right after you disappeared. Then, I don't know what to do, Izuku said. Toshinori chuckled. Neither do I. How about a compromise? Inko suggested. Surely Izuku would be able to check in with you throughout the day if he didn't get into UA. He has a phone, Toshinori. And all phones have a tracking ability if Izuku turns it on. I'm sure someone out there could set up an alert for you if Izuku ever went beyond a certain area. Izuku perked up at that, latching onto Toshinori's wrist. Dad, please, can I? Toshinori mulled it over before grudgingly nodding. Yes, I suppose so. But how about we focus on getting into UA first? Would save us a lot of work. Izuku beamed, Toshinori powerless to not return it. Yeah. He then looked down at his broken fingers. I can ... it'll heal. Toshinori laughed, taking Izuku's hand in his delicately. How about I teach you so that this doesn't happen again? Please. 3 weeks later saw Izuku standing at the gates of UA. Hands tightly clenched around his backpack. Okay, he could do this. Izuku had all but decided he was going to have a good day and give the entrance exam his all. It didn't matter what came his way. He was going to do his best, and he was, subsequently, going to succeed. And even if not, he could at least walk away with the knowledge that he had done all he could. As his dad had told him, there was nothing anyone could do more than their best. Which was, obviously, why Izuku stumbled over a rise in the footpath. He didn't fall, didn't come close, his reflexes more than made sure of that. But he obviously stumbled harshly enough that someone felt the need to come to his aid. The hint there being the fact that he was suddenly floating, and last time Izuku had checked, One for All didn't allow him to do that. And he'd checked. A lot. Sorry. The word was stammered out before he could panic. A girl carefully setting him down and rubbing her neck in what he thought was apology. You looked like you might fall, and that would be unlucky, wouldn't it? Izuku frowned. I suppose so. He then bowed ever so slightly. Thank you for catching me. She only blushed harder. I probably overreacted there, and I shouldn't have used my quirk on you without permission. Why, yeah, but it was for the right reasons, Izuku pointed out. He then jumped when a hand was extended his way. Uraraka Achako. He took it gingerly, giving the barest of shakes and wincing at the one he got in return. All right, this was someone he didn't want to get into a fist fight with. Izuku quickly took in her appearance, logging it away for future reference. Midoriya Izuku, he offered, voice barely above a whisper. Uraraka seemed to take his shyness as nerves, giving him her best smile. It sure is scary, isn't it? UA entrance exams. She shivered. I'm getting chills just thinking about it. Izuku's head cocked to the side before cautiously nodding. But you have to. Well. Not have to, but ... you know, I mean ... to be a hero. He trailed off uncertainly, but she understood. You're right. Izuku was sure she would have said more, but he abruptly excused himself, recognizing the person coming their way. He wondered if they would even remember him, but he remembered them clear as day. And they wanted to be a hero too. That had to be a coincidence, maybe something more than. Skittering to their side, Izuku hesitated before laying a hand on the blonde's forearm. He then leapt away at the explosion suddenly aimed his way. Several people also whirled around, the blonde angrily shoving his hands in pockets. What the fuck do you think you're doing? Red eyes sparked in recognition. You. Izuku's hands flailed. I recognized and thought ... well, it might be good to say hello. I never. Last time, I didn't. He shook his head, extending a hand instead. Midoriya Izuku. Izuku didn't know what he'd been expecting, but it hadn't been his hand getting slapped away and a hand fisting in his collar. It took everything within him to not immediately flip the boy over his shoulder, but Izuku couldn't stop his hackles from rising. He stepped forward enough to send the boy off balance before quickly breaking out of the grip. He didn't know whether to be hurt or offended at the response to what he'd thought had been an easy greeting, but Izuku settled on dropping his gaze. Better the meek victim than a potential target. The fuck was that? The boy demanded. Izuku just shied back further. I was only introducing myself, he whispered. I thought you might remember me. A scoff. Yeah, I remember you. You're the shithead that stuck his fucking nose where it didn't belong. That had Izuku's head jerking up. I was helping you. I didn't need it. Izuku's mouth snapped shut, but he wasn't any more impressed. The other boy clearly wasn't either. Not if the finger thrust in his face was any indication. My name's Bakugo Katsuki and I don't need your fucking help, got it? With that he stormed away. Izuku watched him go before sighing heavily, shoulders dropping. Well, that could have gone better. Midoriya Izuku. Aizawa's call was met with a boy pulling himself away from the group of 5 gathered in a back room after the written exam was over. He'd been attempting to smile at a blonde boy, but seemed relieved to escape the sheer exuberance, and honestly, Aizawa couldn't blame him at all. He waved the potential student to a nearby desk that was both quiet and unable to be overheard. He indited for Midoriya to take a seat before flipping open the boy's file. Severely limited access to education prior to past year. Speech unaffected. Aizawa mentally nodded to himself, flipping to the exam instead. Seemed as though the boy was cleverer than he'd initially thought. Midoriya had, if Aizawa had to guess, highlighted each kanji he didn't recognize. Besides, some of them were possible guesses as to what they were, while others were blank. Skimming over his answers, it was easy for Aizawa to see what the note at the top had meant. If Midoriya understood the question, he answered flawlessly and in intense detail. It made it easy in other questions to see where he'd misread or where he'd, quite frankly, made a blind stab. I'm sorry. Midoriya's voice made him up, but the boy just continued on, hands twisting together. I know it's basic but I did my best and that's all I could do. Aizawa held up a hand. I'm already aware of your circumstances. There's no need to tell me you're sorry. He tapped a question near the middle. Answer this for me. Once you read it, it was impossible to miss the way Midoriya's eyes lit up while he simultaneously slapped his forehead. It was quite humorous, if Aizawa didn't have to suddenly start writing as Midoriya answered at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And so they went, back and forth until the exam was finished. He scrawled some notes of his own across the bottom, for whoever saw it afterwards, or for Midoriya's file if he got in, and began to shut the folder before Midoriya's hand shot out. Aizawa raised an eyebrow and the boy blushed, glancing over his head and wincing at the time. Is it? I didn't have time in the exam, but can I? He cut off and reached into his backpack, pulling out a pen and paper. Would I be able to copy down the kanji I didn't recognize? I'd like to ... if I take them home. Aizawa glanced at the clock himself. You've got 10 minutes, kid. Midoriya beamed, tugging the exam back and taking meticulous notes. It only served to confuse Aizawa more. The kid wasn't educated but now wanted to take work home. Where had this attitude been in years past? Or had he always had this attitude and been unable to act on it? 2 minutes before his time was up, Midoriya handed the exam back, bowing deeply. Aizawa watched him go before shaking his head, effectively wiping the boy from his mind. After all, he was basically a single grain of sand on a beach. The next exam, according to the letter Izuku had received last week, was to be a physical one. Students taking the exam were asked to bring clothes that enabled them to use their quirks but weren't modified unless necessary. Izuku didn't have a costume, per se, or anything he needed to help utilize his quirk, so hoodie it was. He tacked on some running tights and shorts over the top before doing the laces of the boots Inko had given him near 6 months ago. It'd do ... most likely. Wow, you don't look worried at all. Izuku jumped at the bright voice before finding the girl from before standing there. You're Araka, he remembered. He managed a smile and was all set to reply before a hand was suddenly chopping between them, Izuku's pulse spiking. If this was what school was like, he didn't think he'd be able to do it. His heart would give out after a week. Excuse me, boomed owner of said hand. But this is an exam and it's very rude of you to attempt to sabotage him through distraction. I would expect. She's my friend. Izuku didn't know why he felt compelled to say it, but it seemed right. And it must have been too, because Uraraka sent him a thankful look, or at least, he thought it was, while the other boy suddenly looked cowed. Oh, well, in that case maybe you should ask first. Izuku cut in with a frown. It's not nice to assume. Right, Uraraka piped up, casually gripping his arm. It took everything in Izuku's power to not pull away, but he managed it, even if his smile swapped into something more of a grimace. The other student did, thankfully, leave them alone after that. Izuku wanted to sigh in relief but thought it would probably come off as rude. It didn't stop Uraraka from doing so, though she then looked terribly embarrassed and all Izuku could do was laugh, as quiet and short as it was. I did the same thing in my head, he admitted, just to make Uraraka smile. Well, she said, hands fisting on her hips and cheeks puffing out. It was kind of rude. I was only coming to say hello. Izuku gave a little wave, no matter how redundant it was, but was then distracted by his phone going off. They weren't actually banned, not between exams anyway, but Izuku still hadn't expected his to go off. After all, there were only 2 people who had his number. Reaching for it in his pocket, Izuku's brow drew into a deep frown. Dad, Izuku, I can't give you any details, but let me just remind you none of this is real. It looked as though Uraraka was going to ask him what was wrong before the siren sounded, indicating the start of the exam. He gave her a firm nod before sprinting off, though Izuku pulled up just past the entrance, swinging up the building closest and perching on the rooftop. Here he could see. Here he could assess. They'd been given no clues going into this and he needed one before he acted. The instant he looked out over the area, Izuku understood why Toshinori had sent out that message. There were 3 different groups on the fields: robots, villains, and civilians. The villains were dressed like something out of an old comic book, so ridiculously over the top it was almost laughable, but Izuku was glad. It made the distinction very clear in his head. Right, robots, villains, civilians. When it came down to it, there wasn't even a choice as to where to go first. Civilians. Ah, look, there. He's finally moving. Finally. It's been barely 2 minutes. Plus, he's shown more strategy than everyone else. Boom. I guess mindlessly exploding things isn't a strategy. It is, in a way. It's eliminating the threat. True. Oh, he went straight to the civilians. Bold choice. Not wanting people to get hurt. Admirable. But he isn't doing anything about the problem. Not everyone can shit. Check out what 437 seconds doing over on Gamma. He was meant to be watching all the students and he was. But Toshinori couldn't help the small smile that tugged at his lips. Good, Izuku, good. Despite everything Toshinori had clearly thought, Izuku was more than confident with this exercise. He'd been trained to dodge, to run, to not be noticed. It was more than easy for him to slip past villains and robots alike, though the robots were a little tougher. From there he would just snag a civilian, use as much of his quirk as he dared and deposit them in what had been cordoned off as a safe area. Izuku had already done about 12 trips, managing to stay out of everyone's way and mostly going unnoticed. Part of him wondered if he was slipping under the exam marker's notice too, but he hoped not. And even if he wasn't about to jump headlong into danger just for them to notice him. A crashing noise to his left made Izuku skid to a halt, turning around even as trepidation was creeping up his throat. The sight before was exactly what he had thought and everything he'd dreaded. A giant, borderline massive, robot bearing down on the civilian safe space. Izuku sighed, setting his jaw and stretching his arms above his head. All right, time to get noticed then. And even though he sighed, and even though he knew it was all fake, it didn't stop Izuku from feeling the urgency rising up in his throat, as though it was real, as though people could actually get hurt. Maybe they would. Maybe not severely, but maybe they would. Maybe that was part of this exam. Maybe minor injuries were par for the course, but they wouldn't be right now, not in this moment. Not if Izuku had anything to say about it, which meant he didn't have to think twice before sending his quirk blazing through his body, ignoring the pain as muscles tore and bones creaked. He could save them. He would. Smash. Slinging his backpack over his shoulder, Izuku waited for the crowd to filter out before making the trek back to the school's main entrance. Toshinori was already waiting for him, beaming when he saw Izuku. Izuku grinned, making an aborted shriek when his dad swapped to his muscle form all so he could scoop him up, as though Izuku weighed nothing. Dad, he whined, swinging his feet petulantly until he was put down. Toshinori merely ruffled his hair and nudged him inside, though Izuku could feel the gaze that was looking for injuries. I'm fine, he mumbled, shying away ever so slightly. Sorry, Toshinori said, scratching his neck sheepishly. Sometimes, I'm afraid I can't help it, but I watched you through some of the exam. You were very impressive. Izuku flushed bright red, hiding his face behind his hair. Izuku, don't be like that. You put in 100%, didn't you? A nod. Then you should be proud. I did my best, Izuku agreed after a long moment. And that's all I can do. He nodded once more, a little more decisively. I really went all out. Toshinori's smile slipped momentarily, having seen Recovery Girl heal a broken arm and what looked like torn muscles in Izuku's legs. That you did. I think you had everyone's attention there, at the end. I didn't want it, Izuku said with a frown, pausing mid-step only to get guided forward. You wanted to keep people safe, Toshinori finished, squeezing his shoulder. And that was noticed. The teachers here aren't heroes for nothing, Izuku. They see a lot that others might miss. Izuku stiffened and Toshinori cursed under his breath. Not like that, Izuku. That's not what I meant. But they'd have to be told, wouldn't they? Izuku asked in a whisper. If I came here, if I got in, would they ... They'd know I was a V-villain. Toshinori pulled him up with a growl, crouching in front of the boy and all but forcing their eyes to meet. You never were. Never in anyone's eyes. Don't say such things about yourself. Izuku didn't answer, Toshinori sighing. Nezu knows, of course. But anyone else ... Well, I'm sure we could keep it at our discretion. The tension in Izuku drained away immediately, very much not wiping at his eyes. Thanks, Dad. Now, Toshinori said, palms slapping against his thighs. The other teachers and I have a few more things we need to go over before we're done for the day. Will you be all right on your own, my boy? Izuku chewed on his lip before pointing to a sunny spot underneath a window. Can I stay there? Toshinori waited, Izuku having that frown that meant he was slowly processing his emotions into a way he could describe. I'm tired. From too many people. He looked embarrassed by the wording he'd found, but Toshinori grinned, chuckling quietly. I understand that all too well, Izuku. People are often tiring, especially in large groups. He wagged a finger at him. Don't leave without telling me, though. I won't, Izuku assured, waving him off and sitting himself in the sun. His eyes sunk shut as the warmth washed over him. Not that it was particularly cold out. His phone found its way into his hand and he scrolled down YouTube for he didn't know how long before being disturbed. Hearing the footsteps approach, Izuku tried to make himself as small as possible for all the good it did him. A man with outrageous blonde hair crouched in front of him, smiling and eyes twinkling over the top of his sunglasses. Hi there, waiting for someone? Izuku nodded, tucking his knees in closer. He thought it was a pretty big hint, but this guy was either oblivious or just not paying attention. No, instead he sat himself down next to Izuku and pulled out his own phone. You like cat videos? Sometimes, Izuku whispered, hunching in further but also flicking to his liked videos and choosing his favorite cat one. He held it out, smiling weakly when his phone was taken. Oh man, this is so Shouta's style, the man muttered, before his eyes widened. Hey, here, watch this. Swap. I didn't mean to just take your phone. It's all right, Izuku said, tapping play on the phone in his hands. He recognized the video straight away, lips quirking into a smile. I like this one, right? I think I've watched it every day for the past year. Hazashi, leave the kid alone. Izuku and, apparently, Hazashi jumped a mile at the voice. Izuku blanking that he'd let his guard down so much and been so unobservant. He then looked up, recognizing the voice. Aizawa, in return, recognized the boy sitting with his husband. Or rather, the boy his husband was sitting next to, who was looking more and more like he'd rather be anywhere else. He glanced at the space between them, nudging Hazashi over with his foot. Let Midoriya breathe. You know each other? Hazashi asked, even as he shifted over a good few centimeters. The relief in Izuku's frame was almost palpable. We met earlier, Aizawa said, crouching down and plucking Hazashi's phone out of Izuku's hands. Cat videos. I like them, Izuku mumbled, taking his own phone back and clutching it close. It was odd how shy he was here. Nothing like how he was during the exam. Had he been more comfortable in a controlled environment? Or was he at his limit of what he could take for the day? Speaking of, shouldn't you be heading home now, Midoriya? Izuku shook his head. Dad isn't finished work yet. Aizawa's mind blanked, as did Hazashi's if his face was anything to go by. Yes, they had a child coming through, but Aizawa wasn't aware of any other faculty members that had a kid Hitoshi's age. If they did, they'd certainly never mentioned it. And Midoriya, frankly, didn't bear the slightest resemblance to any of them. Not in looks or in personality, or even in quirks, for that matter. Hazashi's mouth was open to pry and Aizawa was said to stop him when, you're still here. Aizawa wanted to groan at All Might's voice, so not up to his level of jubilance right now, but it was Izuku's reaction that made him falter because Izuku's eyes had lit up and his face was splitting into a grin. Dad. The boy bolted between them, giggling when Toshinori hugged him tightly. Toshinori gave Aizawa and Hazashi a small wave before fussing over Izuku, fumbling with the straps of his backpack simply because he could and double-checking that Izuku had everything he'd come with that day. It was only a soft word from the man that made Izuku turn and gave them a bow, slotting himself back into Toshinori's side. Aizawa turned to Hazashi once they were out of earshot. He made it in, am I right? Midoriya. Hazashi repeated slowly. Yeah, passed on rescue points alone. Shouta, he's All Might's. He's in 1A. Aizawa wasn't taking no for an answer, already on his feet. The dots were coming together in his head. The lack of education, the skittishness, the anonymity, the obvious adoption by All Might. There was also one big thing that stood out to him. Midoriya Izuku needed additional support, needed a helping hand, and call him selfish, but Aizawa didn't know if Kan could do that. It had only left one possible solution. By the end of the day, he had it in writing. Midoriya Izuku, Class 1A. The letter had come a week later, though Toshinori knew Izuku had already known the results. He'd tried to keep it a secret, really, he had. But Izuku could read him too well, and while on one hand that made him proud, on another it was mildly bothersome. It still didn't stop Izuku from beaming as he opened the letter, giggling under his breath when a hologram of All Might appeared. "Hush now," Toshinori scolded, lightly poking him in the ribs. "I had to do this for everyone. You, my boy, were no exception." Izuku was laughing until the second he wasn't. He tried to shake it away, but Toshinori laid a hand on his arm. Izuku just huffed, angrily swiping away tears even if his face was full of something more whimsical. A year ago a letter from All Might." He shook his head, blinking back more tears. "That wouldn't have. I'd never have." He didn't finish, but Toshinori didn't need him to, tucking the boy into his side and combing his fingers through his hair. "I understand. I'm thankful every day that luck brought me to you." The words were accompanied by a kiss to the top of the head. Izuku gave a rather loud sniff before shaking his head rather violently, reaching out and replaying the video from the start. "You made me miss it," he grumped. Toshinori laughed loudly. Izuku rolled his eyes and ... Was that the first time he'd done that? Toshinori thought it was. Izuku waited for the video to be done before sliding it back into its envelope carefully. He then hesitated greatly, hands bunching the fabric on his knees. Toshinori urged him on with a gentle bump to the shoulder. Izuku shrunk down further. Inko said if I got in, I should ... that I'd be allowed to celebrate." Something bloomed in Toshinori's chest. Izuku was asking him for things. He was actively asking for something he needed, wanted. "Inko's a smart woman," Toshinori said, nodding. "So, what would you like to do to celebrate?" "I don't know," Izuku mumbled. "I haven't celebrated before." That ... hurt, but Toshinori pushed past it, pasting a smile on his face. "Well, we should definitely do something fun and something that you want to do. Is there something you want to see or do?" He turned Izuku towards him, capturing his attention fully. "It can be in this house, in this neighborhood, or anywhere in the city. Whatever you would like, Izuku." Izuku chewed on his bottom lip for the longest time. He then tentatively got to his feet, padding to the balcony door and sliding it open. Toshinori followed, perplexed. Izuku hesitated one more time before pointing out across the city where, miles in the distance, the faint outline of Tokyo Tower could be seen. Can you go up there?" "You certainly can," Toshinori said. "And you certainly shall." Izuku knew he was timid, knew that he jumped at more shadows than anyone else, knew that the train scared him more than it scared anyone else, even with his dad by his side. But one thing that didn't frighten him, the one thing he'd never been scared of, was heights. He made that more than plain as he dashed over to one of the glass floor panels in the tower, in awe of the tiny specks that were cars down below. "Izuku, be careful," Toshinori chided. He frowned. "But it's safe," he countered. He stared at the view a moment longer before, albeit reluctantly, letting Toshinori pull him off the glass. Izuku sunk back into his dad's side, taking in the sight of Tokyo by night. It was, perhaps, the most breathtaking thing he'd ever seen. "Come here," Toshinori said, tugging Izuku over to what was obviously a photo spot. "Go, stand in the middle." Izuku faltered, hands twisting together. "Why?" "So I can take a picture," Toshinori explained. "It's a way to keep memories." Izuku liked the sound of that, but you have to be in it too, Dad. Toshinori looked like he was about to cry, and Izuku didn't know how to make it better when, to his relief, a kind stranger came to their aid. She offered to take the photo for them, and that was what got Izuku moving, sliding into the arch and Toshinori standing behind him. He smiled on cue and, when shown the photo, it didn't feel inclined to leave. Toshinori thanked the woman profusely, who waved him off as though it was nothing. Izuku showed him the photo before sending it over, burying his head in his hands when his dad immediately set it as his phone's lock screen. It was an idea though, Izuku quickly doing the same. "We'll need to add more photos to our collection of memories," Toshinori murmured. Izuku nodded. Come to think of it, he didn't know if he'd ever had his picture taken before. He wondered if Toshinori had taken any of him. "Yeah, I need a picture of you as All Might," Izuku said, smiling. "And lots more of you as my dad." Toshinori's smile wavered the way it often did, but Izuku was mostly confident it was a good thing. They spent a few more minutes gazing out the windows before a call came in. Izuku knew what that meant, Toshinori blanching. He'd never had to leave Izuku somewhere that wasn't at home or their adjacent neighborhood. Answering the call, his voice was painfully tight before hanging up. "I can do it," Izuku said resolutely, pulling up the metro map on his phone. "I know how to get home." "No, I'll call you a taxi," Toshinori was saying, even as he stepped into the elevator. "Dad, I can do it," Izuku repeated. "And I'll have to take the train to school, right?" "With me," Toshinori said through gritted teeth. His shoulders then slumped. "Although, I suppose not always." Izuku reached out, carefully taking his father's hand. "I'll be careful, I promise. And if I run into danger, I know how to get away. I'll be safe." They arrived at the ground floor, walking quickly through the entrance and onto the street. Toshinori paced several steps, ran a hand through his hair, then crouched down, grasping Izuku's shoulders tightly. "You message me the second you get home, do you understand, Izuku?" Izuku nodded, face completely serious. "I will, Dad." Now go, you have people to save. Toshinori knew it, but he didn't look happy about it. The next second he was gone and Izuku was left alone for what was only the second time in his life. He shivered, shoulders curling in and head bowing as he made his way to the nearest station. He could do this. It wasn't even that hard. In fact, it was made easier when a scarred hand wrapped around his arm from the shadows behind the station stairs. Hey, need a guide? Izuku grinned. Yeah, smile. Izuku did so, accepting the phone back from Inko and pocketing it after a quick look at the photo. Toshinori didn't even bother to ask for a copy, knowing by now Izuku would automatically forward it on later. Izuku gave Inko one last wave before slinging his school bag over his shoulder, about to embark on his first actual day of school. His first one, as in, ever. He'd been up to UA with his dad a few more times since he'd been accepted, been given a few extra tours and spent some time just adjusting to the room, but now Izuku was going to dive right in. Nenzu had offered to start Izuku on half days, even if just for the first week, but Izuku had firmly rebuffed the idea. If he was going to do this, he was going to do it as normally as possible. It wouldn't do to stand out on day one. No, he was going to enter one as though he had done this drill over and over again. That this was a routine he knew all about, as though he was a normal child with a normal upbringing, not like he actually was. Not like a quirkless villain reject. Are you sure you haven't forgotten anything? Toshinori asked one last time. Are you? Izuku challenged, Toshinori chuckling and pulling the door shut. The train ride over was silent, Izuku doing his routine of keeping a sharp eye on everyone in the carriage while Toshinori perused and sweated over his notes for the day. They reached UA long before the first bell, Izuku teetering at the hallway that led to his class. You can come with me, at least until the bell, Toshinori offered. Izuku chewed his bottom lip uncertainly. If I'm first, I'll be noticed first. But if I'm last, everyone will notice me. Toshinori mulled that over. But better to get lost in the crowd, don't you think? A noncommittal shrug. I guess. Izuku wavered a minute before sighing loudly, shifting his backpack that little bit higher. I'll go. He could see the way his dad was already opening his mouth. No doubt to ask if he was sure, so Izuku just barreled over the top, flinging his arms around Toshinori's chest and forcing him to pull him into a hug. It wasn't like there was a complaint though, Toshinori squeezing him tightly for probably a moment too long before letting go with a ruffle to his hair. Izuku pouted, swatting him away before turning to the classroom. He could do this. In retrospect, this was probably going to be one of the easiest things he'd ever done. Pushing open the door, there was no hiding the relief that flooded him at finding the room empty. Izuku had doubted anyone would be there, but you could never be sure. Flicking open his phone, Izuku pulled up his admissions email and found the seat that belonged to him. His bag was hooked onto the side and he sat down, phone out and scrolling mindlessly through the camera roll. He would admit, he was starting to build quite a collection of photos. Izuku would have been lucky to have been there all of 5 minutes before the door was pushed open. He didn't look, but his eyes certainly flicked that way. Hidden under his hair, he then had to push down dread because why? This wasn't ... he didn't want. Ah, it's you. The voice was as loud as he remembered. Izuku flinching. Although it was a while ago, I find a true apology is in order. At the exam I was quite. Stop shouting. Izuku hadn't meant to say, but ... he also didn't regret it. Not when it made the boy's mouth snap shut and he flushed violently. I apologize. Thankfully, his voice was quieter. I am simply exuberant. Izuku frowned. So's my dad, but he can be quiet too. You. Yes, I suppose you're right. The boy bowed, holding a hand out. Ida Tenya. Midoriya Izuku, he replied, shaking the hand as briefly as possible before tucking it back against his chest. Sorry for snapping. No, you're right, Midoriya, Ida said, pushing his glasses up. Izuku smiled as much as he could bear, only for it to vanish when the door was pushed open once more. Ida was off because Izuku could blink and that ... that could actually work. If Ida kept this up, Izuku could just slide into the background. If their attention was taken up elsewhere, they might never notice him at all. And they didn't, for the most part. After being bombarded by whirlwind, most students simply stumbled to their desks looking mildly dazed. Izuku recognized a few of them, some not so much. As they arrived, he was mentally cataloging their names, doing what he could to assess their skills and quirks, and deciding who to avoid and who not to. Kaminari and Ashido had been labeled as safe while he was still unsure about Aoyama and Shaoji. Shinsu was ... well, Izuku didn't know what to make of him. He'd slid into the seat behind Izuku without anyone noticing. And if that wasn't a sign of a kindred spirit, Izuku didn't know what was. Of course, then he had to arrive. The boy Izuku was actually hoping hadn't made it in. Bakugo Katsuki came through the door with all the fiery energy he'd shown on exam day, and he and Ida were fighting within seconds. Izuku winced at the noise, his savior coming in the form of Uraraka, who was right on Bakugo's tail. Midoriya. She dashed to his side, Izuku sending her a shy smile. Hi Uraraka. I'm so happy you made it in. I was hoping you would. Me too, Izuku said before frowning. No, wait, I meant, Uraraka laughed, going to swat him before coming up short, waving a hand instead. Huh, I know what you meant, silly. But, between you and me, I think we're both happy to be here. Izuku never got to reply because at that moment a voice came from the doorway, one he recognized, even if only just. Everyone settled down. There was a beat of silence before everyone flew into their designated seats. Some bags being tossed around in the commotion and a few people tripping over one another's feet. The owner of the voice stepped out of what Izuku could just see as a sleeping bag, slowly making his way into the room. Aizawa. Of course Izuku remembered him. He'd run into him twice, which was nearly the most number of times he'd run into anyone outside of his dad and Inko. That took 2 seconds too long, Aizawa said, fixing them all with a glare that Izuku felt was more than a little put on, but then ... he wasn't always the best judge. He settled in to listen, probably one of the few not surprised when Aizawa told them to put their gym uniforms and meet him outside. After all, how could he be surprised when he didn't know how school was supposed to go? Izuku was still stuffing his shirt over his head in the lockers when a voice brought him out of his head. Turning around to find, he thought, Kirishima standing there. Whoa dude, your scars are super manly. Izuku blinked, twisting as though he could somehow see his back. They're ... not, he countered, hastily pulling his shirt down before anyone else could see. And I mean, you have one too. Kirishima chuckled, scratching at his cheek. Yeah, well, but I did mine on accident with my quirk so. Same, Izuku lied, just shrugging when the answer seemed to confuse Kirishima. Better to lie than own up to get beaten up by villains. Are you a fucking idiot? Bakugo demanded, scoffing at Kirishima. Scars are fucking weak. Means you ain't strong enough to win. Izuku's chin tucked against his chest, backing out of the conversation. Doing so meant he literally backed into someone else. Izuku flushed, immediately jumping away and bowing. Sorry, he got a shrug. Accidents happen, and that was all he got. Call him an idiot. Call him hypocritical. But Izuku thought that didn't count as much of an introduction and so fell in step with the other student, Shinsu. Ada had managed to grapple out of him. I'm Midoriya, he said, risking a glance up. It's nice to meet you. Is it? Was the drawled response. When he nodded, that got a tiny huff of amusement. Guess so then. I'm Shinsu. Mido. He started before realizing he'd already said that. Shinsu just rolled his eyes. You don't have to talk. Silence can be company too. That ... made sense. It also wasn't very much like his dad, so Izuku could see why it maybe hadn't been said before. They continued down to the grounds in silence, Uraraka joining them and filling the space Shinsu had by talking near non-stop. The rest of the class filtered around them and soon enough Aizawa joined them, silence instantly falling. Much better, he praised. Now, let's begin. The task, Izuku discovered, was pretty straightforward. Beat records he didn't have and set a benchmark for all future progress. It was a simple enough step, even if it was all physical-based. He could see Shinsu's forehead pinch in displeasure at that, so obviously whatever quirk he had wasn't the physical kind. Hagakure didn't either though, so Izuku was sure it would be okay. And then Aizawa threw on the kicker. Whoever placed last would be expelled. There were several outraged shouts, Izuku scowling himself. That was hardly fair. Everyone had worked hard to get here, and to be marked down, failed, on something as silly and unchangeable as physical attributes ... that was entirely unfair. It lent a certain way ... and Izuku wasn't sure if he liked that. Scratch that. He didn't like it. Not at all. Aizawa watched the tests with an idle eye. He'd done this every year and he'd probably do it again next year. The tests themselves were simply for students to stretch their legs, so to speak. The smarter ones would use it to assess their classmates' quirks and get a feel for where they stood in the pack. The one thing Aizawa was truly looking for was the ones who gave up. The ones who decided that they weren't going to pass and so should give up at the start. With an attitude like that, they didn't belong at UA. Life was full of hurdles. The goal, however, was to meet them head-on. Tallying up the next set of stats as he directed the students over to the gym, Aizawa blinked twice at one score. Midoriya Izuku was far below everyone else, far below even a quirkless person's results. And Aizawa had seen his quirk. His gaze shot up, searching for the boy in question. He wasn't hard to spot, hovering by the edge of the crowd and generally trying to make himself as easy to overlook as possible. Aizawa had to admit, the kid had it down to a fine art. Another interesting observation to file away for a later date. Why did Aizawa already feel as though Midoriya's file would be several inches thick by the end of the semester? As he watched, he could visibly see Midoriya holding back, could see the second he realized he was doing too well in a certain activity and bungled it. He was, from what Aizawa could tell, going above and beyond in his attempt to fail. That didn't line up with the impression of him Aizawa had gotten all those weeks ago. It certainly didn't add up with Toshinori's outlook on anything. Midoriya, he called, as the class lined up for the final activity. His arms were folded, eyebrows raised. Would you care to share as to why you're failing this class, and in turn, this course? It doesn't look good on you and it's certainly patronizing to your classmates. Midoriya jumped, ears burning as his hands flew up, waving awkwardly. I didn't mean. Everyone here is incredible. Aizawa's brow furrowed. That isn't an answer. Midoriya toed the ground, shoulders shrugging ever so slightly. I'm not. UA is a new dream for me. Barely even 3 months. I think. Everyone else here, they've wanted to come to UA for a long time. I want them to achieve that dream. His hands balled into fists. I'm going to be a hero. My dream is to be a hero. But that, being a hero, UA isn't attached to that. If need be, I'll be a hero on my own. But other people here, their dream is to be here. I won't take that away from them. So if anyone has to go ... it should be me. He glanced once at Shinsu before snapping his mouth shut. Midoriya. The boy shook his head. That's all I have to say. Aizawa narrowed his eyes. It isn't, so let's hear it before I expel you on the spot. Midoriya didn't back down, just shook his head again. When Aizawa's capture weapon snapped out though, Aizawa could barely follow him. He was gone, a hand curling around the weapon and slamming him to the ground with an alarming amount of practiced skill. The boy then went white, shaking profusely. I'm sorry, I'm sore. Aizawa swore under his breath. Kid, he said, picking himself up but stopping when moving closer only made the panic worse. I'm not upset with you. Hell, I'm almost impressed. You've got some reflexes there. Midoriya barely seemed to hear him though, hugging himself tightly before blurting out, the test isn't fair. Aizawa paused. Pardon? The tests? Midoriya repeated in okay. He apparently seemed to think explaining himself would erase any punishment due his way. Jesus Christ, where had Toshinori found this kid? It's all ... the parameters are physical. It's certain quirks are at a disadvantage. Midoriya gestured out. Kaminari uses lightning and H. Harajuku is invisible. If you fail them because they can't, because this isn't their area, they're still good heroes. Kaminari started blushing and crowing away, but Aizawa sighed, ignoring the smug look Shinsu was sending him. That wasn't the point of the test. Midoriya's head snapped up, eyes wide. I simply wanted to test everyone's dedication, to see if they'd try even when they knew they were at a disadvantage. Midoriya breathed, realization flooding his eyes. Aizawa nodded, holding out the bow used in the final task. Throw this properly, and no one gets expelled. Deal? Midoriya smiled, clasping the ball tightly. Deal. The door opened, Inko calling out a greeting and getting one in return. She then paused because ... one. Setting down the dish towel, Inko headed into the hall. Toshinori was hanging up his coat, and while Izuku's shoes were lined up against the step, the boy himself was nowhere in sight. Izuku. Toshinori pointed to the boy's room, Inko popping her head in. Izuku had, quite literally, crashed. He'd flopped onto his bed, uniform and all. His school bag, even, was still on his back. Red Bean was licking his hair, but Izuku didn't so much as stir, dead to the world. Inko smiled, heart swelling. I take it he did well. Inko, he was marvelous. It was dark, Deku knew that much. It was dark and it was cold. His left shoulder was stinging, pain throbbing constantly as though he'd been stabbed by a lance. In his right hand, a gun aimed shakily. It was supposed to have been an easy assignment. Run in, grab the briefcases full of money, sneak out again. He'd timed the guards' rounds. He knew when there would be an opening. Only there hadn't been, and he'd been cornered. And this wasn't a usual job, done in broad daylight and luring innocent civilians to fall into his trap. No, this was one villain organization going against another, and villains didn't care for children. Age wasn't even a number to them. There was simply enemy and ally. It was obvious which category Deku fell into. Being a mere 8 years old wouldn't help him. One step by the villain and the gun raised higher. Don't, Deku cried, voice shakier than he would have liked. He was met with laughter, the man's quirk activating again, fingernails turning into long, spear-like appendages. What are you gonna do, kid? Shoot me. Fat chance. Deku hated how his bottom lip trembled, hated the feeling of blood starting to dry against his skin. I will. All he got was a scoff. No, you won't. You're just a wimpy. Bang. 1 round. Bang, bang, bang. 2, 3, 4. Another villain, another 2 rounds. A third villain, the swapping of an empty cartridge to a full one. 2 shots, 4, 5, 6, until there was nothing but an expanding pool of blood, and Deku was left in the middle, chest heaving and face wet as tears slid down his cheeks. With shaking hands, he picked up the backpack he'd dropped, slinging it back over his shoulder, wheezing slightly at the weight of the cash inside. A second grab had the third case being scooped into his left hand. Deku starting to back up ever so slowly, eyes never leaving the bodies laid out in front of him. His gaze slipped to the gun in his hand. He slowly turned it towards himself. He could. It would be so easy. If he could just. Izuku. Izuku flew awake, scrambling away from the vicious green light filling the room only to realize that it was him. Izuku slammed down his quirk as fast as he could, but then there were hands on him and one for all came crashing back in. The hands removed themselves just as quickly, even if Izuku was already across the room, grabbing something. Anything that he could use as a weapon from his desk. Izuku, it's all right. Izuku's hand shook around the scissors in his grip, slowly blinking everything into focus and shaking off the fogginess from what he could now tell was sleep. It was still dark, but he could make out the posters he and Toshinori had stuck to the walls months ago, could see his pajamas laid over the desk chair, the faint light from the street light on the ground several floors below. His grip slackened, Izuku's eyes flooding with tears. Dad, Toshinori was there in an instant, crouching down in front of him and ushering Izuku into his arms. Izuku latched on without hesitation, great, heaving sobs racking his frame. Fingers threaded through his hair and a soft voice whispered in his ear. A quiet jingling joined in and soon Red Bean was weaving between Izuku's legs, occasionally brushing against him. Izuku just held on tighter, wincing when he heard Toshinori sigh. I am sorry, he hiccuped. I know it's stub. Izuku's mouth slammed shut, though he squeaked when Toshinori scooped him up, sitting him on the edge of his bed before coming to kneel in front of him. Izuku, you never need to apologize for things like this. You're already doing above and beyond your best, my boy. But I know it's late, Izuku argued because yes, he'd realized that now. Toshinori, to his credit, didn't even bat an eye. Yes, it is. It must be unpleasant for you to be up as well. I wish life had been kinder to you, Izuku, so that you didn't have to deal with such things. Izuku hastily wiped at his eyes, lest more tears fall. I'm still sorry. I don't know. I haven't. You forgot to put your music on. Toshinori interjected gently, reaching out and passing over said phone. But that's on me as well. I shouldn't have let you sleep through dinner, or should have at least checked in on you. No, it's okay, Izuku murmured, taking the device and tossing it by his pillow. His hands toyed with the seam of his uniform. He should probably change out of that. He expected Toshinori to leave now that he, mostly, had things under control. What he hadn't expected was for his dad to tilt his chin up, searching his face tightly. There's something more you want to say. He realized, Izuku trying to jerk back but being held in place. Toshinori's look was painfully severe. I won't judge you, Izuku, you know that. Whatever it was you saw, whatever it was you dreamt, you can tell me. It might even help you, if you did. It wouldn't, Izuku said firmly, hands fisting tighter in his trousers until Toshinori uncurled his fingers, one by one. Izuku very much avoided his gaze. You won't like me if I tell you. There was a grinding of teeth. Try me. I killed someone. Izuku saw Toshinori stiffen, his own shoulders dropping. Not just someone, a lot of someones. I don't even remember how many. But there were three the first time, anyway. He rolled his hands over, inspecting them as though they would suddenly cease to be clean. There was so much blood. He sounded hollow, even to himself. Toshinori didn't say anything for the longest time. Izuku snagging Red Bean and hiding in his fur. It wouldn't last long, but it would be enough. Maybe one last hug. Because yes, Toshinori knew he was a villain, but he hadn't known he was a murderer. A murderer with a kill count definitely in double digits. I think, Toshinori said at length, also reaching up to pat Red Bean. That Deku had to do a lot of things he didn't want to, had choices made for him, made impossible decisions when faced with the possibility of death. But I think he wants to redeem himself, that Izuku can do that. That is, if Izuku wanted to. Izuku managed the barest of smiles. I think he does want to. A lot. The smile he got in return was luminous. Then, time to rest up so you can face the day, my boy. He then paused. Unless you're uncomfortable going back to sleep. That got a laugh out of Izuku, shaking his head ever so slightly. No, I'm fine. I'll put my phone on though, just in case. Toshinori nodded, then ruffled his hair. Well, best change out of your uniform at least. We both know Inko would have a fit if she found out. Izuku laughed again, nose scrunching up. She would. He reached forward to hug Toshinori one last time. Thanks, Dad. Always, young man, always. Of course he'd always love Izuku, and of course he'd always support him, but that didn't mean Toshinori wasn't going to call Tsukauchi and pass on what Izuku had told him. After all, there was a file that was seriously missing details. Arriving at UAS grounds the next day, Izuku assured Toshinori one last time that he was fine, that he'd be able to make it through the day on a few jumbled hours of sleep, before splitting off in what was to become their usual hallway and making his way down to the classroom. Tossing his bag under the desk, Izuku jumped up onto the windowsill. His phone was in his hand, Izuku idly spinning it in his palm should the urge to take a photo arise. He didn't know if there'd be anything to see from the classroom window anyway, but it never hurt to look. Plus, with his dad having to get to work so much earlier than the students, Izuku figured it would probably be the way things went. Best to get used to it. Not that he got that much time to himself anyway. No, because Ada was soon there, pushing open the door with far more force than necessary and making Izuku wince. Ada paused, blinking twice before sliding the door closed with infinite care. My apologies, Midoriya, he said, voice just above a whisper which Izuku thought meant he was trying to be quiet. I didn't realize you'd be here so early. Izuku pasted on a smile. I think I'll be early every day. He went to expand on that, but Ada cut him off, a hand clapping down on his shoulder. I commend your choice, Midoriya. Your dedication is certainly admirable. Izuku shied out from under the hand but kept his smile in place, no matter how painful it was to do so. I guess. His phone then went off, a text from Inko wishing him a good day, and Izuku used that as an excuse, pretending to be immersed in the phone far longer than he needed to be. It got Ada to take a few steps back, for privacy's sake, and then another student came, Yaoyorozu, if Izuku remembered. His eyes flicked to the clock, frowning. Maybe he'd have to hide in the staff room for a while each morning if this was the routine he was going to come faced with every day. Unfortunately, Uraraka was one of the last to arrive, although, fortunately, few people bothered Izuku. They waved hello and made simple small talk, but Izuku found that if he didn't actively continue the question asking, it quickly vanished altogether and he was left alone. Classes passed much easier that day than the day before, most likely because they were going over the syllabus and not having the threat of expulsion hanging over their hands. Izuku had almost had to blink back tears when worksheets were handed out and each one had hiragana written beside the kanji so he could follow along. There were also short dot points on the side that summarized everything, and Izuku wasn't blind to the way Kaminari lit up. Not literally, at that. Obviously, reading wasn't his strong point either. Izuku did remember seeing him at the exam, so it made sense. The last class of the day, though, that's when things really kicked into overdrive. Because that was when All Might flung open the door and greeted everyone with his booming voice. There were cheers from the students around, and Izuku's grin wasn't the slightest bit fake. He gave a tiny wave and got a peace sign in return. Izuku giggling behind his hands. Welcome, young heroes. The room went silent, Izuku perking up much like everyone else was. He supposed that for most people in the room, this would be their first time even being in the near vicinity of All Might. Today came the booming continuation. We'll be looking at one of the most important aspects of being a hero, battle training. Izuku clapped his hands over his ears the second All Might finished his sentence. Thankful he did when the room erupted to what was probably cheering but sounded more like uncontrolled yelling and screaming. He saw his dad's eyes flick his way, but Izuku just gave a subtle nod, an assurance that he was okay. He got the tiniest frown, Izuku ignoring it and lowering his hands. And of course, All Might said after a long moment, to do that, you'll need your costumes. Come grab them and meet me at Field Gamma. The costumes themselves were easy enough to locate, Izuku hanging back while other students madly scrambled for them. He sensed a presence approaching long before he saw them, blinking up to find Shinsu standing there. He was eyeing up Izuku in an equally appraising way. Shouldn't you be in the mad scramble for your costume? Izuku frowned. It isn't going anywhere. Shinsu snorted in amusement, leaning against his desk as the first students peeled away and bolted for the change rooms. Tell that to them. I don't think they'd listen. There was definitely a laugh that time, Shinsu shaking his head ruefully. So, not a fan of loud sounds, huh? Izuku looked away, cheeks burning. And no. Just unexpected noises. Shinsu didn't laugh, not like Izuku was anticipating. No, he just nodded along as though that made sense, nudging him forward as there was finally room for them to retrieve their costumes. I'm not a fan, that is. Izuku paused, hand hovering over the case. I'll remember that. Shinsu scoffed that it was the most ridiculous thing he'd ever heard, but it wasn't a lie. Izuku could remember, and so he would. Glancing around, Izuku took in the costumes of his classmates. A lot of them were bright and colorful, like the ones he'd seen on TV, in the news, on those game shows he loved, in those interviews with the puppies. Others were darker, things he wasn't so sure on. Takoyami's made him nervous, too much hidden under the folds of his cloak. Kirishima's was rough, uncomfortable, not inviting at all. And Bakugo's downright had him tensing. He had never seen a hero look like that. If that wasn't bad enough, Bakugo was already turning his way, lips drawn into a sneer. The fuck are you wearing, Pipsqueak? Izuku looked down at his costume. Yes, it was simple, a green hoodie with a yellow hood and a thick white stripe, yellow shorts over white compression pants, and Ko's boots the final piece, but it was no different to Jiru's or Kaminari's. He said as much, gesturing with a hand. P+, he added. I want children to feel safe, to feel if they need me, to help them or hold their hand, or carry them home, that I'm. What kind of fucking nonsense is that? Izuku recoiled, jerking away from the subsequent explosions even as Uraraka stepped in front of him and Shinsu's hand slapped down on Bakugo's forearm. Young Bakugo. All Might's voice was sharp, silencing some of the alarms in Izuku's head. There is no set way to be a hero. Fighting villains is not a hero's main job. Huh, All Might frowned. If that's what you think, you've been lied to. A hero, first and foremost, is there to help others, to save people. And you do that by taking out the threat, Bakugo countered, folding his arms. All Might stared at him a long time before shaking his head, taking a step back. Then, I hope, throughout this course, you'll come to see a different perspective. That, quite clearly, was the end of that, All Might turning and addressing the class. The scenario was straightforward in Izuku's opinion, though he could never admit it, one he'd done hundreds of times, or at least, done from the other side. Break in, steal something, not be noticed. That was pretty run-of-the-mill stuff. Hell, Izuku could disarm the bomb if it came to that. But it wouldn't because this was UA and there weren't bombs. No, only paper mache replicas. It was almost laughable. Izuku wondered if bomb defusal was saved for third year. They were split randomly, everyone drawing colored balls from the box in All Might's hand. 20 balls, split into 10 black, 10 white, and in each 10, you had to find the person with the same letter as you. Izuku rolled his in his hand, D, black. A brief look left told him Shinsu was already out, his hand curled around a white ball. Other students were already starting to pair off, Izuku hating the way his chest started to fill with Lee. This was simple, he could do this. He just had to interject himself. Everyone was in the same boat. No one would balk away. No one would think him strange. He couldn't mess this up. Perhaps the universe decided he needed help though, because at that moment there was the slightest clearing of a throat behind him. Izuku turned, smiling when saw Uraraka there. She then held out the ball in her hand and Izuku smiled even more. Maybe the universe didn't like him as much as he'd thought. Because although it had been kind enough to pair him with Uraraka, it had also been sadistic enough to put him against Bakugo and Ida, possibly the two people in the class he liked the least. But Izuku pushed all that aside. This wasn't about likes or dislikes. This was a job. He could do jobs. He'd been doing jobs since before he could form complex sentences. What's the plan? Uraraka asked. Izuku took in the building in a long look. Your quirk erases gravity, right? Pretty much. Going in the front door is suicide, Izuku said, brow pinching. It might be smarter too. I think if we went up the outside first. With my quirk I can scale the building and with yours, you can too. Should we ... Do recon first. Uraraka finished brightly, already nodding, hands clapping together. That's a great plan, Midoriya. She did her own assessment of the building. It looks like there's a window going into every room. Wherever the weapon is, we should be able to spot it. She flashed him a thumbs up, one Izuku awkwardly returned. The buzzer then sounded and they were off. Izuku went one way, Uraraka another. Izuku's floors came up blank, causing him to bounce down and head to Uraraka's starting point. She was already there and a little greener than she had been to start with but was still able to hold up 4 fingers. Okay, 4th floor. Izuku eyed the distance. Easy. He held out a hand. I know you can do this, he said firmly. But with the L limited time it. I can carry you, J just this time. If he had been expecting Uraraka to get offended, she hadn't been, just laughing and waving a hand self-consciously. I know my quirk, Midoriya, she assured. I'll take a hand up. Their hands slapped together, Izuku bringing his classmate close before crouching down, lightning flickering over his body. 4th floor, easy. It wasn't because Bakugo shot out of the 3rd floor window, shards of glass hurtling towards them, explosions close behind. There wasn't much Izuku could do in midair, just twisting and ungracefully falling through the window Bakugo had shot out. Go, he yelled, Uraraka hesitating a single second before sprinting away. Izuku barely had time to wipe the blood off his cheek before Bakugo was there, rage evident and gauntlets firing. Izuku dodged, wincing at the heat that came off his back. You can't run, wimp, Bakugo yelled, Izuku setting his jaw. I wouldn't run from you, he stated, voice oddly calm. Why you ... You're just. Bakugo, you're a high schooler. The other boy seethed, suddenly faster and slamming him into a wall. Right, he sneered. Cause you're so touchy-feely with villains. Izuku froze, ice pouring through his veins. Bakugo noticed, frowning, but Izuku didn't give him time to think on it. He didn't get time to think on it. Panic set in like a siren and the next thing he knew, Bakugo was 3 walls away and his own arm was throbbing in pain, lightning licking over it. Hero team, win. All Might's voice blared through the building and Uraraka must have done something but he was wrong. He was so wrong. They hadn't won at all. There wasn't anything Toshinori could do until class was over but he was at Recovery Girl's office the second it was. Shio didn't even get time to scold him before Izuku was flinging himself into his arms, sobbing loudly. Shio tutted, though she softened somewhat at watching his fingers card through Izuku's hair. Toshinori. She didn't have to say anymore. Toshinori already knew what that tone meant. This is too much for him. Or maybe he isn't ready for this yet. And damned if he didn't already know that, but there was one person who didn't seem to know that yet and he was the one currently in his arms. Izuku, don't pull me out. It was a strangled gasp, Izuku's hand fisting in his costume frantically. I'm sorry. It's scared. I I know what I did wrong. I won't do it again. You acted on instinct. Exactly. And that can be dangerous with your quirk and your skills. You understand that, don't you, Izuku? Izuku pulled back, eyes brimming with tears still. Dad, no. Toshinori knelt down, cupping his shoulders gently. I'm not pulling you out. Izuku visibly deflated there. But I'm reminding you, Principal Nedzu has you on a 1-month trial. Then we'll review. And even then, my boy, I need you to answer me. Your quirk is dangerous, do you understand? Yes. Izuku bowed his head in shame. I already apologized to Bakugo. It hadn't gone well, but he had. And Toshinori knew the other layers in there. It won't happen again. I'll be extra vigilant. I'm going to try harder. And at the top of it all, I won't let you down. Toshinori drew Izuku back in for a hug. Also, young Izuku, I never got around to saying it, but your strategy was brilliant. Many of your classmates were impressed. There's a very clever brain in that head of yours. Izuku flushed right to the tips of his ears, getting to his feet when Chio clearing him lined up with the bell sounding. The day was over, it seemed. Taking one step, he hesitated before reaching out, hand slipping into his dad's. Toshinori gripped it back without hesitation. Shall I tell you about how everyone else? Izuku nodded, perking up immediately, until he heard the name Todoroki. Then his brain derailed completely. Izuku sat on one of the window benches in the staff room. He'd become so commonplace there, staff didn't so much as bat an eye. They'd long since learnt that Izuku was All Might's son, though they were none the wiser as to how such a relationship had been formed. They simply let Izuku do his thing. He was quiet enough, it wasn't like he bothered any of them. Hey Dad. Izuku saw his dad's head snap up, as well as a few ears very clearly turn his way. He resisted the urge to huff, just waving Toshinori over. He pointed at the school gate, far in the distance. Who are they? Toshinori's hand rested on his shoulder as he leant over to look, eyes squinting before dropping into a tired expression. He pinched the bridge of his nose wearily. It seems as though, Izuku, the press have discovered I work here. The staff that had been pretending they weren't listening in stopped pretending there and came over, Izuku shrinking into Toshinori's chest and Toshinori mindlessly wrapping an arm around him protectively. Yamada frowned, cheeks puffing out indignantly. This is a school, not a zoo. We should probably send them on their way, Toshinori murmured, Izuku nodding. I mean, it's sort of hero training, Nimori pointed out. They'll have to learn how to deal with the press. The third years should be good at this by now. That's also true, Yamada mumbled, peering closer. At least they're standing outside the gate. You know they won't for long, Aizawa cut in, entering the room and already looking like he wanted to go home. Izuku thought he understood that look very well. Come on, Hisashi, let's chase them off. Yamada grumbled but did as asked, the rest of the staff filtering away. Izuku stayed, hands unconsciously coming to curl around Toshinori's arm, soaking into that support. Toshinori smiled, pulling Izuku in that little bit closer. Would it help? Izuku asked quietly, eyes still locked on the reporters. Would it help if you went and spoke with them? Toshinori shook his head, even though Izuku couldn't see it. I doubt it, my boy. They would leave today, perhaps, but since they'd gotten a story once, they'd be more likely to come back again and again. Better to say no from the start. Izuku chewed that over. I get it, he finally replied. It sets a boundary. It does, Toshinori agreed. Izuku turned, eyeing him up. Are you not telling anyone you work here? I mean, outside of the students. Because if the villains knew, they'd attack, right? Attack the school. Yes, I'd say so. Izuku watched Toshinori come to crouch in front of him, blinking slowly. But they won't get in, Izuku, trust me on that. UA is more than prepared for something like that. I know, Izuku said, rolling his eyes playfully. Nedzu assured me of that. I just if it's not a secret, can't you tell people? You can make a video, you know, and and then people would know and the press wouldn't need to come. It was Toshinori's turn to blink in surprise. Well, I suppose so. That's quite the idea, Izuku. He shrugged. Sometimes keeping things to yourself is the same as lying. Toshinori frowned, but Izuku had already excused himself. He sent the press one last baleful look before picking up his backpack and shrugging it on. He must have seen something on Toshinori's face because he sighed. Dad, it wasn't meant like that. I'll see you in class. Toshinori nodded and then Izuku was gone. The press, similarly, disappeared from his mind. Out of sight, out of mind. Based on every day that had come before, Izuku had no idea what to expect that day from school. He had thought he understood the concept of school, but maybe not. Although from the way Ida often mumbled away to himself about as expected of UA, maybe UA wasn't an atypical example. Izuku wouldn't know. What he did know, however, was that when Aizawa announced they were going to choose a class representative, everyone bemoaned how normal that was. Izuku didn't know what a class rep was and, quite frankly, he didn't want to. Everyone else seemed to be lobbying for the position and Izuku felt it was kind of a lot of trouble. After all, it couldn't be something too important or Toshinori would have told him about it. Was it extracurricular? and Ko had told him about that, and the thought of doing more schoolwork made Izuku's nose turn up. As thirsty as he was for knowledge, there was a limit to how much time he could spend around people in a day. All those thoughts led to Izuku cautiously raising his hand when everyone else had since put theirs down. Aizawa's eyebrows went up. Yes, Midoriya. He twisted his hands together fretfully, shying away from the gazes coming his way from every side of the room. I don't put me down for class rep, please, he added as an afterthought. Perhaps to his immense relief, before anyone could question him on it, there was a voice from behind him. Yeah, me too. Izuku spun around, cautiously offering a smile when Shinsu just grinned at him. Aizawa seemed nonplussed, merely turning to Ida. There you go, they've decided. Leave those two out of it. Of course, Ida bellowed, and then pieces of paper were being passed around the room. The reason was simple, Izuku frowning at his paper, wondering who to write. He assumed from the word representative that the student chosen would have to, obviously, represent them. A flick of a gaze around the room, and then he scribbled down a name. He would admit there wasn't too much thought put into it, but oh well. Ida collected the names up, dutifully tallying them up on the chalkboard. Izuku rolled his eyes as the results started to come in, and he realized literally everyone had voted for themselves. Surely that had to be against the rules, or at least was in poor taste. Weren't heroes supposed to be humble? 2 strikes got added next to Todoroki Shoto, and there was his vote. Really, son of a high-ranking hero, it made for an obvious choice. The public, or school board, or whoever this was for, would probably enjoy such a person representing them. Across the room, Todoroki frowned, but he didn't get a chance to find the culprit before Ida was shouting, flapping a piece of paper in the air. Who was this? He demanded. You cannot vote for that surprisingly attractive bin in the hallway. Kaminari and Kirishima hooted in laughter, Izuku immediately turning to Shinsu. Shinsu pressed a finger to his lips and just leant back in his chair, watching the chaos descend. Izuku had to admit, he was probably the funniest student in the class. He was subtle and underhanded in maybe everything Izuku had been taught to be. Maybe that was why they resonated so well with each other. In the end, Shinsu's vote got discarded, and it came down to a tie between Yaoyorozu and Todoroki. Ida said as much, calling them both to the front. Todoroki adamantly didn't move. He waved a hand in Izuku and Shinsu's direction. Had I known I was going to be chosen, I wouldn't have participated at all. I give my votes to Ida. That caused more uproar, students shouting, Bakugo slamming his fist into the desk, and Aizawa stepped in, scolding them all for not being able to do a simple task before appointing Ida and Yaoyorozu and assigning them all additional homework in the form of an essay regarding the need for teamwork and decision-making skills in hero work. Izuku thought that kind of fair. Shinsu bemoaned it not fair to him because he had decided, and Izuku had to admit, that made sense too. The look Aizawa gave Shinsu was odd, but not in a wholly bad way. Izuku frowned. That was something he would have to look into too then. It wasn't a hard mystery to get around. Not when Shinsu slid into the seat beside him at lunch and Izuku could just openly ask, do you and Mr. Aizawa already know each other? Shinsu looked at him for a drawn-out moment. Huh, you're smart. Izuku flushed, coughing and scurrying into his uniform collar. Hardly, he mumbled. Mr. Aizawa. He looks at you like he knows you. Like, Izuku frowned on how to word it. Like more than a student he just met. Shinsu provided, Izuku snapping his fingers. Why yes, Shinsu chuckled. I mean, him being my dad might have something to do with it. Izuku nodded, because that made sense. While across the table Uraraka and Ida froze in the middle of eating their lunch. Uraraka, Izuku understood, but he didn't understand why Ida had suddenly decided he was their friend. Still, it wasn't nice to exclude people, so Izuku had let it slide, and Uraraka did a great job of helicoptering and making sure Ida never raised his voice too high. You are related to Mr. Aizawa, Ida repeated incredulously. Shinsu rolled his eyes. Like you aren't from a family of heroes yourself. Izuku's eyes whipped across the table there, but Ida was already nodding. I suppose that's right. He then saw the questioning look on Izuku and Uraraka's faces. I am the youngest son of the Ida family. My family are all heroes. My brother, Ingenium, is an incredible hero. Oh, I know him. Izuku piped up, thinking back on the time he'd seen him on TV and his dad had proceeded to tell him many rather embarrassing stories about the poor young man. Didn't he once combine Heelys with his quirk and nearly break his neck? Uraraka burst out laughing while Ida flushed. That? Well yes, but he was much younger then. He then pulled up severely. How did you? So that's why you want to be a hero then? Izuku assumed, accidentally cutting over the top. You want to be a hero because your family is? Thankfully, Ida didn't notice his rudeness and was kind enough to answer. In a way. However, it is more because I admire the person my brother is. I hope to one day be even half the hero he is. Izuku nodded, turning to Uraraka. And you, are your family heroes too? Because that seemed to be a trend. She shook her head, hands rolling together nervously. And no, My family ... they're construction workers. And she then said her expression. I'm being a hero so I can make enough money to support them. Ada applauded her while Shinsu snorted and Izuku was somewhere in the middle, his head cocked to the side. But shouldn't a hero want to save people? Midoriya. Ada hissed. But they should, he argued, not quite understanding what the problem was. Money is ... you can make money a lot of ways. Yeah, and Uraraka chose this way, Shinsu cut in dryly. Guess that means, probably, deep down, she wants to do good. Uraraka flushed as Izuku thought that over more. He then reached out, taking her hand in his. I'm sorry, he whispered. I don't always understand, but Shinsu's right. And even if he wasn't, wanting to make money to support people, that's pretty selfless. Uraraka pulled her hands away to discreetly wipe at her eyes, and Izuku looked to Shinsu for. He didn't know exactly. Support? A nod to show he'd done the right thing. Whatever it was, he didn't get it. Not because Shinsu didn't feel inclined to give him anything, but because at that moment an alarm decided to blare across the cafeteria and send the entire eating area into disarray. From what Ada managed to ascertain from a passing student, the alarm meant a break-in on school grounds. Even so, Izuku wasn't entirely sure what all the fuss was about. He didn't get time to say so before he was swept away into the oncoming crowd. Being in a crowd never went well with Izuku, and he lasted all of a minute before his fight or flight instincts kicked in, which here could only be utilized in the way of Izuku jumping above the crowd and settling in on one of the windowsills closest. Glancing through the window, Izuku also saw the answer to the problem. While Izuku wasn't proud of his villain heritage, so to speak, it had taught him several things he had to admit were pretty nifty and rather useful. One was the ability to cause a distraction, and that was absolutely a good ability to have right now. Putting his fingers in his mouth, Izuku made a piercing whistle that reverberated through the hall. Some students stumbled to a stop while others stopped purely so they didn't crash into the students in front of them. Somewhere in the distance, Ada went flying over the crowd. Izuku did his best to ignore that. Once quiet filled the hall, Izuku gave a tiny wave. If you look out the window, you can see the presser inside. They probably broke down the door. He then frowned. And aren't you training to be pro heroes? And even most of the teachers are pro. All Might is here. They can keep you safe. A large amount of students were appropriately shamed there, Izuku giving a short bow before jumping down. He would have been lost in the crowd had Shinsu not placed a hand on his elbow, eyes sparkling with mirth. You know, for a shy kid, you've got spirit. Izuku folded his arms petulantly. I do not, he grumbled. His phone then went off, Izuku sparing it a glancing look before the words sunk in proper. From Dad. Staff room immediately after class. Trepidation was a new word Izuku had learnt recently. Trepidation, a feeling of fear or anxiety regarding something that is about to happen. Izuku thought that an extremely accurate representation of how he was feeling right now. With his backpack slung over his shoulder, Izuku shuffled into the staff room, head down. He didn't know what he'd done wrong, though he was pretty sure this was in regards to the callous way he'd addressed the large majority of students at lunch. In hindsight, it hadn't been very polite. Izuku knew that now. What he wasn't expecting, though, was for Detective Tsukachi to be there, sitting in a dragged-over chair at Toshinori's desk while the two of them held mugs of coffee. Izuku nervously patted over, though some of that was relieved the instant his dad drew him in under his arm. Thank you for coming so quickly, son, he murmured. Izuku shook his head. It wasn't like there was anywhere else I had to be. You could have been with your friends, Toshinori told him gently. We wouldn't have minded. But thank you. Tsukachi has some questions. Izuku tensed, but the detective sent him a smile, so it probably wasn't anything too bad. He did, however, become a little wary again when he was waved to follow, and they soon left the main building altogether. I thought I might ask this away from prying ears, Tsukachi asked as they walked. And I know it's a long shot, but I'd be remiss if I didn't check all avenues. Did you ever, before you met Toshinori, hear of anyone wanting to do you a harm? Izuku's head snapped up. His eyes then flew down the path they were on, and he understood the destination now. No, his answer was quick but truthful. And even if someone was, it wouldn't have reached me. The horsemen were ... they were more into petty crimes. Drugs, robberies. UA is ... it's a lot bigger than that. I thought as much, Tsukachi sighed, though he ruffled Izuku's hair. Still, thank you. And sorry for bringing up your past. Izuku frowned. It's okay. I don't mind. Except you do, Toshinori cut in. And it's all right that you do. It'd be more concerning if you didn't. Izuku didn't know what to say to that, instead just falling into step as Toshinori reached the gate. He'd seen the press at that very morning. Only now it was a hollow version of itself. Nezu, Aizawa, and Midnight looking at it with frightening severity. Someone really wanted to get in, huh? Midnight said, raising an eyebrow when Izuku stepped forward to assess the damage. She then caught sight of Toshinori and tutted. Still confuses me that you have one of them, she laughed, Toshinori making a face. Izuku, please Nimiri. And he's a child, not a thing. Not really a child, Aizawa pointed out. Izuku didn't pay them much mind, fingers tracing over the gate even as his eyes followed the curve of the destruction. He stepped back with a small shake of his head. Someone decayed the whole gate. Isn't that ... The press wouldn't do that, do you think? Aizawa looked like he agreed, but Toshinori was there first. Pardon, Izuku blinked, subconsciously taking a step back. Oh, is it ... am I? Toshinori held up a hand. That's not how I meant it. I meant decayed. That's an odd word choice, Izuku. Izuku's mouth opened and then snapped shut. Oh, no, he didn't know anyone who wanted to harm Yue. Yes, he knew someone who wanted to harm All Might. Someone whose quirk was near identical to this. He took 2 steps, snatched up Tsukashi's wrist and dragged him back towards the main building. I changed my mind. I know now. Aizawa stared at the spot Izuku had just vacated. Nimiri was already laughing and crowing to Toshinori about how odd his son was, but no, this wasn't that. This was something else entirely. From the look on Toshinori's face, he knew it too, which was probably why, when Nimiri had left and Nedzu had given Toshinori a particularly pointed look, the pro-hero sighed, giving Aizawa a look that he could only call resignation. Izuku speaks about Hitoshi constantly. How about the boys have dinner together? And Aizawa knew. This was nothing about the boys and nothing about dinner. He said yes. It had taken Toshinori a good half hour to convince Izuku that having friends over was something people usually did and wouldn't seem weird to Shinsu. He'd also added some lie about getting advice from Aizawa and Yamada regarding teaching, so really, 2 birds with 1 stone. Izuku had seen the logic in that and agreed. Not that he had a choice, Aizawa and Toshinori already had the plan in place. But that had been earlier, and now Izuku was passed out in his room. He'd started with coming home from school and sleeping through until the next morning, but he'd improved as of late and now only slept until dinner time. Call him mad. But Toshinori was already looking forward to the day where Izuku wouldn't need to revive himself after school. Small steps and all that. Toshinori wondered if this was something all parents went through, if they all made silly landmarks like this and celebrated when their child met them. Maybe he could ask Aizawa that too. Just as he was thinking that, the doorbell rang. Hurrying over, Toshinori opened the door, smiling at the 3 people on his doorstep. He waved them all in, waiting for them to take their shoes off before guiding them down the hall. Tea is on the dining table. Help yourself while I get Izuku. Aizawa did just that, Toshinori backtracking into Izuku's room. He was already awake, predictably, and eyeing the door with a tight sense of wariness. At Toshinori he softened somewhat, but he was still very clearly on edge. Just Aizawa. And present Mike and Shinsu, Toshinori promised. Izuku took his word on it, grabbing his phone and swiping out of the music app. He tugged an oversized yellow hoodie over his sleep shirt and took a look at his blue and white striped shorts before deciding that was good enough. He let Toshinori lead the way, only fully relaxing when he caught sight of their visitors himself. He gave Shinsu a small smile before Aizawa waved them towards the television. It was an obvious order, Izuku flipping the device on before handing the remote to Shinsu. Here, you choose. Shinsu raised an eyebrow. I want to watch what you want to watch. It was an innocent if not cheeky answer, and it would have worked had Izuku not been a giant ball of anxiety and a mess of social confusions. As it was, Toshinori had to step in before Izuku backed out completely and ordered them all to leave. Shinsu, he said calmly. That's very kind of you, but Izuku's been very interested in branching out recently. Maybe you could help with that. Shinsu frowned at him but took the remote once more, pulling up the guide and finding a movie that was fairly recent. This okay? Izuku nodded, and the pair settled in. As they did so, the adults made small talk until Shinsu flicked a look at Aizawa and got a nod in return, and Aizawa had made a plan then. Dad, Shinsu asked, already on his feet, can Midoriya and I go and get snacks? Izuku looked alarmed at being included in this, but Toshinori was already nodding. Izuku, my boy, could you show Shinsu where to go? Izuku hesitated before giving a single nod. He picked up Toshinori's wallet from the counter and together the boys headed to the door. Once it was shut and the elevator dinged from further down the hallway, Toshinori let his demeanor turn into something more serious. Yamada looked appropriately cowed while Aizawa looked pleased that they were finally getting somewhere. Before we begin, Aizawa said, holding up a hand, be assured I made it absolutely clear to Hisashi and Hitoshi that they very much don't remember your address or what the building you live in looks like. Toshinori smiled grimly. Thank you for that. I'm sure, Aizawa, you've begun to realize that Izuku isn't all that he seems. His smile turned to a grimace. He doesn't want you knowing at all, but I feel you need to know. Even if only for your own safety. Aizawa's eyebrows shot up there. But it would mean the world to me if you continued to remain oblivious when Izuku is around. I understand, Aizawa said, leaning forwards, hands clasped. We've all assumed Izuku is adopted. I take it that's very much the case. It is, but it's before. Izuku has been in my care just over 9 months. Before that he was. That is to say. Toshinori dropped his head into his hands, sighing deeply. Izuku, from the age of 3, was in the custody of villains. Yamada squawked, while Aizawa went very, very still. Against his will, Toshinori said. But ... even so he's done things, was made to do things, that no child should ever have to. He has knowledge where he should and ignorance where he shouldn't. He isn't a normal child. I guess that the second he threw me over his shoulder on the first day of class, Aizawa drawled. Toshinori blanched. He did what? Aizawa waved a hand. A mistake on my part. It was merely meant to be a demonstration with my capture weapon. Midoriya clearly took it as an assault. Understandable, given his circumstances. That doesn't excuse it, Toshinori muttered, making a note to bring that up at a later date. Nedzu has him on a 1-month trial. Izuku's never been exposed to schooling before and UA is a rather volatile environment. But he wants to be a hero, Aizawa said, answering the question Yamada was about to ask. And, naturally, you wanted him where you could keep an eye on him. They haven't caught the men who imprisoned Izuku, he snapped, maybe a bit sharper than he should have. Until then, Izuku won't leave my sight. Yamada whistled lowly. You picked a good one. Toshinori smiled. I picked the best one. Aizawa rolled his eyes. I'm guessing that from what I saw this afternoon, Midoriya has an idea of who attacked UA. He has a theory, Toshinori said carefully, but nothing concrete. Nedzu will give you the details tomorrow. Aizawa mulled that over before leaning back in his chair. Toshinori, are you sure this is the best choice for Midoriya? He deflated. Absolutely not. But ... if I keep him from his dream, how am I any better than the ones that came before me? It was a loaded question and one that never got answered. His answer timed with the door opening and Izuku and Shinsu returning. Shinsu had enough coffee to feed a small army while Izuku was holding some packaged watermelon like it was God's gift to mankind. Then Red Bean hobbled out of Toshinori's room, yowling loudly, and all the attention went there. Hours later, when Aizawa was gone and Izuku was asleep, Toshinori pulled up the file Tsukachi had sent him. Shigaraki Tamura was the heading. Toshinori pinched the bridge of his nose before settling in to read. It was going to be a long night. In the week that followed, Izuku almost wished he hadn't given Tsukachi the tip-off. Not because it went anywhere, because it didn't, but because it meant Toshinori hadn't been home since. That was a lie. Toshinori was home sometimes, but more often than not it was just Izuku and Inko. Izuku had assured his dad he knew the way to school and call him pathetic, but maybe he wouldn't have if it meant Toshinori would ride with him to school someday. As it was, Izuku was now slinking into one just minutes before the bell. Ada had been watching him with a critical eye, but he'd yet to corner him, something Izuku was infinitely grateful for. Shinsu, at least, had mentioned to no one, not even Izuku, that he knew All Might was his dad or that he'd been to his house, so small mercies. At the very least, Izuku's day took a turn for the better there because Aizawa announced they had a special activity planned for the day and that it entailed rescue training. Even Izuku, as down as he was unable to suppress a tiny smile at that. Finally, they were getting to do the aspect of hero work he really wanted to specialize in. Some heroes were good at public morale, some were good at fighting villains, and Izuku wanted to be a rescuer, someone who saved others. And if no one ever knew who he was or no one ever thanked him, that'd be just fine. So long as he managed to save people. All right, Aizawa said, once the rabble had calmed down. Meet down at the bus in 5. You're welcome to bring your costume if you want, but be mindful, in some circumstances, it may slow you down. Izuku pondered that, spinning around to face Shinsu. Shinsu shrugged. It doesn't help one way or another. Same, Izuku replied. He then copied Shinsu and shrugged too, heading to the door without it. He wasn't too surprised when Shinsu slid into the seat next to him on the bus, and it filled him with a strange sense of warmth that he was, in a way, wanted. Uraraka sat down in front of him and Asui slipped into the seat beside her. Chatter filled the bus and Izuku tuned all of it, studying the surroundings because you just never knew. The only thing that snapped him back was the sound of his name. It's similar, right, Midoriya? Izuku blinked twice, shaking his head to clear it a bit. Sorry, Asui. What did you say? Your quirk. It's similar to All Might's. He nodded. Yeah, it is. Silence filled the space after that, Shinsu giving what to others sounded like an awkward cough, but what Izuku was pretty sure was actually a laugh in disguise. Kirishima finally stepped in. But isn't that like? Aren't there only so many quirks? Tons of people have fire quirks. That's true, Uraraka said. And strength quirks are pretty common too. It's the most common genetic mutation. Yaoyorozu piped up. I read once it's because it's almost a natural quirk. Bodies can do amazing things when fueled by adrenaline. Strength quirks are basically the equivalent of having that unlocked all the time. Kirishima said, rubbing his chin. Guess that is easier than something like my hardening. Seeing that he was no longer needed, Izuku slipped back into his chair and reverted his classmates to background noise once more. It made it easier for him to be the first to spot the building they were most likely heading towards, slightly awed by the size. They must be doing some grand rescue practice indeed to need a facility like this. He was, dare he say it, eager when they filed off the bus, shuffling a little on the steps and maybe jumping up one or two more than everyone else. "You're in a rush, Midoriya," Uraraka laughed, coming up beside him. He flushed. Uraraka, rescue training." Something in her face softened. "Midoriya, you're a good hero." Izuku gave a short laugh. "Uraraka, I haven't even started." She didn't say anything more, but there was something in her face. Whatever it was, he didn't get to question her on it because she was suddenly distracted by the hero waiting for them at the entrance. Izuku was fixed on them too, but only because he could see Aizawa's lips moving, perking up only to deflate again. He saw the word "where" in All Might, and then the hero opposite gave the slightest shake of his head and held up 3 fingers. Oh, Toshinori wouldn't be joining them. He'd already used up his limit of the day. Izuku shook the thoughts away. He hadn't even known Toshinori was going to be here. He couldn't get sad about what he hadn't known. Easier instead to look around the building, and it was certainly a building. There was a city, a shipwreck, what looked like a landslide, and even a typhoon. Izuku wondered how they even made an environment like this. His eyes tracked over the layout, memorizing where each zone was and where they met. Little mental notes came along with each glance. Isui would work best in the shipwreck zone, Uraraka the landslide. Hagakure would easily get lost in the typhoon and would need a partner. He snapped those thoughts away though and silenced them to the back of his mind while the hero in the astronaut suit introduced themselves as 13. Izuku thought that sounded a little familiar, but it was obviously more so to Uraraka, who may as well as had stars in her eyes. 13 gave a tiny bow before starting to talk. He had a good point, Izuku thought. Quirks that could save could just as easily do harm. It wasn't about the quirk, Izuku knew that. It was about what the owner did with it. It seemed as though today they would be getting to expand on that line of thought. Izuku's eyes flicked to Bakugo. He remembered their altercation during battle training all too well and how Bakugo had said he didn't see saving people as a top priority. Maybe today would help him. "Run." The thought came out of nowhere, screaming at him so loudly Izuku physically clapped his hands over his ears. "Mr. Aizawa." Uraraka called in alarm as Shinsu was cupping his elbow. Good choice too, because Izuku felt the blood run from his face, knew he had to be ghostly pale. But he shook them off because he didn't even need to look to know. Villains. The class around him paused, but Aizawa, to his credit, immediately swung around and he and Izuku spotted the warp hole at the exact same second. The next second Izuku was yanked back by his teacher's capture weapon, wondering when he'd even started moving. "Stay," came the low command, Aizawa's eyes briefly flicking over his head and, "Right, Shinsu." No matter how good the hero, family always came first. Izuku then grimaced. "Well, mostly. We need help," Izuku growled, shivering as more villains arrived. "I know," Aizawa said, pushing him back. "And help isn't you jumping in there. Any of you," he added when Bakugo started setting off explosions in his palms. "Get back to the bus and get in contact with the school. Someone call for help," Izuku ordered, stunned when he was immediately obeyed and several students grabbed snuck-in phones from various places on their hero costumes. "No signal," Jiru reported moments later. "Me too," Ashido said remorsefully. "They must have a jamming quirk," Kaminari realized, glaring at his own phone. "Then we need to get help manually," Todoroki said, voice painfully level. "Someone go." "All of you go," Aizawa repeated, leaving no room for argument. That was the last thing they heard from him before Aizawa launched himself down the stairs and into the fray. Behind him, Izuku could hear Shinsu swearing. Orders be damned, Izuku was going down there himself. Out of everyone here, he probably had the most experience with villains and maybe he could even identify some of them. Naturally, that was when an opponent appeared behind them. An opponent made entirely of mist. The students closest stumbled back, Bakugo and Kirishima stepping forward to keep them safe. Izuku was already heading their way. This one he knew. Shigaraki's right-hand man, Kurogiri. "Quirk, warp gate. Careful," Izuku warned, dodging through the crowd and coming to Bakugo's side. "He can warp you anywhere instantly. He's near impossible to hit." Bakugo frowned. "How the hell do you?" "It doesn't matter," Izuku cut in, scowling. "We need him out of the way so the others can get help." My, you're an informed one," Kurogiri said, shifting that little bit closer and making Izuku's hackles rise up. "Shigaraki won't like to get wind of you." Izuku didn't take the bait, just hunkered down lower. What are you doing here?" "This ... you can't be after us. We're ... we're children." "Indeed. Allow me to explain. I'm Kurogiri of the League of Villains, and we're here in your grand establishment to kill All Might, your symbol of peace." That same feeling of fear washed over Izuku, starting from his skin and seeping down into his bones. They were here to kill his dad. Yes, that had always been the possibility they'd talked about with Tsukachi, but it wasn't supposed to happen here. It wasn't supposed to happen at school. It wasn't supposed to happen in the one place he was supposed to be safe. Bile rose up his throat, Izuku forcing it back long enough that he could scowl once more. Well then, you're out of luck. He isn't here. If those slits were Kurogiri's eyes, then they narrowed at him. And what was a display of brilliance. Bakugo and Kirishima took that moment to attack. As distracted as he was, Kurogiri barely had time to defend himself. He had even less time when Izuku came in as a follow-up attack. It wasn't enough. A hand snapped around his arm, slamming him into the ground. So close, little one. Now, begone. Izuku yelped as he was plunged into sinking darkness. He heard the screams of his classmates who'd obviously been caught as well. He tried to escape, one for all screaming through his veins, but it was no use. Soon, everything was black, and Izuku was all alone. Toshinori sighed, placing his phone down with a grimace. He'd tried to get in contact with Aizawa, but so far, no luck. He didn't know if Aizawa was one of those teachers that kept his phone on at all times or whether he turned it off during school hours. The second one was just as likely given it was Aizawa. He wasn't exactly known for his social nature, although he was a rather dedicated hero, and surely having his phone off for 8 hours a day made that hard. Then again, he was an underground hero. Toshinori rubbed his temples. All he was doing was giving himself a headache. He'd go and join them soon, catch the tail end of the lesson. It backed onto the students' lunch break anyway, so maybe he'd be able to pick up Izuku and have them eat lunch together in his office. He'd seen the boy far too little of late. Toshinori, I knew I'd find you here. The hero perked up a little, smiling. Principal Nedzu, it's good to see you again. Your coat is looking splendid today. The compliment got him nothing. Maybe you won't be. A phone got thrust in his face, Toshinori wincing at the headline. Stopping evildoers all morning. You haven't changed at all. All Might. But I hope you remember, when I offered you a position here, you also said you'd prioritize working here. I know Izuku's suspicions make that a little harder, but what am I going to do if I'm always one teacher down? There are plenty of other hero agencies running throughout the city. Toshinori bowed, appropriately shamed. You're right, Principal, and I apologize, Nedzu hummed, sitting opposite him and starting to make tea. I'll accept that when I start to see that you mean it. He passed a cup over and kept one for himself. Now, let me tell you some of my theories on education and balancing teaching with hero work. Toshinori hid a smile behind his mug. It seemed his teacher hadn't changed over the years either. As he settled in, ready to listen and maybe even take some notes, there was a ruckus in the hallway. Toshinori barely had time to turn into All Might before the door to the break room was thrown open. Yamada standing there with an alarmingly out-of-breath. Toshinori's heart stopped. No, it couldn't be. Principal, Yamada said, calmly, coldly. We have a confirmed villain attack at the USJ. Toshinori was already out the window. Izuku. The first thing that hit Izuku was the cold. The second was the fact that he couldn't breathe. The third was that he was underwater, consequently explaining points 1 and 2. Swiveling, Izuku found the surface and began to kick up. He didn't get far before something wrapped around him and he was yanked out of the water. Air rushed into his lungs in a gasp. Izuku spluttering as he hit the deck of a boat. Asui and Shinsu were beside him. It was easy to guess which of them had saved him. Thanks, Izuku coughed, struggling into a crouch. No worries, Asui said, waving a hand. We all fell here together. I think that means we should stick together. Izuku nodded, watching Shinsu's jaw clench. His eyes were locked on the plaza and Izuku knew what he wanted. He hesitantly reached out, resting his hand on top of Shinsu's and ignoring the way he jumped. We'll get there. We can help him. Him, Asui repeated, head cocking to the side even as Shinsu nodded. My dad, Shinsu ground out. Izuku went to expand but Asui was already nodding. Mr. Aizawa, you two are close, you know. Shinsu snorted. Wonder why. He won't want you there, she warned. He never does, came the almost bitter snap. But I can help. My quirk is ... good for this sort of thing. Maybe you could use that quirk to help us. Izuku cut in, on his feet and scanning the area around them. Because we ... were surrounded. Shinsu and Asui joined him, the three of them ducking when a jet of water shot over their heads. Shinsu frowned, looking between them. Using my quirk here is going to be difficult. If they're underwater, it's likely they won't hear me. Shinsu, what was your quirk again? Asui asked. Brainwashing, Izuku said without thinking. We talk, he grumbled when Asui looked at him. Brainwashing that's activated when they answer a question. Asui, you can do most things a frog can, right? A nod. And I. Well I'm strong so we can. How can we? Izuku's fingers snapped together. Whirlpool. Shinsu mulled that over. You can make one with your quirk, right? But you need the villains to be in one place for it to be effective. Another jet of water slammed into the boat, rocking it precariously. That's right. Shinsu turned to Asui. Save me and I can be the bait. That's too risky, Shinsu, Asui argued. I don't. We don't have a choice, Izuku said, as loath as he was to admit it. Shinsu waited for Asui to nod before shooting to his feet and jumping overboard. As expected, the villains surrounding them swam to him like moths to a flame. Izuku activated One for All, jumping up onto the railings and giving Asui a tenuous smile. The second you go, I go. Asui nodded, waiting as long as she dared before snapping Shinsu up. Izuku was already leaping from the boat, hand balling into a fist before aiming at exactly where Shinsu had been. The gust of wind slammed into the water and Izuku barely had time to nab his classmates before the whirlpool erupted. Where the villains went, they didn't know, and under any other circumstances Izuku would have called it a sloppy job, but the villains weren't his focus right now. Aizawa was. The plaza where Aizawa was ... It looked as though a bomb had hit it. The floor was cracked and splintered, shards of rock protruding everywhere. Villains lay in slumped heaps left, right, and center. Blood splattered the ground in a grotesque mosaic, and the worst part was, Izuku suspected most of it belonged to their teacher, or a good amount of it, because his entire right arm was a mess of blood, his face not far behind, and Izuku didn't know what kind of creature was holding him to the ground, what kind of creature was pinning him, but it was going to kill him, and Izuku had never moved so fast, so instinctively, in his life. His quirk didn't even come to him, didn't so much as merit a thought, because someone had dropped a gun and Izuku had been using those far longer than any quirk. The whole chamber was empty before he processed what he was doing. That's enough. The monster didn't respond, but the man behind it did. Shigaraki. Izuku recognized him all too well despite never actually having met the man. After all, there weren't too many villains walking around covered in severed hands of all things. Midoriya, I told you to leave. Aizawa didn't get to finish, the monster slamming him back down. Shigaraki didn't get to speak though either. No, because Izuku had moved at the same time, reloading the gun and firing. 2 shots missed, 3 more found their mark. The horsemen would have beaten him bloody for how bad those 3 shots were, but they were more than enough for Izuku. Shigaraki went down howling, eyes livid. Namu, Shigaraki hissed, hands clutching his bleeding shoulder, leg. Forget Eraserhead. Kill that one. Midoriya. Shinsu's yell was cut off by an explosion up above them. Izuku's head snapped around, bottom lip trembling and eyes watering. Dad, it's all right now. Why? Because I'm here. Izuku dropped the gun, sinking to his knees. It was okay now. Everything was going to be okay. The ambulance doors slammed shut, both present Mike and Shinsu accompanying Aizawa. Everyone who hadn't figured out the connections beforehand had it pretty much shoved in their faces there. Besides from Aizawa, there weren't too many harmed. From what Izuku could tell, the villains had been pretty low ranked, no names with no real skill or experience under their belt. His classmates had taken them all out easily. Clearly, then, the real objective had been All Might in the method, the Namu. Izuku slumped onto the steps of USJ, head in his hands. It wasn't meant to be like this. This wasn't supposed to have happened. His hands shook and, for one terrifying moment, Izuku almost wished he still had that gun, had something to hold on to, something tangible he could use to defend himself. Tsukachi had already heard his story, had pulled him aside before the other police officers could get to him, while All Might was being dragged to an ambulance. Izuku had tried to follow but been pushed back, and all he wanted was to go home. Izuku, one parted like the Red Sea at All Might's voice. Izuku raising his head, too tired to even feel shame at the tears running down his face. Dad, he croaked. As soon as the words left his lips, he realized what he had done. Everyone staring at him with wide eyes and dropped jaws, but he couldn't bring it inside him to care. Not when he was hoisted up and tucked firmly against All Might's chest. The dam within in him broke, Izuku sobbing. Now, my boy, Toshinori shushed, voice a deep rumble under his ear. You're safe now. I've got you, Izuku. That was all Izuku needed to hear, closing his eyes and just clutching his father's costume. I'll be taking Izuku home now, Toshinori announced, maybe to whoever was now in charge of 1A, maybe to the principal. Please mark him as absent for the rest of the day. Izuku had never been so grateful to leave UA in his life. Toshinori, you can't make him go back. That's ... It's too much. I know, but this was all just one minor slip. And if Izuku wants to be a hero, he needs to learn that things like this will happen. I understand that, Toshinori, really I do, but remember, Izuku isn't your student. He isn't just a hero in training. He's your son. Is this what's best for your son? Toshinori went quiet after that, like he didn't know. Izuku crept back from the door, back towards his bed. The problem was, he didn't know either. USJ happened on a Friday, just before lunch. The students were checked over for the remaining afternoon periods and then sent home. They had the weekend to recover and come to terms with what happened as best as possible. An email was sent to their parents, an explanation and apology rolled into one, and at the bottom was tacked on a little notice that informed them that Monday's schedule had been cleared so that they could attend group and individual counseling sessions. When Monday rolled around, it wasn't a surprise to anyone that Midoriya and Shinsu weren't there. Shinsu because they'd all seen what had happened to Aizawa, and Midoriya because he had seemed the most rattled out of all of them. That alone had sparked debates and hushed whispers within the class because Midoriya was All Might's right. Shouldn't he be prepared for things like this? Yaoyorozu, while looking embarrassed, admitted All Might had probably sheltered him too much. Uraraka had argued it more like he'd already seen too much. Bakugo had remained oddly silent, and no one knew what to do about that. Asui, also, kept well away from the discussion, though no one knew why. After all, no one else had seen what she'd seen. No one else had seen Midoriya pick up and fire a gun as though it was second nature. Hadn't seen his startlingly accurate shots. Then Aizawa turned up for homeroom, and the single moment of silence turned into yelling again, everyone demanding if he was well enough to return. Several eyes flew to Shinsu's empty desk and then gave Aizawa a vaguely disappointed look. It must have worked, in pair with his phone continually going off, because Aizawa just sighed heavily before leaving homeroom early and telling them he'd see them another day. All Might came in, and though his demeanor was as cheerful as always, there was something off about it. He hadn't answered any questions regarding Midoriya, had deflected those entirely, and had instead focused on sitting with them and ensuring their well-being. But, come lunchtime, he was gone too. They didn't see him again either. On Tuesday, Shinsu returned, looking like he hadn't slept since Friday, and maybe he hadn't. He didn't say a word as he crossed the room, all but throwing his bag under his desk before slumping into it. Every part of him screamed for them to leave him alone. Kaminari was the only one brave enough to approach, holding out his phone. Wanna play Pokemon till class starts? Shinsu had blinked at him before sighing. No, but thanks, Kaminari beamed, trekking back to his own desk and humming as he doodled on his notepad. Everyone else returned to what they had been doing, pretending as though the interaction had never happened. Exactly 5 seconds before the morning bell chimed, Midoriya strode in. His blazer had been swapped out for, hilariously, an oversized All Might hoodie, and he looked every bit as tired as Shinsu did. He dropped into his chair and burrowed into the collar of his hoodie, eyes narrowing when Ida made to come towards him. The message was clear: he was not happy to be there. The night before, Toshinori felt his heart drop at returning home to find Izuku exactly where he'd been ever since he'd come from USJ. In his bed, facing the wall. It had been hard enough to coerce him into the shower that first night, but ever since then, it was almost as if Izuku had shut down. He hadn't eaten for 2 days before Inko had finally managed to get him to, but even then it was barely a bite before he'd pushed it away. Toshinori himself had just been sitting on Izuku's bed, occasionally mumbling away as he replied to emails or thumbing Izuku's shoulder when his hands were free. It didn't feel like much, but Izuku always lent into the contact, so Toshinori assumed he was doing something right. USJ had rattled Izuku, and Toshinori couldn't even get an answer out of him as to which part. Had it been the villains managing to break in? Had it been the ease in which firing a weapon had come back to him? Was it seeing someone close to him get hurt? Was it their relationship being found out? Or was it, more likely, a combination of everything? Toshinori had asked, but Izuku had never replied. But there came a point in Toshinori thought he was at it. Izuku, he said, sitting down gingerly and earning him nothing more than Red Bean's head poking out from under the blanket. Toshinori rested a heavy hand on Izuku's shoulder. Staring at the wall can't be that interesting. It's not, Izuku murmured, voice hoarse from lack of use. But, I've done it for years. There are worse things. Toshinori hated that was true. Still, it gave him an in. Like villains attacking a high school. Izuku's eyes dropped, even from what little Toshinori could see. I'm not. Izuku, you need to talk to me. I can't fix it if I don't know what it is that's wrong. And if I don't know either, Izuku challenged. Though he did sit up, and that was the most Toshinori had gotten from him in days. Then that's a start, Toshinori said, wrapping an arm around Izuku and drawing him into his side. But before we start, I can only apologize. At his son's questioning look, he explained, I, as well as Nedzu, promised you that UA would be a safe place for you. It seems as though we weren't able to hold up that promise. I'm sorry for that. And for the trust it must have broken in you. It wasn't your fault, Izuku said, something of a weight lifting off Toshinori's chest. Villains are. I know villains, Dad. If they get an idea in their head, sometimes nothing can stop them. You did. No one's ever stopped them before. Not for me, anyway. So it really means a lot. Toshinori frowned. Then where's the problem? Izuku stared at his hands, watching them form fists. I don't know. The words sounded painful, forced out from behind clenched teeth. Toshinori pressed a kiss to the top of his head. Well, how about this? Would you like to return to UA or not? The silence there was admittedly longer than Toshinori would have liked. If I didn't, Izuku said quietly. Would you stay home to look after me? Toshinori's thoughts stopped dead in their tracks. Wait, was that? Izuku, are you upset that I was away so much? Izuku flinched, scrambling away. No, well, yes, but it's, Dad, you're All Might. I'm sorry, I know it's pathetic, and I don't have the right. I'll go to UA, I promise. Just don't be angry. Toshinori was on his feet and dragging the boy into his arms before he could become any more panicked. Don't say those things, he growled, Izuku shying away like Toshinori might hit him, and honestly, that hurt. Toshinori set him down, locking their eyes together. Midoriya, Izuku, have I ever raised my hand to you? Izuku shrunk in on himself, but Toshinori refused to let him weasel away. And no, but I've never. This isn't an okay thing to ask, right? Whether it is or it isn't, I will never hurt you, do you understand? He didn't take it personally when Izuku took a moment to think before replying, eyes raking over his frame and staring deep into what felt like his soul. No, Izuku said slowly, almost as if surprised himself. Now, as for your question, Toshinori thought on how to answer, hands coming to cup Izuku's face. I agree with you, that is All Might. I sometimes have more responsibilities than other people. However, it's a failure on my part to not take into account your feelings. I am, to myself and to you, a single father as much as Inko helps me out. I should always make time for you. If I didn't, I should never have asked to adopt you. This is my mistake, that you feel this way. But I understand, Izuku implored, Toshinori smiling. And thank you very much for that, my boy. But you're still a child and I'm still your dad. You should always be my first priority. Izuku looked as though he didn't know if he liked that or not, but he did eventually nod. Toshinori took that as good enough, reaching out a hand and grinning when Izuku slid into it. Now come on, come out of this room. Let's find something to do. Izuku nodded, slipping on his shoes alongside him and following him through the neighborhood streets, their feet leading them to one of the small but lively shopping streets. Halfway round, Izuku tugged on his shirt, face set in a firm frown. I'll go back to UA. But can I? I want to feel safe. Toshinori frowned, asking what he could do to help with that. The answer he got was not what he had been expecting at all. It moved him to tears nonetheless, and just like, a few more All Might hoodies got added to Izuku's ever-growing collection. Present day. Izuku tugged his hoodie up that little bit higher as Ida approached, saved only by the bell going off. His shoulders relaxed and some of the tension drained from his frame. He was relieved when Aizawa came into the classroom, as horrifying as he was to look at. His dad had assured him he was okay though, and Izuku knew the principal wouldn't have let him return if that wasn't the case. And besides, Aizawa would probably get better care at school than at home. At least there were people here to watch over him. Aizawa gave them a once-over before nodding. It's good to see you're all back. Because, for want of a better word, your fight isn't over. The UA Sports Festival is coming up. It's time to start preparing. There were various cheers from around the room, Izuku's nose scrunching up in confusion. Aizawa seemed to notice, calling their attention back with a simple look. As you all know, the UA Sports Festival is on par with what was once the Olympics. It's a chance that only comes 3 times during your time here, and it's also your only chance to be recognized. There'll be so many pro heroes in the crowd watching, Kaminari crowed. They're gonna choose their sidekicks based on what they see. Yeah, but once a sidekick, always a sidekick, Jiru drawled. Izuku frowned. That didn't seem ... fair. They'd only been in school 6 weeks. What did they expect them to have learned in that time? Unless it was more a way to judge natural potential, instinctive ability. That made more sense, at least in Izuku's mind. He wondered what a sports festival entailed. He went to raise his hand to ask when the bell signaling the end of homeroom went off. From there wasn't even time to think or talk about the sports festival. On the way to lunch though, that was easier. Izuku went to pry further, to ask Ada, who surely knew a lot, when he was stopped by footsteps behind them. Turning, Izuku let out a breath of air and smiled when he saw it was only Todoroki. His smile then dropped when he saw the way Todoroki was looking at him. It made his hackles rise and had him subconsciously shrinking in on himself. Mido. Oh, Todoroki, Uraraka said. Would you like tea? Young Izuku. The 5 students in the hallway jumped, tension snapping. Izuku was already perking up, slipping past Shinsu into where his dad was rounding the corner. Toshinori's hand settled on his shoulder while the other was holding onto a wrapped bento box. Good day, students. Izuku, I thought we might have lunch together. Izuku grinned. Yeah, he gave his friends and Todoroki a wave before taking his place at Toshinori's side. His dad ruffled his hair, leading him to his office. The bento got handed to him before Toshinori grabbed his own. Izuku carefully untied the wrapping and began to pick at the rice, accepting the cup of tea handed to him. Did Aizawa speak with you all about the sports festival? Izuku nodded. He did, but I don't really get it. How is it judged? He frowned. Wait, is ... is it judged? Does someone win? Toshinori chuckled. Yes, Izuku, there's a winner. But I'd also like to speak to you about it. Izuku paused, chopsticks halfway to his mouth, but Toshinori urged him to continue, something he reluctantly did. Satisfied, Toshinori went on. While the nature of the sports festival is a round robin with a variety of challenges on offer, the final round is always a battle royale. Izuku froze. Because of that, I was wondering if you would prefer not to participate. Can I do that? Izuku asked eagerly. It isn't required. It is, Toshinori said, shrugging. However, I am All Might, my boy. I may decide I don't want my son in the spotlight just yet. I may not want to risk him getting recognized. You understand, of course. Izuku more than understood, placing his lunch down in order to round the table and hug his dad properly. Toshinori laughed, though he drew him in all the same. He waved away Izuku's thank yous as though they were nothing. Really, my boy, you're full of nonsense. You don't need to thank me for this. But I want to, Izuku countered, slipping back to his chair and eating his lunch. He put his phone between them and together they watched various animal talk ticks. They both left lunch with bigger smiles on their faces. Todoroki completely wiped from Izuku's mind. What Izuku didn't need to know was that Aizawa and Toshinori had decided even before the day had started that Izuku would be excluded. After the way he'd reacted in battle training, it simply wasn't safe for the other students to put him in such a volatile environment, especially not so soon after USJ, when he was already walking around on eggshells. But Izuku didn't need to know that, and if Toshinori had his way, he never would. The end of the school day coincided with a small army of students standing outside 1A's classroom door. Izuku took it upon himself to hang back, jumping up onto the window ledge next to his desk and swinging his legs gaily. Shinsu caught at him and soon Uraraka was shuffling her way over, Asui on her heels. What's with all this? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Shinsu looked decidedly unimpressed. Dad says sometimes, if people do well at the sports festival, they can transfer into the hero course. This, he gestured to the door, is obviously other students trying to scope out the competition. MMK kinda annoying. Izuku mumbled, which was true. Asui seemed to agree, nodding. If they don't leave soon, I'll miss my train. Uraraka glanced around surreptitiously before whispering to Izuku, you could call your dad. He shook his head. I couldn't. Dad's gotta be impartial, you know. Uraraka nodded before turning to Shinsu. He already had his hands up. Handle it yourself. That's what you're training for, right? He sounded so much like Aizawa they all couldn't help but giggle. As it turned out, they didn't need to interfere. Didn't have to because Bakugo lost his patience before everyone else and plain and simple told those gathered, I'm headed to the top so get out of my way. Good ambition, poor execution. Still, it worked though and the crowd parted. Some of the students grumbled and complained and a blonde one ended up getting dragged away by someone with giant hands but slowly the crowd thinned out. No one left though. No one from one of that was, with the exception of Bakugo. Izuku thought that strange and even more so when Shinsu gave him a firm push between the shoulders and steered him towards the door but Shinsu was too late, Kaminari snagging Izuku's arm before he reached the hall. Hey, so you gotta tell us. Let me go. The room fell silent, Kaminari letting go like he'd been scalded. Sorry, Izuku said, drawing his arms in and rubbing them self-consciously. But I don't like being touched. You shouldn't touch people without their consent anyway, Shinsu added coolly, his height making him look all that more menacing. Izuku made to leave again only to find everyone else did too and okay, he could most likely guess what this was going to be about now. To make it worse, he had no one to blame but himself. Yo Midoriya, Kirishima called as they descended the stairs. Are you? He never got to finish. I am here. ... like a normal dad. 18 students of 1A died of mortification. One outright beamed. It wasn't hard to guess who the one was. Izuku came to his dad's side and accepted the offered hug. Toshinori then looked over his head. Your classmates are with you today. Were you all busy? Izuku shook his head. Some other students were blocking the doorway, but Bakugo moved them on. That's very good of him, Toshinori said. Make sure to thank him, if you haven't already. I will, Izuku promised, even if he really didn't want to. From behind them came a breath that sounded more like a backward sneeze and someone stammering out, holy shit. Izuku and Toshinori shared commiserating looks. I suppose, Toshinori said, that my relationship to Izuku can't be kept from you all anymore. However, I expect you all to breathe word of this to no one. There were several nods, as well as Todoroki excusing himself, muttering something about being late. Kirishima's hand shot in the air. All Might, sir. Are you why Midoriya's in our class? They both scowled, Kirishima taking a step back while Uraraka snickered. Of course not. It was Izuku's decision to attend UA. All I did was support him. He took the same exam you did and none of the examiners knew his relation to me. He has every bit as much right to be here as you do. Uraraka and I met at the exam, Izuku added shyly. She knows I didn't get special treatment. Uraraka nodded to confirm. Although you did abandon me to go talk to Bakugo. Izuku's jaw dropped before realizing she was joking. He folded his arms and pouted. That's not fair, Uraraka. I hadn't seen Bakugo since the sludge villain. Whoa, wait, you were involved in that too? Mina demanded, Izuku paling. I remember seeing that on the news. All Might saved 2 teenagers. Oh my god. Toshinori squeezed Izuku's shoulder. You hardly needed saving. Dad, Izuku whined in the faces on his classmates. This is too weird, Zero muttered. I'm going. That seemed to do it. Everyone else excusing themselves until there was only Izuku and Shinsu remaining. Toshinori flicked Shinsu a thumbs up. Come to the staff room with us. Are both my dads there? When I left, yes. Okay then. The next 2 weeks were filled with rigorous training. Everyone doing their best to prepare for the festival. Even Izuku, who wasn't competing, saw the opportunity for what it was and worked on increasing the output of his quirk. He was still getting the hang of it, could still only use it for a couple of seconds at a time before muscles and bones started creaking. He wasn't going to get left behind. He would train with his classmates and he would become stronger with them. Become strong enough to save them and others. Finally, the day rolled around, Izuku joining the others in the waiting room until his dad was ready to collect him, a mix-up with passes or something. Midoriya. Izuku's head jerked up from where he was absently scrolling through the apps on his phone, blinking at Todoroki. A hush fell over the room, all eyes drawn to the pair that were currently staring each other down. Todoroki leveled him a sharp look. Objectively speaking, I'm stronger than you, more capable. Izuku's head cocked to the side, even as others were crying out. You may be All Mights, but, or maybe because of that, I will beat you. Kirishima made a tiny, mildly impressed sound, but my dad said no. A beat. What? Todoroki demanded, hands balling into fists. Izuku's hands flailed. Dad said ... Well, that is, I'm not in the sports festival, Todoroki. Dad pulled me out for, privacy's sake. Todoroki blanked. Jiru, meanwhile, hooted with laughter. My dad said no. I love it. Midoriya, I'm going to quote that. You know that, right? Izuku felt as confused as Todoroki looked. All he could do was offer a hand. I can cheer you on ... if you'd like. Uraraka face-palmed while Takoyami looked like years had been taken off his life. Midoriya, that's not ... he doesn't. Izuku drew his hand back. Oh, well, good luck anyway. There was then a rap on the door and then Aizawa entered the room. All right, you lot, it's time. Make your way to the main stage. Midoriya, you're with me. Izuku gave his classmates one last wave before following Aizawa. His dad was around the corner, waiting as Toshinori rather than All Might. Aizawa handed him over before announcing he was heading to the commentator's booth. Toshinori slipped Izuku's lanyard over his head. Now shall we go watch the festivities? Yeah. Toshinori led them up the inner corridors of the stadium before finding where they were sitting. Izuku was fine with that, until the door opened and he saw it wasn't private seating and rather a booth filled with people he didn't know. Izuku was rearing back before he knew it, Toshinori swearing and shutting the door. He crouched down, taking Izuku's shoulders in his hands even as he tried to stabilize his breathing. It's all right, Toshinori murmured, thumbs massaging his collarbones. The fault is mine. I should have warned you. Would you like to go somewhere else? Izuku shook his head stubbornly. Who's out there? He'd expected an answer of heroes or old classmates and not Toshinori frowning and pulling up what looked like a map on his phone. He flipped it around, Izuku finding that every seat in the box had a name written above it. He gave his dad a questioning look. Toshinori shrugged. Increased security. He then shifted so he was crouching more comfortably, waving Izuku to his side. Now this is Snipe, he and I. And so Toshinori went on, for every person in the booth. Izuku felt his bottom lip tremble just a bit, touched. If his dad noticed, he never mentioned it, though there was something like a sad smile on his face. When done, he slipped his phone into his pocket, taking Izuku in a long look. Okay. Izuku nodded. Oh, okay. If you're ever not, Toshinori said as he pushed open the door, just let me know. There are festivities outside the arena as well. Although, there are probably more people there and more chaos. Toshinori seemed to realize that the same moment Izuku did, but he just sent his dad a smile. Their seats were easy to find, closest to the door and the most out of sight from everyone else. Izuku's eyes were drawn to the screen to his left that had the words Obstacle Course Race displayed in bright letters. It seems we missed the opening speech, Toshinori remarked, leaning forward ever so slightly to see better. But we haven't missed the start of the race. That sounds fun, doesn't it? Izuku nodded, frowning down at the arena. Not a lot of room though. Toshinori laughed. They'll go outside, my boy, don't worry. That ... didn't make Izuku feel much better, to be honest. Yes, confined space wouldn't allow for many challenges, but if his classmates were gone for the majority of the race, what would he be able to see? He guessed the cameras would help there, but even so, they wouldn't always show what he specifically wanted to see. Izuku was drawn out of his musings by Toshinori placing something in his lap. It turned out to be a notebook and a packet of pens in a multitude of colors. Izuku picked them up quizzically, Toshinori wagging a finger at him. Don't think I'm unaware of the mental notes you have on your classmates, Izuku. Better to write them down so you can study them later. More dangerous though, Izuku replied. A notebook like that would be a big help to any villain who stumbled upon it. Toshinori mulled that over before leveling him with a look. Then don't lose it. That was actually fair. Izuku nodding and opening it to the first page. He scrolled down name after name, fact after fact, until each classmate already had a near 2-page spread on them. Somewhere along the line the race had started and Izuku had noticed it in the back of his mind, but he wasn't truly paying attention. Not until Toshinori nudged him, guiding his eyes up. Shinsu's doing quite well. Izuku perked up there, squinting before grinning. He was too. A weapon very similar to Aizawa's snapping out and making crossing what looked like tightropes a breeze. I thought costumes weren't allowed. They aren't. But if it's something you made yourself or a support item, you may. Shinsu's never used that before, Izuku murmured, already eyeing up his technique and making jotted notes. I'm the only one that. Shinsu told me Aizawa trained him. I mean, the others maybe guessed, but it'd still surprise them. It would, Toshinori agreed. Izuku a little upset with the screen swapped to a different camera. There was a brief moment of Todoroki and Bakugo in the lead before it changed again. Izuku furrowed his brow. Dad, I don't wanna. This isn't meant to be mean. Toshinori raised an eyebrow. You rarely are, so what's this? Izuku shrugged, pen twirling between his fingers like others would a butterfly knife. You know fat gum. And ... and how his quirk works? I do, Toshinori said with a nod, lost. Yay Urazu ... it's kind of the same. Right. She uses her fat cells to create. Wouldn't. He shifted awkwardly. Wouldn't being slim put her at a disadvantage? Toshinori paused. He then grimaced. Well, I suppose you're right. However, it's hardly something we can bring up, is it? Or at least, not you or I. Izuku understood that much, nodding and turning back just in time to see. Izuku paused, eyes flying to his dad, but he looked just as confused. Something they'd have to look at later on the television or laptop because Izuku was happy. But he also had no idea as to how Uraraka had crossed the finish line first. Toshinori must have followed his line of thought, already having his phone open on a channel that was streaming the tournament. Izuku scrolled back a few minutes, infinitely relieved when the cameras had captured the moment because obviously teamwork had become the name of the game. Because Shinsu had caught up to Uraraka and Asui and muttered something. Not brainwashing, Izuku could tell that much, and then Uraraka was giving her determined frown. 1 second later she was lightening her own weight and Asui was launching her across the minefield into the finish line. Izuku couldn't help but grin. Well, Toshinori said, looking over Izuku's shoulder. That's some smart thinking they had there. Are you allowed to ... Does that count as an alliance? There's no rule against it, Toshinori assured. Izuku breathing a sigh of relief he didn't even know he was holding in. Toshinori reached out, tucking Izuku under his arm. He came easily, eyes locked on the field as the rest of the contestants started to filter in. Toshinori crossed his leg over his knee so Izuku could use it as a makeshift table, scribbling down notes and constantly flipping from one classmate to another. Izuku perked up when midnight announced the cavalry race, but once the field turned into chaos of choosing teams, he felt his attention wandering. Want to go for a walk? Toshinori asked. Izuku sunk down, shaking his head, embarrassed. Izuku, Toshinori scolded gently. We're sitting here so that we can move around should you want to. It doesn't bother me. Izuku chewed on his bottom lip. Could we ... Can we look at the festival outside? But Toshinori nudged him up, guiding him to the exit. Come, let's just observe. Seeing the battle was lost, Izuku pocketed his notebook and followed his dad, who had, the moment the door slid shut, swapped into his muscle form lest someone see him. Admittedly, this was one battle Izuku wasn't too bothered about losing. Sitting still wasn't always the most fun and it felt good to be moving around. Izuku hesitated before sliding his hand into Toshinori's. Toshinori just squeezed his in return, smiling at him softly. You're always allowed to ask for help, Izuku, he murmured, even if the help you need is something as simple as comfort. Izuku blushed but couldn't help a smile. He then came to a screeching halt, consequently dragging Toshinori back with him. Izuku could feel his eyes on him, but honestly, even Izuku didn't know why he'd suddenly become so uptight. All he knew was that there was danger and that it was close. Toshinori's mouth opened to ask when the number 2 hero, Endeavor, rounded the corner. It was like every alarm bell went off in Izuku's head. He immediately dropped Toshinori's hand and backed away as much as he could without being noticed. He also subtly pushed his dad forward so that he was noticed even less. A part of Izuku felt bad about doing that. Another part of him felt like it was his only option. He didn't know who'd be in more danger, Toshinori or Endeavor. Toshinori was midway through turning to him when he saw Endeavor, smiling jovially and pushing his thoughts about Izuku's behavior to the side for now. NG, good to see you, as always. He got a scoff in return. What do you want, Toshinori? He held his hands up. Nothing. I was simply passing this way. I see Shadow made it through the first round. He's very talented. That boy. You should be proud. NG didn't say anything, but the subtle change in his eyes had Izuku locking up further, all the more tempted to run away. He must have moved, or something, because NG locked onto the movement and Izuku shivered when their eyes met. And what is that? You can't seriously be wasting your time with these children, Toshinori. Izuku yelped as he was dragged forward, eyes scrambling upwards only to freeze at how clenched his dad's jaw was. This, he growled, is my son. He is never a waste of time. Nor is anyone here. Or have you forgotten your own son comes here? Enji's eyes narrowed. Nothing after the words my son having gone in. He took in Izuku's frame condescendingly. That is your son. Pathetic. Shouto could snap him in half. Toshinori's grip on his arm tightened almost painfully. Watch your words, Enji. I have never been anything but proud of Izuku and I won't stop now. Mind how you talk about him. Enji snorted. If he's so great, why is he not in this festival where he belongs? How can Shouto prove his worth if your boy won't even compete? Izuku and I prefer to keep our private lives exactly that. Private, Toshinori said coolly. And Izuku does not exist as a measuring stick for you or your expectations. He finally released Izuku's arm, hands settling between his shoulder blades instead and pushing him forward. Come Izuku, let's go. Izuku nodded, though he paused at Endeavor's side. Todoroki isn't you, Endeavor. And, to be honest, that's the only reason I can stand him. Enji's face turned into a scowl, but Izuku was already gone, making it around 2 corners before coming to a shuddering halt. Even as his dad was turning to him, Izuku was grasping the collar of his costume. Up, Toshinori balked in surprise before whisking Izuku up, sighing as the boy burrowed into his neck, frame shaking. It's all right, son. You did nothing wrong. Enji's always been that way. I hate him, Izuku growled out, refusing to budge when Toshinori tried to pry him off in response. He gave up, but it wasn't without a second sigh. Now that's going too far, Izuku. You cannot hate someone simply for being unpleasant. Izuku knew that, reluctantly nodding. He then tightened his grip, giggling when Toshinori squeezed him. I just don't like fire, he said after a long moment. Let's head back. Everyone should be ready to start now anyway. Toshinori nodded, setting him down. Indeed. Now tell me, Izuku, have you any thoughts on who might win? Izuku grinned, clucking his tongue. If I told you, that'd be cheating. But we aren't betting. Toshinori blustered. No, but Aizawa and Mike are, Izuku sung, skipping away and knowing it was true. I'm sure they roped you in too. Toshinori didn't answer, but the flush on his face told Izuku all he needed to. They got back in time to see the last few minutes of the cavalry race. Uraraka had formed a team with Asui, Shinsu, and Ajiro, and they had clearly done well all the way through and then succumbed when Todoroki and Ida decided at the same moment they had had enough. Ida had pulled off a new move Izuku had never seen before, the specifications of which hurriedly got written down, and Todoroki had used that moment to freeze Uraraka's entire team. Bakugo had tried to interfere and snatch the glory for himself, but Todoroki hadn't budged, and the siren blared before he could make a second attempt. The results came in and 16 names got displayed to take place in the final battle tournament. Todoroki, Shiro, Ajiro, Asui, Ibara, Kaminari, Ida, Hatsume, Uraraka, Yaoyorozu, Ashido, Aoyama, Shinsu, Takoyami, Bakugo, and Kirishima. There were only 2 names Izuku was unfamiliar with, which made them easy to pick out. He had to admit, he hadn't seen much of them in the initial race, so they must have brought out some good tricks to make it so far in the cavalry battles. Once the matches got started, they were fairly straightforward. Todoroki's display against Shiro was almost too much, while Uraraka and Yaoyorozu seemed much more evenly matched. It pained Izuku to see Bakugo go through Kirishima and end up against Shinsu, although, as much as he was loath to admit it, it was quite funny to see Bakugo look Shinsu dead in the eye, remove his hearing aids, and then blow them up. Shinsu didn't stand a chance after that. There was a break next, Izuku's eyes flying to the board. He frowned at the next match, putting his notebook down and getting to his feet. Izuku, Toshinori asked, slightly alarmed. He just smiled, shaking his head. I want to see Shinsu. That match was. Bakugo did good. His dad frowned before understanding filled his eyes. Go. I'm sure young Shinsu will be in the commentator's booth. Izuku nodded, having assumed the same himself. However, he had no intention of heading to the commentator's booth. No, instead he made his way down to the waiting rooms, snagging one particular student by the elbow. Todoroki Shouto turned to face him, pointedly removing the hand from his arm and raising an eyebrow. Yes, Midoriya, I need to talk to you. Todoroki frowned but nodded, allowing Izuku to lead them to a more deserted hallway. They stood facing off each other, Izuku wringing his hands together because he knew what he wanted to say but he didn't know how, but it needed to be said. He probably wasn't the right person to do this, but he was probably the only one that could. In the end, he could only say it. I know what your father does to you. Todoroki stiffened. I know what he does and what he did. To you, to your mother, to your siblings. And I know why. And I'm sorry. It was as though all the air got sucked from the corridor. For the longest time, neither of them moved, neither of them blinked, neither of them so much as breathed. And then Todoroki was drawing himself up to his full height, hands clenching and unclenching as though he was itching to grab Izuku by the collar. He didn't though, just spat at him. You have no idea what you're talking about. Izuku met his gaze levelly. Don't I? Do you want me to tell you what quirk marriages are? Or how you got that scar on your face? Todoroki physically reeled. How do you? Izuku shrugged, eyes dropping to the floor. 8-year-olds hear everything. It wasn't an explanation and yet it seemed to be enough. Todoroki exhaled loudly, a hand running through his hair shakily. So All Might doesn't know. Izuku was absolute there because he wasn't going to let his dad's name get smeared like that. If he did, it wouldn't still be happening. Todoroki snorted. I can handle it. He made to leave and then paused, eyebrows furrowed together. Midoriya, why even bring this up? And this was why Izuku had come down in the first place. Because, Todoroki, I'm sick of seeing him control you. That frown only deepened. He doesn't. It was Izuku's turn to snort and Todoroki didn't seem to like that at all. Then tell me, what is your quirk? You know what it is. Don't make out that you're a fool. Am I? Because I thought you were half hot, half cold, but all I'm seeing is ice. Where is your fire, Todoroki? Where is half your quirk? Todoroki's jaw set. I don't need it. I won't use his quirk. You're shaking. Izuku exploded without meaning to. Todoroki taking a step back in surprise. You're so cold you're shivering and you you don't think it's a problem. You can balance that out. You have fire, use it. You don't understand. Todoroki was yelling now too and Izuku didn't care, even as his eyes started to burn. Don't I? You think people haven't told me what to do my whole life? What I am. It was true, but he didn't mean it the way Todoroki took it. Even if it meant understanding seemed to finally sink in. Every time you don't use your quirk, all you're doing is you're letting him control you. Limit you. You're not Endeavor's son, you're Todoroki, you're just Shadow. And Shadow has his own quirk, his own dreams, his own goals. And Izuku swiped at his eyes. He shouldn't let Endeavor ruin those things for him. Todoroki said nothing, just watched Izuku cry in something akin to confusion. He then reached out, hand awkwardly laying on Izuku's shoulder. You're a strange child. Izuku laughed. You have no idea, Todoroki. The hand dropped, hanging listlessly between them instead. Todoroki swallowed before trying again. When I was a boy, I wanted to be a hero like All Might. Izuku smiled. Me too. So, he said, bouncing on his toes, when you go into your next match, don't worry about what your dad will think. Just do what you think All Might would want you to do. Todoroki raised an eyebrow. When? No, Izuku flushed, fists pumping the air. Plus ultra. It wasn't a laugh, but whatever he got from Todoroki was pretty damn close. Izuku could live with that. Izuku returned to his seat just before the next round of matches started. He faked a smile and assured his dad Shinsu was fine before drawing his knees up to his chest and watching intently. The first match was Todoroki against Ida, and honestly, Izuku thought the outcome fairly obvious. In a lot of ways, Todoroki was just too much. Then he started the match with a jerky step followed by a roar of fire, and it was well and truly over. The crowd exclaimed in wonder and Izuku grinned into his hoodie. Oh my, Toshinori breathed, a hand coming to settle in the center of Izuku's back. Comforting him, he realized, after he'd lied and said he had a fear of fire. I've never seen Todoroki use his flames before. Neither, Izuku admitted, flinching when Endeavor's voice boomed across the stadium. At the very least, present Mike sounded as impressed as Izuku felt. To his credit, Todoroki didn't spare him so much as a look, just turning on his heel and power walking to the exit. Izuku could see the words he formed on his lips though. Plus ultra. Izuku couldn't hide a snicker there, earning him an odd look from his dad. Izuku waved a hand, something he'd seen present Mike do, and it seemed to work because Toshinori dropped the subject without pressing. Useful trick. The next match was Uraraka and Bakugo, and it was brutal to watch. Izuku understood and he approved of both of their strategies, but it didn't make it any easier to watch. The match eventually swung Bakugo's way and Izuku couldn't help but be disappointed. He wanted to go and comfort Uraraka, but Asui was already standing at the entrance to the field when Uraraka left, so going down there would probably only make things more awkward. In the end, Izuku ended up just pulling out his phone and mindlessly toying with it until the field was reset. Shall we take a guess between us? Toshinori asked quietly as Midnight called the contestants to come forward. Who do you think will win? Izuku tilted his head to the side, considering. Todoroki, he said eventually. You think? He doesn't seem to have the drive young Bakugo does. He doesn't have the temper either. That's also true, my boy. The match then started, all conversation being put on hold. Todoroki kicked off with an overpowering ice attack, except, against Bakugo, it wasn't so overpowering and they were soon at a stalemate. They to and fro ed before Izuku noticed the same thing Todoroki seemed to. Bakugo had overexerted himself in his battle against Uraraka. His explosions were becoming weaker, less frequent. They were still very much neck and neck, but one all-out attack from Todoroki would win it for him. And then he saw Endeavor. Todoroki all but stopped mid-attack. eyes locked on where his father was standing at the edge of the stands. Izuku could envision the horrible smile on his face, the stupid pride that his son was about to win to bring him more glory. Todoroki knew it as well as he did, which was undoubtedly why, with his eyes never leaving his father's, he took a deliberate step back, then another, then two more, until he was out of bounds. Silence flooded the arena. Bakugo ... wins, Mike hesitantly announced. Bakugo and Endeavor gave inarticulate screams of rage there, and there was no doubt this time. Todoroki was smiling. In the stands, Izuku was too. He may have lost on paper, but it had never felt more like a victory. Hanging the last of his ironing up, Toshinori crossed the apartment to Izuku's room. Just inside the doorway, Red Bean was looking balefully at the bed while Izuku was. Okay, Izuku was apparently backflipping onto his bed and then trying to grab his covers in what seemed like an extremely unnecessary maneuver. Izuku, what are you doing? I saw it online. Shinsu sent it to me, Izuku said, as though that was an explanation, even as he scrambled back to his feet and reset the covers. Come now, the bed isn't made for that. It's fine, I'm really light, Izuku argued, grinning as he flipped again. He fumbled grabbing the sheets though, groaning and clambering to his feet once more. Izuku froze, hastily sitting down and bowing his head in shame. Toshinori sighed, coming to crouch in front of him and guiding his chin up. I wasn't angry about the bed, he promised. I think I dismissed you earlier. Or perhaps misunderstood. Izuku frowned. When? You told me you hated Endeavor, Toshinori said, feeling Izuku tense under his hands. And I scolded you on that, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized. I've never heard you use that word before. I don't think you're the type to hate without reason. So, Izuku, I'm listening now. Has Endeavor ever done anything to you? Anything that hurt you, made you feel this way? To me, Izuku repeated, waiting for Toshinori to nod before shaking his head. No, I'm sorry. I was ... out of line. He's not the nicest, and I thought heroes should be, but ... like you said, everyone's different, right? They are, Toshinori agreed, slapping his thighs before pushing himself up. Now go, try that again. Let's see if you can't do it. Izuku outright beamed, bouncing up and all but wearing the poor bed out before he mastered the move. He then made Toshinori film it before sending it on to Shinsu. Toshinori then ushered him to bed, flipping the light out when Izuku was settled and heading to his own room. He didn't need to know that Izuku had lied, or, at least, hidden the truth. After all, Endeavor had never hurt him. Others, though, well, Toshinori had never asked about that, had he? The sports festival gave them 2 days off to recover, which Izuku thought was nice even if he of all people certainly didn't need it. He hadn't set one foot in the ring, but he was happy to be home, doing his homework in a designated safe space and sporadically flicking through TV channels when his dad wasn't home. Of course, they watched television together, but when he was home, Izuku more preferred to talk. Plus, it was nice to pad after and go throughout the house and listen to her stories, whether it was something she'd done at home, an interaction at the store, or even something she'd seen. She assured him he was never a bother and Izuku liked it. But then it was back to school. And the sports festival was the talk of the neighborhood. The usually quiet train carriages were filled with people comparing articles and muttering to and fro about what they'd seen. The third years garnered most of the attention, but the comments about the potential of the first years was usually always there too. There was a lot of talk about Todoroki, though Izuku couldn't tell if he was liked or not. People liked his power, but not his attitude. That made Izuku more than a little displeased. Todoroki barely showed any emotion at all. That he showed even the slightest hint of pettiness was an improvement, to say the least. He must have been scowling subconsciously, because had Toshinori asked him if he'd wanted to move, and from there Izuku schooled his features and turned his attention to his phone. Splitting at the staff room, Izuku collected Shinsu before they made their way down to the classroom together. The room was already half full, and Izuku didn't think that odd until he realized that Ada was there and that he hadn't greeted them in his usual fashion. Breaking away, Izuku approached Ada's desk, rapping on it lightly to get his attention. Ada shot up, flushing to his collarbones. Forgive me, Midoriya. I didn't see you. Are you okay? Ada balked, hastily pushing his glasses up his nose. If I gave you that impression, then Izuku huffed, wincing slightly at the volume. Why, yes or no, Ada? Yes, of course. Then okay, Izuku said, shrugging his backpack higher before crossing the room to his designated seat. He did so mere seconds before Aizawa walked in, and it was like silence swamped the room. It was an awesome presence to have, Izuku wasn't going to lie. All right, Aizawa said, a stack of papers in his hand. Since the sports festival is over and you've gotten your first foray into the spotlight, internships. Each of you has a file here. Some of you have many recommendations. Some only have agencies accepting interns. You have until Friday to pick an agency. You start Monday. Because of that, you have a very important job to do today. Izuku was torn between frowning and perking up, but he didn't get time to decide because the door to Wano was abruptly flung open, Midnight standing there with a big grin on her face. That's right, children, time to pick your hero names. Izuku clapped his hands over his ears, gaining a sympathetic look from Uraraka. He smiled at her as best he could before everyone quietened down and the hands were removed. You can change your name before graduating, Aizawa was saying. However, usually whatever you choose first sticks, so think carefully. Midnight's here to tell you whether your names are appropriate or not. You have 15 minutes. Midnight started handing out whiteboards they could write their proposed names on. Izuku mindlessly watching her as she walked up the first aisle. While he'd always wanted to be a hero, he'd never actually thought it within the realm of possibility. Choosing a hero name had seemed to be playing into the fantasy too much, so Izuku had never let himself do it. Now though, well, he'd toyed with it, he wouldn't lie. He also couldn't say he had one he liked either. Oi, Midoriya. Izuku turned, a little surprised to hear Bakugo of all people addressing him. He was also a little apprehensive. Why yes, Bakugo, I got a hero name for you. He slapped down a piece of paper, Izuku written on it. Look, I can make this into Deku. Which suits you, you know, cause you're fucking useless. Izuku didn't know what happened next. All he knew was that a few seconds later his name was being screamed by several other students as he pinned Bakugo to the floor, one hand forcing his face into the floor while the other pulled his tie tight enough to have it crushing his windpipe. Izuku was, quite literally, yanked back by Aizawa's capture weapon. He was hurted against the windows, slumping to the ground even as Bakugo was struggling for breath and grasping at his neck a few feet away. Aizawa sent Midnight to deal with that while he crouched in front of Izuku. Izuku could feel his head being guided up, but he couldn't see anything, could only feel panic, could only feel the walls closing in, could hear the lock sliding shut once more. Midoriya, Aizawa swore, turning around and snapping his fingers at Ida. Go to the staff room and get All Might. Holy shit, Bakugo, what did you do? Kaminari hissed, and yes, Aizawa would like an answer to that too. I didn't do anything. Bakugo spat, Aizawa just raising an eyebrow. Alright, I called him useless, Deku, whatever, but still. As much as Aizawa hated to admit it, Bakugo was right. However, he also wasn't blind to the way Midoriya had flinched even in the midst of his panic attack at the name Deku. Clearly that was a trigger he'd like to have known about. Although, maybe Midoriya didn't know about it either. Not if his response was this. Teach, Kirishima said, crouching down beside him and gesturing to Midoriya. Can I'm kinda used to this. Aizawa wanted to point out that he was too, but then, better for his students to show their skills and bond, even if this was a strange way to bond. He stepped aside, letting Kirishima do his best to calm Midoriya down, coaching him through breathing techniques and pressing a hand to his chest. Uraraka hovered close while Ashido and Kaminari remained around Bakugo, glancing between the two in confusion. It felt like forever, but was probably only 10 minutes before Toshinori turned up, coming in and flying to Midoriya's side. His large hand practically engulfed Midoriya's shoulder, voice low and soothing, something Aizawa had very rarely been privy to. Midoriya went to him like a moth to a flame. Toshinori took him, but not without a hesitant edge and a cautious look around the room. He got up but didn't let Midoriya scramble himself up, instead just kept him to his side. He gave Aizawa a nod, holding up his phone. Fill me in, if you would, Aizawa. Aizawa gave a nod in return, and with that, the pair left. The rest of the class didn't want to settle after that, though they reluctantly did so at the look he gave them. Nimiri was also giving him a look, but Aizawa was very much ignoring that, at least for now. This was something they could discuss later, in the staff room, away from prying eyes and listening ears. Well, I'm sure no one wants to come up with hero names after that, he said, grabbing a piece of chalk and heading to the board. So, naturally, Midoriya will be dealt with by the principal, and no, being All Might's son won't let him get off. That being said, Bakugo, you were also out of line. Bakugo opened his mouth to protest, but Aizawa cut him off. Midoriya was simply sitting in class. There was no need for you to call him useless. I'm tempted to classify it as bullying. And bullying is not tolerated at UA. Bakugo slumped down. A muttered he started it under his breath, which no one seemed to believe. After all, they'd all heard Bakugo get Midoriya's attention first. Plus, Midoriya wasn't one to start fights. Aizawa then brought their attention back, tapping the board. But you've also learnt that, for Midoriya, the name Deku seems to be a trigger. He wrote Midoriya's name up, the word Deku underneath it. I think he'd prefer it if we didn't use that name around him. Or rather, if you do, you'll get suspended. There was silence before Kirishima raised a hand. Aizawa called on him, Kirishima staring at his desk before taking a deep breath. Can I, please don't ask me about middle school. Ashido's mouth opened in protest before looking at Kirishima and hunkering down, her eyes suddenly flooding with something like understanding. Though, I didn't. I thought. Sorry. He gave a tiny smile, and just like that, Kaminari's hand went up too. So I know I'm dyslexic, so maybe don't call me out on it. If I want to talk about it I will, but kind of as a general rule, don't bring it up. Aizawa wrote that down too before finding a few more pieces of chalk and leaving them at the front, stepping away. You have until the end of this period to write down anything you'd prefer not to be mentioned on the board. At the end, everyone will either photograph it or write down a copy. From then on, bringing up any of the topics with the person in question will get you in trouble. Do you understand? His class nodded as a whole. Aizawa then left them to it, watching them all do that awkward wait until the first student got up. From there was confidence, people filing up one after the other. Some didn't have anything to write. Some hesitated before quickly wiping something off, while others had a rather extensive list. Aizawa's eyebrows shot up when Todoroki pinned down my mother and then Endeavor. Interesting. Just before the bell rang, the door slid open once more. Everyone whipped around, and that only made the figures shrink down more. Aizawa crossed his arms. Well, Midoriya, Izuku, Yagi, it can't shake the panic out of him. I know that, Mike. Just give me some space. Present Mike held his hands up and backed away, giving Toshinori space as he came back down to Izuku's eyeline. The hands on his shoulders were firm but grounding more than restricting. It was enough to allow Izuku to draw in a single breath before fear dragged him back down. His dad swore, calling his name a few more times before suddenly making a noise of discovery. The next thing Izuku knew, his noise-canceling headphones were jammed over his ears and his ever-faithful jazz playlist was playing through them. Izuku drew in a shuddering breath, slowly caving in on himself as oxygen filled his lungs and adrenaline left. Toshinori guided him down, maintaining a point of contact. It was a good 15 minutes before Izuku was able to lift his head and actually have what his eyes were seeing come into focus. Izuku, what happened? He couldn't hear over the music, but Izuku's lip-reading skills were adequate enough. He was infinitely grateful though for the pen and paper that got shoved in his hands, rather than being required to answer out loud. He called me Deku. I don't know what happened after that. Sorry. Toshinori's lips thinned, waving a hand over, and then Principal Nezu was there. He too scrutinized the note, giving Izuku a look before shaking his head. Izuku's stomach plummeted, drawing his knees in closer. He shakily removed the headphones, smiling as best he could at his dad. It's okay. It isn't, but it's a tricky one to pass blame on. I should have tested him further, Nezu agreed, eyeing Izuku up critically. I should have tested him for triggers before enrolling him. Toshinori nodded. I think this is one instance in which we were all taken off guard. Nezu looked to Izuku. Did you know, young Midoriya? He shook his head. I haven't. No one said that name in ... I in a long time. That got him a satisfied hum. Unfortunately, even so, this is the second time Midoriya has assaulted a classmate. While I understand his circumstances, Toshinori, I can't endanger the lives of other students for him. Principal, Toshinori spluttered, but Nezu made him back down with a look. Toshinori, Aizawa's told me what he did. Izuku would have stranged Bakugo had he not stepped in. That isn't acceptable, conscious or not. He can't control what his subconscious does, Toshinori argued. Then maybe he shouldn't be here. Silence fell, Toshinori looking thunderous. Izuku sighed, shifting onto his knees and laying a hand on his dad's arm. Dad, it's ... it's okay. We always knew. School was always going to ... it was a risk. His own gaze dropped to his hands. I'm a risk. And that's ... it isn't fair. Izuku's right, Nezu said, nodding once. And it's very mature of him to be able to admit it. You also understand, at the same time, that I accepted Izuku into the school knowing his history. There's also blame on my part as well, which is why he'll be suspended for 2 days and a public apology made to Bakugo. Izuku blinked in surprise. But I can't take all the blame, Nezu finished for him. But be warned, Izuku, your behavior won't be excused forever. With that, he left. Izuku slumping down, body exhausted. Toshinori cradled his head, eyes sympathetic. I think, young Izuku, no matter how that went, I would have found it unfair. Izuku grimaced. I don't think there's a manual on ... this. He pointed to himself callously. But Principal Nezu's right. I can't excuse what I did, even if I can explain it. Toshinori nodded, however reluctantly. Well, best head to class then and get this apology over. You're right to get home alone. Inko will be there. I can do it, Izuku promised, pushing himself up and very much avoiding the looks of the other few teachers gathered in the lounge. He made his way back down to the classroom, sliding the door open just before the bell. Every head snapped his way, and Izuku had never wanted to hide more than he did right now. Well, Midoriya. Izuku took a single step, hands wringing together in front of him. Principal Nezu has. I'm suspended for 2 days and I have something to say to Bakugo. Yes, I think so, Aizawa murmured, waving him in. And Bakugo might have something to say to you too. Izuku frowned there but got no answer. Seeing that wasn't going to change, he crossed the room, coming to a stop and bowing lowly in front of Bakugo. I apologize for my actions. They were unbecoming of a UA student, a hero in training, and a person in general. I showed a lack of self-control which could have ended poorly had Aizawa not stepped in. You have my sincerest apologies. Bakugo snorted, scowling at the window. Yeah, accepted and all that bullshit. A pointed cough from the front. And sorry about calling you ... that wasn't nice or whatever. Oh, that's ... that's okay. Is it? Aizawa challenged, Izuku flushing. Well, no, but then don't say it is. Aizawa slapped a file in his hand. Write your hero name on that and choose an agency by the time you return on Friday. Also, snap a picture of the board and mention nothing on it. If you want to add anything, now's the time to do it. Izuku was lost until he took the chalkboard in and that was something he could work with, something thoughtful. His eyes skimmed over all the words written down before finding his own name. The word Deku scrawled underneath it in Aizawa's handwriting. Swallowing thickly, Izuku picked up a piece of chalk, adding scars under it because he didn't want to answer those kinds of questions. He got halfway through writing villains before rubbing it off hastily because that raised too many questions. Too many questions indeed. Izuku, yams or lotus root with dinner. Izuku pondered for a moment before snapping up the lotus root. Inko smiled, ruffling his hair before pushing the trolley onwards. Since he wasn't at school, he may as well join Inko on her shopping trip. It got him out of the house and kept his mind off what had happened. Is there anything you want in particular? Inko asked as they made their way down another aisle. Izuku shook his head maybe a little too quickly, Inko frowning at him. I really don't. He stammered, hands waving madly. Inko waggled a finger at him, brow pinched. Well, tell me if you do. God knows you never ask for anything. Do you actually even like what I cook? I do, Izuku protested, pouting. Then tell a woman, or at least give me a hint, she sniffed, pushing the trolley forward a little more forcefully than usual. She then relented, sighing and tucking a strand of hair behind his ear. Hero names, yes, that's what you were doing at school. Trying, Izuku said, momentarily stunned from the subject change. But I didn't. Well, I don't have any. Yet, what about choosing the title part first? Inko suggested, scrutinizing the back of two different curry mixes. Title, the symbol of peace, All Might. The winged hero, Hawks. They all have a title that sums them up. What sums you up? Izuku chewed on that, standing on the trolley to grab the spices that were just too high up for Inko. Nothing. Inko swatted him. I don't. Well, what do you want to be? Smiling. The word escaped him before he realized it, Inko smiling softly. Or bright. When people see me, they don't feel scared anymore. Nightlight. Inko teased, pinching him when he actually seemed to consider it. Oh Izuku please, I was joking. But I like it. Izuku huffed, holding his hands up when Inko just looked at him. Then maybe. Smile bright. No, Izuku giggled, waiting as Inko skimmed down the list one more time before nodding and steering them towards the checkouts. If I keep people safe ... what about keep safe? Inko hummed, unconvinced. It's a nice pun but I don't think so Izuku. He accepted that, tucking his hands into his hoodie pocket, all but drowning in the warm, yellow fabric. Izuku froze, hand snapping out. Sunflower. Inko jumped a little at the contact. Sunflower. The bright hero, Sunflower. Inko beamed. I love it Izuku. She placed the last things onto the conveyor belt. Izuku rocking on his heels. Inko, can we ... can we have katsudon? Midoriya Izuku, you have 10 seconds to get the ingredients. Izuku ran. So, any telling how many of them there are? Tsukachi sighed, adding another piece of paper to the ever-growing stack and giving Gran Torino a woeful look. This so-called League of Villains is hard to pin down. So far we only have 2 confirmed members even though a good 30 were involved in the USJ incident. There's no telling how high their numbers really are. Gran looked over the folder. Tsukachi was Shigaraki and Kurogiri. And a warp quirk, huh? That's pesky. Quite. Not many defense systems work against a quirk like that. Gran agreed, rubbing his chin in thought. You thought they were gonna attack UA before they did though, right? Who was it that gave you that tip-off? Tashinori's boy. He had a hunch that. Tashinori's boy. Tsukachi froze, wide-eyed. No, that's ... did I? That wasn't what I meant. Sure kid. And against his jet quirk, Tsukachi had no chance. Hell, even though he'd slowed down with age, Gran was more than confident he'd make it to Tashinori's before the officer could even make a phone call. Reaching the building, there was really only one option. It was doubtful Tashinori would even let him in, so through the balcony doors it was, even if it meant smashing a glass pane or two. They could always be replaced. Gran had never felt more satisfied than the moment he saw Tashinori's terrified face. GG gra. You think you could hide from me, Toshi? Thwack, thwack. Gran came to a stop as quickly as he'd started, body locking up. He didn't have to look to know. One knife in his left shoulder, another in his right abdomen. And across from him, partially hidden in the shadows but with another knife glinting, was a boy. His eyes were wild and his stance showed Gran wouldn't get another chance. The third knife would end his life. Izuku, Toshinori cried, flinging a hand out. Don't. It's all right. Put the Toshinori, don't. Tell him who I am. He'll decide for himself if it's all right. I came into his territory and attacked you. He reacted brilliantly, given the circumstances. Circumstances which could change in an instant. Gran Torino could tell that much. He watched Toshinori nod before turning to the child he'd called Izuku. Hands flat, placating. Izuku, this is my old mentor, Gran Torino. He's a hero. He trained me after my own mentor passed away. Why did he come through the window? I admit I'm scared of him and probably wouldn't have let him in. Wrong move. Izuku skulked forward, voice painfully level. Why are you scared of him? He didn't hurt me, Toshinori said, Gran watching as that made Izuku pause. I promise you, Izuku, he never hurt me. But, the poor boy looked confused. But you're scared of him. Where had Toshinori gotten this one? I am, came the agreement. But not for any reason other than he pushed hard and I didn't like that. I was used to a softer approach. Izuku looked between them for the longest time before lowering the blade. Toshinori breathed a sigh of relief, phone already in his hand and dialing recovery girl. Gran Torino gave Izuku a smile, but it got him nothing. The knife, Gran noticed, was very much still in his hand. His grip may have relaxed, but he hadn't stepped down. Not at all. Gran decided to address Toshinori instead. When Tsukachi told me you had a kid, didn't pick for you to have one like this. He eyed Izuku up before grinning. I like him. Quick reflexes, sharp mind, hero course. Well, why yes. Buddies. Hey kid, you'll wanna intern under me. No, damn brat. As it was, Izuku did end up interning under Gran Torino. After recovery girl had come and dealt with the injuries Izuku had so politely dished out, they'd actually gotten to talk, and while Izuku wasn't perhaps the most keen, he could appreciate that Gran had taught his dad how to use his quirk. In that respect, he could probably teach Izuku to better his. Plus, Toshinori seemed very into the idea of Izuku going with someone he knew rather than an agency he knew nothing about. Izuku had to agree with that too. Of course, there was the catch. If Gran was going to take him on, he had to have the full story. Izuku reluctantly agreed. And so Gran got told the story, making several understanding noises and waiting until the tale was over before demanding names. Izuku sighed wearily, passing them over and knowing that nothing would come of it regardless. After all, nothing had yet. Friday morning then rolled around and Izuku's completed forms were in his hand as he made his way to UA. Toshinori was already gone, called out at 3 in the morning for an emergency that required all might. Izuku had seen him off and then waited in the kitchen all morning until the clock had struck 7:30. Hero callouts took a long time. That was one thing Izuku had come to learn. However, it meant he was walking to school through the student entrance, rather than the teacher's entrance he usually went through. There were more people here, but none of them seemed to notice Izuku, not, at least, until a voice came from behind him. Midoriya. Izuku recognized that voice anywhere, turning and giving Todoroki what he hoped was a smile. Hi Todoroki. They hadn't spoken since the sports festival and honestly, Izuku didn't know where they stood. Todoroki gave him a nod, reaching out to tap Izuku's file. It was significantly thinner than Todoroki's, to which Izuku felt no surprise. Izuku could only imagine how many offers Todoroki had gotten. Which agency did you pick? Izuku flipped his over, opening to the page. Here, Gran Torino's. Torino, Todoroki repeated. I'm not familiar with the name. He was my dad's mentor, Izuku explained, smiling and snapping the folder shut. I thought, since our quirks are so similar, it would help to work under him. Todoroki remained silent, mouth opening just as Izuku went to leave. He waited another excruciating minute, Todoroki looking away before finally saying, would he be willing to take on another applicant? Izuku had to stop his jaw from dropping. Pardon. Todoroki shrugged a shoulder. I realized, at the sports festival, or rather you made me realize, I want to be the #1 hero. Not for my father's sake, but for my own. It makes sense to intern under the man who trained All Might, don't you think? It did, Izuku realized. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. Hang on, I'll ask. He dialed the number, yanking the phone away when it got answered. What? Who is this? Gran, it's me, Izuku, he said. Hi, my friend is. He would like to intern under you too. Do you? I ain't a community service. I know but what's the kid's name? Izuku winced. Todoroki Shadow. There was a pregnant pause. Enji's brat. ... Yes. Deafening laughter came down the line. Kid, send him my way. I'll gladly take him, you hear? Thank you, Izuku said, hanging up and grinning at Todoroki. So, yes. Todoroki nodded, opening his file and copying the details from Izuku's application. He then paused, pen hovering above Izuku's name. Sunflower. Izuku nodded. And yours? Todoroki scrunched his nose up, holding the page up. The freezing flame, frostburn. I'm not satisfied. Aizawa said you can change it later, Izuku reminded, doing some thinking of his own. I mean, shouldn't it be ... fun? Todoroki blinked at him, Izuku waving his hands madly. And not fun, but I guess a name like Frostburn would scare villains. He didn't continue, but Todoroki did. But it may give the wrong impression to civilians. Izuku hunkered down. And maybe, he whispered. And you? Todoroki pressed. What would you suggest? Izuku blinked, very much not liking to be put on the spot. Climate change. Thermostat. I haven't thought about it. The bell then rang, Izuku yelping and grabbing Todoroki's wrist, hauling him along. See, come on, Frostburn. We'll be late. They were, but the detention was worth it. And so was the hastily scribbled name on Todoroki's form, Thermostat, the climate change hero. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification. So when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.